The cold night wind and the moonlight peeking through the clouds and the mercenary's senses all whispered to him of the same place. Looking at his subordinate, Darius said that Raon had done a good job this time too. Ron, who was kneeling, looked up at Mr. Darius and agreed with him. Raon knew very well that today he would die at the hands of Darius Robert. The Lord spoke again and said that Raon had performed excellently worthy of his position as Shadow Leader, and now his family had begun to evolve. With his eyes closed, Raon replied that he was only doing what he had to do. Darius then asked if Raon thought the shadows needed freedom. Raon replied that it was enough for the shadows to follow their master's orders, and they didn't need things like thoughts, feelings, or hearts. Darius agreed with him and added that despite this, why did Raon act according to his will? At that moment, the Lord clenched his fists. His eyes began to glow blue, and Darius clarified how Raon was able to free himself from mind control. Sweat ran down Raon's face. Mind control is how the Rorith family controls a group of mercenaries called the Shadows. After kidnapping or abducting young children, they turn them into mercenaries ready to devote their lives to doing the dirty deeds. In other words, they make them the dogs of the family. Robert Raon was also under mind control, but ironically during one of his missions. He managed to break the cruel shackles. Raon had one thought in his mind. How did Darius know? And he decided to ask. With a flick of his finger, Darius replied that all mercenaries, including him, have two collars. The first is a mind control that Raon had somehow dropped. With a snap of his fingers, Darius said it was the second. Something started to happen, and Raon covered his mouth with his fist because it was filling with blood. Falling on all fours, Raon grabbed his chest and screamed at the pain. He felt like his heart was being sawed apart. Smiling, Darius said it was a raging worm. He explained that the creature placed inside Raon was now eating his heart at his command. Raon clenched his teeth and shouted that it wasn't enough for Darius to control his mind and feed him a raging worm and act like he was the embodiment of justice. Raon asked Raon if he'd gotten rid of the mind control now, and he said that he'd spent his whole life wearing the mind control. He said that people wear masks all their lives, and that Raon's mask was only thicker and more special than the others. Raon was kidnapped at an age when he couldn't even remember anything. He was raised as a mercenary and a hunting dog. Raon lived without a heart or emotions. Then, by chance, he had the chance to master the Ring of Fire technique, and as if to prove its power, he was able to break free of mind control. It seemed that he would finally be able to step out of the shadows and be free. Raon believed it and hoped so, but what he got was not freedom. What a sin Raon had committed that he should die in vain. His mouth was drooling as he continued to lean on his elbows to keep from falling down. Raon thought that he could not end up like this. Raon was still holding onto his heart, but he thought that if he was going to die here anyway, Darius asked him how he could get up. Standing up, Raon decided that he would at least give him a hand or a wound before he died. Attacking Darius, Raon shouted that he was not going to meet his end in shame. However, Darius drew his weapon and swung one hand and blew Raon's head off before he could reach him. Standing in front of the decapitated body, Darius thought that he had abandoned Raon. He was outraged that this trash had not only broken free of mind control, but had managed to attack him in pain. Raising his wounded arm, Darius said aloud how many years it had been since he had last been wounded. Then he thought that since his hunting dog was now dead, he shouldn't worry about it. As he left, he ordered the other mercenaries to remove Raon's body. Appearing out of the darkness, they immediately began to carry out the order. Darius is called one of the strongest warriors on the continent. It's only natural that Raon couldn't defeat him. Raon resents that he was forced to live this life for no reason. He resents that he was Darius's plaything all along. Maddeningly frustrated that he couldn't perfect the Ring of Fire he'd been given by fate. In his mind, Raon asked God or even the devil to help him get revenge on Darius by any means necessary. Suddenly, a pendant shone around his neck. A voice said that Raon was chosen by Wrath. Wrath descended into his body, and the chosen vessel died. Standing over the crib, the girl held a rattle in her hands and asked Raon to look at her. The baby stretched his arms to her and was saying something that pleased the girl very much. After picking him up, the girl pressed the baby to herself and, calling him a tender ray, asked who he was so beautiful. The girl who hugs him is called Sylvia. Though he still finds it hard to believe, Raon was reborn as this woman's child. In addition, he retains all the memories of his past life as a mercenary. At first, he thought it was just a dream, and for 100 days he had been sleeping, but he didn't understand why the dream didn't end. Sylvia went to the window and said that the weather was nice outside today. She wanted the head to come home as soon as possible. Sylvia knew that when the head came back, he would give their Ray a beautiful name. Looking at her, Raon thought that he could not continue to bear the name he had been called before he was born. However, it had been 100 days and the head had not appeared yet, and Raon assumed that he was very busy. After his rebirth, he had not had a chance to explore much, but Raon realized that this was the home of the rich and the noble. He thought that if he was to be reborn, it would be better to be born into a rich and powerful family. Because the vengeance and rage that had enveloped his heart before his death was still with him, but there was no hurry. Since Raon has only lived in this room so far, he doesn't know where he is or where he belongs. He knows nothing at all. As for the Ring of Fire technique he learned in his previous life, Raon has not yet mastered it properly, so he must wait and wait. He's a mercenary who's been called the best in the history of the Robert family, and for the day he finally gets his revenge on Darius, Raon is willing to hold back as long as he can. The house is so big and luxurious, and it seems to be even higher than the famous one. Suddenly, a maid burst into the room and called out Mistress Sylvia's name. She said that the head of the house was coming to see them. Sylvia hurriedly interrogated her father. From this, it was clear that the head was Rauna's grandfather. Stammering, Sylvia said she had to prepare something for the head of house, but the maid said it was too late because he had arrived. The doors of the corridor opened, and the servants loudly announced that the head of the house had arrived. Raon was familiar with this power. Everyone felt a very strong pressure from the mere presence of this man. Little Raon could not believe what he had been told. For if his assumptions were correct, this man, with hair as golden as the sun and eyes as red as flames, he was an old man with a cold as an iceberg temperament. The master of the House of Sieghart, one of the leading houses on the continent, the doom-bearing king of the north, Glenn Sieghart. Looking at his grandfather, Raon realized that he was reborn into the strongest family on the continent. Sylvia offered to take the child in her father's arms. Taking the boy, Glenn said that from today on, the child's name was Raon. It seemed ironic. In Glenn's opinion, Raon, according to the meaning of his name, would live in a quiet shadow as if he did not exist. Night fell. Looking up at the ceiling, Raon wondered if everyone was asleep. Rising, he thought that now that the depressing 100 days were over, he finally had a chance. All this time, he had always wanted to sleep, and when Raon woke up, Sylvia was always there, so he couldn't use his mana or do anything else. He was glad that at least he was sleeping in his own bed, so he tried to start. With his hands folded and concentrated, Round activated the Ring of Fire. The usual cultivation techniques on the continent involved drawing mana from nature through breathing, and then coordinating the aura in Dantian. But with the Ring of Fire that Round was fortunate enough to receive, things were completely different. Like a magician creating a circle of mana, it formed a ring on the heart. It allows for the development of stamina and physical abilities, as well as increasing spiritual strength and mana sensitivity. These are ideal conditions. Moreover, the presence of the Ring of Fire cannot be determined even by such a transcendent as Dearest, which is undoubtedly another plus. If you use the Ring of Fire to develop your body and spirit and at the same time, master the techniques of the Sword of Sieghart, revenge on this Darius Robert would no longer be just a dream for Raon. Looking at his hands, Raon thought that the mana circuit in his body must be filled with a terrible coldness. Diving inside, Raon found clogged places in about 9 pieces. It was serious at this rate, the entire circuit can be blocked, and in that case, Raon could die. So he decided that he needed to break through it using the Ring of Fire. At the same time, the purity of this cold was quite high, and it would be a pity to get rid of it so easily. Raon thought of connecting it to the fire current. Falling back on his pillow, Raon realized that he had done a little bit of cultivation and was already tired. He cursed and thought that he shouldn't fall asleep, but his eyes closed at the same second. It was a new day, and Raon was crawling around humming to himself, and Sylvia was standing next to him with a rattle and cheering him up. It seemed to him that it was too hard to play. He was a grown man inside, and it seemed that he would die while he pretended to be a baby. Sylvia smiled as she lifted him into her arms and said that Raon was really good and could do anything. Raon thought it was easier to tolerate the cold energy. Sylvia continued to chatter under her breath as suddenly someone called out to her. When she looked around, she first shouted uncle and then corrected herself to saint. The old man smiled and asked what kind of saint he was and asked her to call him uncle. Looking at him, Raon thought he might be the saint in rags. The divine power of the healing arts in them, his abilities reached the very heavens. Approaching Sylvia, the old man said he heard she had a baby, and so he stopped by on his way. Lifting Raon up, the old man said that the baby has golden hair and red eyes for the first time since Sylvia was born. The uncle said the boy was so cute and the complete opposite of Glenn, and clarified what the baby's name was. At first, Sylvia hesitated and then answered that his name was Raon. Then uncle asked if the name was given to him with the meaning of shadow. Sylvia looked down and said that it was. The uncle frowned and said he didn't know what Glenn was thinking when he called him a shadow. Looking at the old man, Raon thought that now he was not using formal address Raon had heard before, that the king and the ragged saint were close. Pulling him close, his uncle cheerfully told him to go to his grandfather's house for a while. Placing his palm on the baby's chest, the saint suddenly said that Raon's condition was not good. Concerned, Sylvia asked if there were any problems. The saint replied that the child was carrying the curse of the bitter cold. He said that the baby's mana circuit was now blocked with cold energy, and that it would be difficult for him to become a swordsman. However, what was more important in the saint's opinion was that the boy would not die if he was treated, but if left as it was, he would die. When Sylvia heard this, she was shocked, and replied that it wasn't true. But the saint began to say that he would first prescribe medicine for the boy, but he was interrupted. A maid came into the room and told the saint that the head of the house was calling him. The saint replied that he would go as soon as he had finished talking. The maid mumbled that the head of the house wanted to meet with him right now. Closing his eyes, Saint replied that he was as always at a bad time. Walking up to the maid, the saint said he was ready to go. Walking him away, Raon thought about his curse and decided that nothing changes for him. He thought that since he was using the Ring of Fire now, it wouldn't be a problem. Suddenly, a few drops of water fell on his cheek. Looking at Sylvia, Raon saw that she was crying, and her body was trembling. Wiping her tears, Sylvia repeated that it wasn't true and she couldn't lose him like that. Clutching the boy to her, Sylvia shouted that she would cure him by any means. Falling on her knees, she said that she would find a way, and Raon could not leave. At that moment, Raon felt a strange feeling. He felt a whimpering pain in his chest, so excruciating and throbbing. He didn't want to see something like this mentally. He asked Sylvia not to cry. Reaching out his small hand, Raon touched Sylvia's tears and wiped them away. Sylvia calmed down and watched the baby. Raon mumbled something and reached out both his hands to her, and then said something like, "Mommy." There was a noise in the hallway, and the guards asked Miss Sylvia to stop. Glenn looked at the door and asked why it was so noisy. The doors rattled open and Sylvia burst into the room, followed by a maid running after her, yelling that she couldn't go in there because the head of the house was in there. Glenn looked at him and asked what the hell kind of rude behavior and inappropriate haste was this. Kneeling before him, a crying Sylvia begged him to save Raon. Kneeling down, Sylvia looked down and cried out that he knew of his condition and that the child was everything to her, so she asked him to save him. Closing his eyes and raising his cup, the head replied that there was no doubt that Raon would have a hard time living as a warrior, and why would he help something that would not contribute? In response, Sylvia shouted that Raon was his grandson. The head reminded her that this was the grandson she had brought after leaving the family. He said that all he would give the boy was the name Sieghart, and Sylvia should be grateful for that and not hope for more. Then he added that he had nothing more to say and ordered to take her away. The guards came to the girl and took her to the exit. Sylvia screamed. Sylvia looked at her father and begged him to save Raon, but the guards led her away and the doors of the room closed. Turning to Glenn, Saint called him stubborn and exhaled. He asked him if it was so hard to show his sincerity. Saint also reminded him that Glenn had called him himself so that Saint could look at his grandson. And now, what the head was doing, he asked him not to grumble. The Saint said that the kid's mana circuit was blocked by cold in 9 places, and as he grew older, the situation would become more dangerous. The Saint also said that Glenn had repelled the cold with his aura, and that there would be no problem for a while, but that it would be almost impossible for his grandson to become a warrior. In response, Glenn said that it doesn't matter, and it will be enough for him to just live. Saint asked Glenn if he thinks his grandson is cute too. Without getting an answer, the Saint asked why he named the boy Raon. He said that there are so many good names, and suddenly there is a shadow. After a little silence, Glenn replied that Raon meant more than just shadow. He said that 1,000 years ago, the name had a completely different meaning. A new day came. Sylvia came up to the baby and held out a spoon and explained that it was the medicine the Saint had given him, and that it must be bitter. While Raon drank the medicine, Sylvia and the maid closed their eyes in fear. When she opened one eye, she saw Rayon muttering and reaching for her. Calling Helen over to her, Sylvia exclaimed that Rayon was tolerating and drinking the medicine. Helen added that Rayon definitely understood Mrs. intentions. As Sylvia cradled him in her arms, Rayon thought that although the medicine was bitter, it was very necessary for him now with the properties of fire. Crying again, Sylvia asked Rayon if he understood his mom's feelings. Rayon clenched his fists. It had been 2 years since Rayon had started practicing taking this medicine, and the Ring of Fire was activating faster. Rayon had reached the first level of the Ring of Fire after spending these 2 years in constant training. In the morning, Rayon played with Sylvia and Helen, and during his afternoon nap and around midnight, he practiced. That was how his daily life went on. More time passed, and now Rayon was 5. The Ring of Fire had already reached level 2, which increased his mana sensitivity and soul class. Looking at his progress, Rayon smiled and said that he had finally done it. The second Ring of Fire was now rotating around Rayon's heart, and crossing over with the first one, yes, and Rayon's mana sense had improved. Helen came into the room and told the young master that he was awake so early and then asked if he could take the clothes to the wash. Rayon replied, "Of course." As he watched Helen pack, Rayon realized that she didn't see the notification window for his skills. Such system message windows had been appearing ever since Rayon had reached the first level of the Ring of Fire. When this message first appeared, Rayon had no idea what was in front of him. Later, it turned out to be a system where he could check his current state at once. Besides, judging by Helen's reaction, only Rayon could see this window. After thinking about it, Rayon realized that he had a second level, but the curse and low stamina did not go away. If it were not for the cure, it would not have happened. But during those 5 years, Sylvia, Helen, and the others, everyone in the building worried about Rayon's discomfort. They treated Rayon as a great jewel. This probably had an effect on him too. Resting his head on his knee, Rayon thought that he was only 5, and there was still plenty of time to take his time. The curse was a problem, but his low stamina was no good either. It was the reason he was always so tired of moving even a little. However, in his past life, Rayon was called the best mercenary and had mastered the Ring of Fire cultivation technique. And if he perfects it, it can be said that he won't have any disadvantage. And if he can master Sieghart's sword technique, he will definitely be able to take Darius's head off without any problem. But he can't rush Darius as one of the strongest trans centers on the continent. And if Rayon starts plotting revenge right now, his mind won't be able to handle it. In any case, those who can destroy Darius. It may be slow, but he needs to build up enough strength so that when he gets the chance, he can finish him off one by one. Rayon thought he'd just keep them for a little while longer as Sylvia came into the room and said he was awake. Rayon turned to look at her. Sylvia was holding his things in her hands and reminded him that she had already told him that Rayon would have to go somewhere with his mom, so he should get dressed. Looking out the window, Rayon thought that today was the day. On the continent, there is a force that maintains the overall balance of 6 kings and 5 demons. The family Rayon was reborn into is one of the 6 kings. The 6 kings have a good influence on everyone, while the 5 demons threaten the peace and tranquility of the continent. And each of these powers is holding a ceremony to recognize their abilities. Today is the day of the Zigihart family's recognition ceremony. In the ballroom, people gathered to discuss that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. And this was the first time they had seen each other since last year's ceremony. People were wondering if this year any of the heirs of the direct line would participate. Someone said that Karun's 4th son would participate. Some said that Sylvia would also participate. And some thought Sylvia was a loser. When Sylvia and Rayon entered the hall, people looked at her with contempt. There were whispers about his illness, and some said it was because he had gotten blood from a loser. As they walked to their seat, they heard people saying that they were only lowering the level of the family. As they listened to this, Rayon thought that if these kinsmen were so cruel to them, there was a reason for it. Suddenly someone said that this Sylvia was so shameless. Rayon froze. Rayon froze. Sylvia told him it was okay. He started to look for the offender with his eyes, but Sylvia said he was only looking at his mom. They stopped and the guards announced that the head of house was now entering. Watching his grandfather stride down the hall, Rayon thought they hadn't seen each other in a long time, about 5 years. Glenn Sieghart walked across the hall and sat down on his throne. He looked around at those present and summarized that everyone seemed to be gathered. A huge sword began to appear in the center of the room, and a blue light began to shine on the room. Looking at it, Rayon thought it was the Sword of Recognition, and the head ordered the recognition ceremony to begin. As Rayon continued to watch, he remembered that if he placed his hand on this stone sword, he could detect the attributes of the mana a person possessed. A counselor spoke next to the head and took the list and said that Baron Sieghart was the first to go. Baron walked over to the sword and placed his palm on it. By the age of 4, children begin to close their originally open skull. It is said that from this port, the child's mana attributes no longer change. So the event where such children are gathered, and their attributes are determined. And it's called the recognition ceremony. Baron's parents said that he was drawn by the wind, and judging by the light from the sword, his mana is of the highest quality. The head said it was a good attribute for a future swordsman, and told the boy to try to focus on sensing the wind better from now on. Next went Runan Cillian of the Cillian vassal family. She approached the sword and placed her palm on it. Rayon realized that the purity of mana was determined by the light on the blade of the sword, and the attribute could be understood by the end of the hilt. Now it was clear how the Sieghart family determined abilities. Noticing the reactions of the people, Rayon concluded that they were completely dependent on these attributes. Rayon also thought that he probably shouldn't expect a good result. Even though the Ring of Fire had reached the second level in the monoloop, there was a lot of coldness. And so the counselor called the last round Sieghart. Rayon thought that he didn't care about the result. He was asked to step forward, and Sylvia also told him to go. Rayon looked at her. He didn't have much hope for what attribute of mana was appropriate for this body now, and how to develop it was enough for him to find out. Sylvia raised her hand and asked if Rayon had seen what the other guys were doing, and asked him to just do it again. Rayon agreed. Rayon put his palm on the sword, and everything lit up with yellow light, and flames swirled around the blade. Rayon didn't realize what the light was or what the scene was before his eyes. A man with the same blonde hair as Rayon appeared in front of him, looking at him. Rayon wondered who he was. Raising his sword high, the man struck the monster in front of him. Rayon woke up and remembered the stone sword. Looking at it, he saw that the light was not even in the middle of the sword. People started laughing that Rayon had white mana without any attribute. Someone said that apparently the child of a fugitive is not even looked after by the god of battle. The king was silent as he listened to this. When Ron returned to his mother, Sylvia put her hand on his shoulder and said that he was doing well and everything was fine. People were discussing whether or not this guy was really a descendant of Sieghart. Some said that all Round got was red eyes and golden hair. Clenching his fists, the head of the house said, "Enough." The men fell silent and Glenn added that it was too noisy. Pointing to the door, the head of house said that the ceremony was over and everyone could go out. When everyone left, Glenn leaned on his arm and said that there was nothing to be done. Counselor lowered his head. Glav continued that he didn't expect much so, but suddenly the sword lit up with light. Looking at it, the head said that the light from the stone sword was golden like the sun. The aura of the first head of the House of Sieghart was characterized by an extreme firepower that could melt even the fires of the underworld. Looking at the book, Glenn said that golden mana and golden flame appeared only once in the history of the Sieghart family. The rich golden-colored mana is a dazzlingly beautiful and radiantly shining golden flame. Looking at his status window, Rayon thought that this was pretty good. He thought that it wouldn't be long before the number of rings of fire increased to 3. 7 years had already passed since the first recognition ceremony. Rayon had recently turned to 12. As he sat down on the grass, Rayon thought that if he could just do something with the cold energy, progress would accelerate. His water attribute resistance had risen to the 2nd level, so Rayon's body was no longer freezing and his legs and arms were not stiff. Sylvia came up to him and asked why he was here if he had to get ready so they wouldn't be late. Rayon only mumbled in response. He knew it was time for the 2nd recognition ceremony. For him, it meant that he would see those things that pissed him off again. Looking around, Rayon realized that only half of the participants were here today, and that it was over early. Rayon was suddenly approached by the head, who said that Rayon should have been ordered to participate in basic training as a member of the Sieghart family. He wondered why Rayon still hadn't heard from him after a month. Rayon raised his head at him and looked at him questioningly. He didn't understand what the head was talking about, what basic training was about. Sylvia jumped forward and shouted that Rayon was different from the other children, and because of his cold energy, it would be hard for him to keep up with the training. The head responded by saying that they were now in the territory of the Sieghart family, and there were no exceptions for those who bore the family name. He added that if a man could not walk, he had to crawl to be a Sieghart. Sylvia asked him to give them some time. Then the head asked if she could not accept to leave the family again, and this time with the child. Sylvia's eyes were filled with fear. She pressed her lip to keep from crying, and the head said that she could only live on this land as a Sieghart, and if she didn't want to, she had to leave. People started whispering that it would be interesting to see it, but right now, Sylvia didn't have a Dantian to break it, or a Mana Circuit. They scoffed at the fact that this man is a direct descendant of Sieghart, and to them it was cheesy. Now, Rayon finally understood why Sylvia was treated so horribly. She had left the family. There were still traces of Sylvia's martial arts training, but no aura. After her Dantian and Mana Circuit were destroyed, she left the family and married Rayon's father. However, when she became pregnant, Rayon's father died and she had no choice but to return to her family. And since she had rejected the position of direct heir to Sieghart, she was treated as if she were beneath them. But in Rayon's opinion, this is just an outsider's view in their circumstances. But now he is Sylvia Rayon's son, and he can't stand it. Seeing Rayon walking towards the head, Sylvia shouted for him to stop. And the servants also shouted, "Young master." Standing up in front of him, Rayon said that everything was fine. And as the head had said, he would be participating in training from next month. Denier Sieghart from the balcony told Rayon that he didn't even seem to know anything about the training. He added that Rayon should back off before it's too late, because he can't handle this kind of workout even though it's basic training. Looking at the head, Rayon said that he should live up to the name Sieghart, and he would take part in the training. Suddenly the head said that Rayon was just saying the name Sieghart, but did he know the weight of the name? The head's aura enveloped Rayon and sweat ran down his face, and then drops of blood fell to the floor and ran from his mouth. As Rayon lowered his head and looked down at the floor, he thought he felt such pressure. In the mere sight of the head, there was such power as if his heart was being squeezed out of his chest. It was a power superior to Robert's. So this is the warrior called the Doom-bearing King of the North? Ron fell to his knees and Sylvia ran to him saying that Ron was still a child and didn't know what he was saying. Helen also ran to them. Turning to the head, Denier said that this child doesn't know anything yet and asked him to release the pressure. In response, the head said that he was now speaking. Denier immediately apologized. Hugging Rayon, Sylvia said that he is not yet able to go through this training and asked him to stop. In the past, Rayon, being a mercenary forever living in darkness, was more close to death than life and never came out into the light. But now Rayon has decided that things will be different and he will not hide in the darkness. He has decided that he will no longer live as a criminal. He is Rayon Sieghart. He would put Sylvia back where she belonged in the first place. Clenching his fists, Rayon said that he couldn't possibly know that because he didn't grow up in the main palace but in a remote outbuilding. So he didn't know how high up the Sieghart family was or how successful they were. Rayon added that he wanted to take part in the training. As a Rayon, he decided that he would protect Sylvia and also the happiness and smiles of the people he cares about. Rayon will definitely return with his own hands. The head frowned and asked if Rayon had decided to understand the level of the Sieghart family through basic training. Rayon replied that it was the only way he could. The head said that in that case he should tell the teacher to prepare properly so as not to disappoint Rayon. After that, Rayon fell on his knees unconscious and Sylvia reached out her hand to him in fear. In his previous life, Rayon was the best mercenary and now he was the one who had mastered the continent's legendary Ring of Fire, and if he could use those skills. Rayon clenched his fists and thought he would show them how hard the stone would become. When the Karun ceremony was over, the governor of the military palace asked him if he had been called a sickly child who could barely walk. His interlocutor replied that more than one person had heard the conversation between the saint and the head, and that they had said that the boy was seriously ill. Karun thought about it and came to the conclusion that both before and now the child's body was not normal. But how could he withstand such pressure from the head? And Karun said that if you think about it, Sylvia's abilities were also outstanding. Karun ordered his subordinate to order the maid to send the man to the outhouse. He asked her to do it as soon as possible. At that time, Rayon ran up the mountain and Sylvia behind him shouted at him not to overdo it. Rayon was running and didn't even realize that Karun had ordered him to report everything that happens in the outhouse. The 5th training ground of the Sieghart family people greeted the head of house. There was a man licking on the couch with his hat covering his face. He had been told to stop pretending to be asleep. Limer stood up and saw the head of house before him and sighed that Glenn was really amazing. It was sort of like Limer Diaz. He told Glenn that he was the only one not affected by his pretense. The head told Glenn that the teachers were working hard at their jobs, and their head Limaris said that it couldn't be helped because they were doing his bidding. The head said that even after 5.5 years, Limer had not gained his mind. Limer waved his hand and said that people change in the end. Limer looked at the head and said that he was here for his grandson. He said that before the head he had already had Sylvia and asked for help, so he didn't think Glenn would come now. Limer also said that Sylvia had asked him to look after Ryan, and if the head had come for the same reason, it was for nothing, because he wouldn't let him meddle in their affairs. Clenching his fist, Limer seriously added that even if it was the youngest grandson of the head of house, he would make no exceptions. However, Glenn replied that that's what he needed, this surprised Limer, and he asked again. The head said that Limer should keep up the intensity of the training and raise it as much as he wanted, so that all the unworthy ones would be weeded out. Suddenly, Limer started to say that in that case, Glenn's grandson would also fail, but he didn't have time to finish and covered his mouth with his hand. Blushing, Limerus began to say that it seemed that the head loved his youngest grandson more than he seemed to, and that he was giving him the love he had not given Sylvia. In response, the head said that Limerus should not give any favors to anyone, and that he should separate the strong and the weak, so that only the worthy could learn from him. And Limer said that he would do what he wanted with peace of mind. The head turned away and said that Limer could do as he wished and he would go. Looking up at the ceiling, Lemore thought about Rayon. He wondered what kind of guy he was. When Rayon opened the system window, he saw that the third level of the Ring of Fire was very different. His body sensitivity had increased, and his mind was clearer. Thanks to Sylvia stopping Rayon all the time, he didn't overload his body too much, but the muscles in his legs and arms were still appearing. In addition, this window of condition was speeding up his development. Rayon squeezed his arm at the biceps. From this point on, things would truly begin. After all, the Seacourt family's training has a notorious reputation. The third level is only the initial stage, like laying the foundation for a house, and it is the only way to stay alive. By showing achievements higher than anyone else, Round will shut up those who mocked him. And then it would be the turn of the holy heavenly sword of Darius Roberts. Round decided that he would never stop until he personally took Darius's head off. Sylvia came into his room and asked if he was still awake. Rayon whispered back, "Mommy." She came and sat down on the bed, and Round asked what was wrong since she came at this hour. Sylvia replied that he was going to the training ground tomorrow and she wanted to tell him something. She asked if he had to go there. She confessed that she wanted to stop him because he had always been patient even when he was sick. So what would happen if he got hurt in training? Putting her hand on Rayon's shoulder, Sylvia added that she didn't say not to go there at all, but maybe he could postpone it for another year. However, Rayon said he can't stand the way the family representatives make an expression as if they've seen a devil every time they meet his mother. Or the way they ignore his mother and all the people in the outhouse. Rayon put his hand on his chest and said that it makes his heart heavy. He added that if he goes through this training with dignity, then people won't ignore Sylvia anymore. That's what he thinks. Rubbing her hands together, Sylvia said that Rayon is very smart, so he must have thought it strange why they are living in a remote area and why they are being scolded by everyone. She said that during one of her missions she met his father by chance and fell in love with him, but because of his status as a knight, it was not easy to be with him. So after giving up her mana circuit in Dantian, Sylvia left her family. She said that Rayon had actually had a sister before. Her name was Sia, and she was 2 years older than him. They all lived together in peace and quiet until the Topidinians who knew Sylvia by sight attacked them. Rayon's father wasn't very strong, and Sylvia was pregnant at the time. They couldn't do anything. Luckily, Sylvia's father had a guard on her without her knowledge. However, they were far away from the family at that moment and arrived too late. It was already after Rayona's father and sister had been hurt. Putting her hand on her chest, Sylvia summarized that she had no choice but to return to her family, and that she was considered a sinner in this house. Sylvia added that she really had nothing to say to Rayon's grandfather. Straightening up, Rayon thought that Sylvia was selfish. For her personal happiness, she had abdicated her responsibility to her family, and then she came back begging for her life. It was clear why the family treated her so badly. But she was the person who, along with her new life, had given Rayon love for the first time, even if everyone would call her selfish. Rayon decided that she was the only mother he had met in his 2 lives. Rayon asked if she regretted it, but Sylvia said she did not. She said that before she had lived as if she were an invisible person, but that she had lived as a human being for the first time, and that was enough for her. Smiling, she told him that she was happy then, and she was happy now here with him. Lowering her eyes, Sylvia announced that she felt guilty in front of Rayon for being such a goofy mom. Putting his hand on her wrist, Rayon said that he was fine and she had nothing to worry about anymore. Smiling at her, he thought that even if others say she is selfish to him, she is the only precious mom. And his revenge, Rayon thought that he could carry out his revenge after giving her back her lost place as the heiress of the direct branch of the 7 Siegharts. Her son's reaction made Sylvia cry, and Rayon had to comfort her, which made him exhausted. Sitting down on the bed, Rayon thought he should check the activation of the Ring of Fire and go to sleep. It would not be too long before the training. As Rayon folded his arms, he noticed that at level 3, the ring's rotation speed had certainly increased. Suddenly, Rayon noticed that something strange was happening. Snowflakes began to fly around him, and everything was illuminated with light. A face appeared in front of him, and a voice said that the anger that had risen in Rayon had reached his king, and in the name of the anger of the second king of the underworld, he would retaliate. Looking at this with round eyes, Rayon didn't understand anything. The system window said that the feature of Wrath was created and Wrath has awakened. Looking at Rayon, Wrath asked him to give him his body and soul in return. Confused, Wrath asked aloud why there was a child in front of him. Rayon cautiously asked who he was, but Wrath asked who actually Rayon was. He said that the anger that reached him, king, could hardly belong to such a boy. After analyzing, the king realized that it was indeed Rayon deep inside his heart, and indomitable anger was indeed hidden. Behind Rayon's back, the king told him to give him his body and soul anyway, and then he would fulfill Rayon's revenge. Looking at the king, Rayon wondered if it was because of the anger he felt for Darius before his death. But then the king was too late. Rayon replied that he did not need the king's help because he would take his own revenge. He decided that he had worked hard to get that chance and could not give it to someone else. But the king told Rayon that he was mistaken. Smiling, the ghost said that he was the king and he was not going to negotiate with Rayon. He said he had already made his choice. Rayon stood up and clenched his fist. Clutching his body, Round realized he was being enveloped by icy flames. Like a madman flying around the room, the king shouted that Rayon just had to give up his body. He flew straight at Rayon, and as he watched the ghost approach, his mouth dropped open. Grabbing his shirt, Round kneeled on his knees. He felt that his mind, and that paled. He realized that the attribute was not really fire, but cold. The king, meanwhile, told Rayon to arouse his anger by thinking of the bastard. And even if he was a god, the king would deal with him. Shivering from the cold, Rayon still held on thanks to his resistance to the water attribute, but it is not only the cold that is frightening in this attack. The king whispered that he would crush Darius's head and then chew and swallow his flesh. Rayon thought that if he gave him his body, there was no telling what he would do to Sylvia and the servants in the outhouse. And the king kept saying that Rayon should awaken his anger and accept it. Then he would be comfortable, but Rayon kept resisting. He said he wanted to reduce the damage to his body so that he could use it himself, but it couldn't be helped. The king said he would not give Rayon any more favors, but would just consume him. Rayon fell to all fours and thought he was about to be torn to pieces. Rayon sat up again and hugged himself tighter. He knew that he was at his limit, and his body could not take it anymore. And if he continued like this, he would die. Folding his arms, Rayon thought that since he could handle the cold energy thanks to his resistance to the water attribute, perhaps by using the Ring of Fire, Rayon could get rid of the pain in his mind and body. It was the only way to survive. Watching what Rayon was doing, the king was surprised to see a rotating Ring of Fire. Clenching his teeth, the king said that even though it had not been long since he had awakened, how could it be possible that a human boy could do such a thing? Rayon opened his eyes and said again that he would fulfill his vengeance and not give his body to some evil spirit. The king shouted that Rayon had called the king of the underworld an evil spirit. Rayon asked the spirit what kind of king he was. Looking at the spirit, Rayon asked if all kings are dead and asked the spirit to disappear silently. Rayon thought about the spirit's words that he had just awakened, and maybe that's why the spirit can't use all its power. A system window appeared nearby, and Rayon wondered why it had suddenly opened an additional ability. Seeing the window, the spirit shouted that it was the status window of the Demon King's ability. Not listening to him, Rayon saw that the abilities were now visible in numbers. Then Rayon asked what this message was and what it had to do with the spirit. The spirit replied that he had created this system personally, but that's where Rayon got it from. And Rayon asked what the system was for. The spirit said he had no reason to tell him. Rayon assumed it was to accelerate growth. The spirit turned to Rayon and asked how he knew this, and Rayon thought that the spirit was not at all good at hiding emotions. Rayon had thought it strange that the Ring of Fire was more powerful than it had been in his previous life, but it was the system. The spirit shouted for Rayon to give him either the case or his ability. The spirit asked what Rayon was doing, and he said it might have worked if he had even put mana into the punch. Rayon looked at the spirit and assumed that he, as a soul, had no material component. With his arms folded across his chest, Rayon realized that no one had come here even after the spirit's aura had been pressed. It seems that this spirit can only see and feel Rayon. He swatted the spirit away like a fly. A bracelet appeared on Rayon's arm. Rayon wondered what it was. The bracelet told the spirit that even though it had only just been released, its power would return and it would be unstoppable. When the spirit said that it would stay with him as long as Rayon was breathing, Rayon thought that the spirit was like a leech, and if he had his will, he would rip it off at once. He realized that if he took it off by force, the system might disappear, or the spirit might try to harm Sylvia and Helen. Rayon decided that it would be better to keep the spirit to himself and watch it. All he could do was trust that Rayon would be able to evolve quickly and control it. Then Rayon suddenly asked if it was necessary to turn into the bracelet because it didn't fit him at all. The spirit replied that it was a matter of taste and that Rayon should respect it. Rayon answered as he wished. It was morning. Standing in the hallway, Helen reassured Sylvia that the young master could handle everything. Sylvia replied that she knew that. Descending the stairs, Rayon replied that he was ready and it was time to go to the training ground. Standing at the gate, Helen asked the Lord to be careful not to overdo it. Rayon replied that he would be careful, and now it was time for him to go. Helen looked at the crying Sylvia and asked her if she was going to see her master off to the training ground with that face, because Rayon would be upset. Sylvia squatted down and wished Rayon good luck in training. Rayon replied not to worry. Sylvia looked at him and asked if he was going to be alright. Helen said that Rayon was much better, and that he would probably pass all the trainings. Sylvia thought that compared to what was there before, but this child is. Watching as Sylvia caught up with Rayon and hugged Helen, said that the head teacher had the best eyes in the Sieghart family. Hugging back, Rayon backed up Helen's words and said that he promised his mom that he wouldn't hurt himself and would get through this training well. As she continued to cry, Sylvia held Rayon close to her, and he said that since he had made a promise to her, he would keep it. He left and Sylvia clasped her hands to her chest and mentally asked Rayon to return safely. The children gathered in the 5th training ground of the Sieghart family were discussing who was from which family and asking if the training would be difficult. Looking at them, Rayon remembered that he had been told that there would be many students. It was understandable because the training ground was not only filled with members of the direct and collateral family lines, but also members of vassal families and students from outside the family. Helen said that there were so many people this year that they had even opened an additional 6th formation. When he heard someone say that he had weak limbs that could be broken with a single blow, Rayon turned to look at the people talking. They said that Rayon had a bracelet with flowers on it like a redneck. Rayon raised his hand and looked at the bracelet, and a spirit from there shouted that He flew up to the two boys and yelled that they were insects that didn't know the word sophistication, and they should have their heads smashed in and their eyes gouged out. Rayon came up to them and told them not to buzz around like mosquitoes, but rather to say everything to the face of the one they were discussing. This scared the boys. They turned around and Rayon asked them if they didn't know that if they couldn't say something to their faces, they shouldn't say it behind their backs. This made them angry. They told Rayon to shut up because he was from the side branch. Tilting his head, Rayon said that they were from the side branch too, and what are their grounds then? He asked if this is not how they speak when the person speaking is below the status of the person speaking. One of the boys came up to Rayon and grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and made a fist and told Rayon to know his place. Another boy came up to them and told the boy to stop because training would start soon. It was Baron. He said that there were people from the outside and that the boys were going to sully the name of Sieghart in front of them. The attacker clenched his teeth and said that Rayon was an outcast who would fail even if he didn't go through the training properly. They left and Baron turned around and told Rayon that if he wasn't going to obediently train here, he should disappear immediately. Rayon told him that he was talking such nonsense, and in such a boorish manner, Baron stopped. He turned around and Rayon said that Baron was just a direct descendant with no status, and not even an apprentice yet, and that he had no right to say such thing. Rayon added that the most Baron could do now was to go and tell his father. Listening to this, Baron became furious and said how dare some side branch. At that very moment, the doors of the house opened and Limerus appeared in them. When he saw Rayon and Baron, Limer raised his hand and asked if they were already fighting and shouted that they were not just young, but young, and that they were daring. Seeing it, Rayon assumed it was the Sword of Light of the Sieghart Limer family, and it was said that he had damaged the Dantian and retired. So Limer asked how about putting up a fight at least after the admission ceremony. When Baron heard that, he clucked and turned to leave. Rayon and Limer watched him go. All the students lined up and Limer said it was a pleasure to meet them and told them that he was the head teacher and in charge of training. He said that this time there would be 60 people in training, and that was too many, so now they would make a selection. Limer said that this would reduce their number to 1/4. The enrollees were outraged that this was too few and shouted what it even meant. The spirit from the bracelet began shouting that Limer was insolent and how dare he look down on the Demon King. Rayon waved his hands and told him to shut up. Plumping on a chair, Lemire waved his hand and said that on this plateau he is the law, and if they want to argue, they can go straight to the head. He said that they would now proceed to the test. Poking his finger into the crowd, Limer asked what they were all standing around for. Then he ordered them to run and the incoming students ran. Limer shouted that the foundation of martial arts is endurance and willpower. The spirit appeared from the blaslet and told Rayon that since he had started to run, he should run at the head and asked why he was at the very end. Rayon replied that it wasn't a competition, and he didn't need to overtake anyone. But the spirit said that Limer looked at the hidden strength and character of people and paid attention to what was not just in front of his eyes. And Rayon knew that this test would be won by the one who lasted the longest, and he would definitely last to the end. As Limerus had expected, Mr. Baron and Mrs. Runin were peerless. Those who watched them said that everyone here was of a high level in general, but these two were particularly striking. In their opinion, these children have such abilities at 12 that their future is frightening. The man spotted another child. He knew it was Rayon, who everyone knew only by rumor. They thought that Round could not catch up with the two because he was always at the back. Since Rayon was sick, it seemed surprising to them that he was already running, even though he looked tired. Limerus, standing behind them, listened to this but remained silent. Putting his finger to his lips, Limer thought it was amazing because it was the first time he had seen such a boy. He thought that he couldn't determine the abilities of only the strongest people on the continent, because he couldn't assess the depth of their strength. Most children, however, could see the mana threads in their colors, which gave him an idea of what they would become in the future. But in Rayon, Limer did not see any color and did not understand why. Limerus assumed it meant that Rayon had already become stronger than him and had gone beyond his perception. The two men Rayon had fought with earlier looked at him and said that Rayon had been so cocky in the beginning, but now he was the last man standing. They said they could see from Rayon's face that he wouldn't last 10 minutes. Meanwhile, Rayon thought it couldn't be because it was training and they were just running. In his past life, hungry beasts had followed him, and to survive he had to run until he lost his pulse and run no matter what. He wondered if it wasn't too easy now. Watching Rayon run past again, Limer opened his mouth. He didn't understand how Rayon could run because his stamina had long since come to an end, and he had too much stubbornness or anger. In Limer's opinion, Rayon should have had no more strength left to squeeze out of him. Now Rayon was demonstrating the spirit that only people who had practiced in sweat could have. But where did this boy get it from? Baron looked back and clenched his teeth. He didn't understand how Rayon was still running. Clenching his teeth, Baron remembered being told that Raon's body was in no condition to train. A man had come to Karun and reported that the Ragged Saint had said that because of the curse of the bitter cold, Sylvia's son would not become a warrior and might die. And when they met in person, Rayon seemed miserable to Baron. Clenching his teeth, Baron thought that everyone was pissing him off and he would show them. Stomping his foot, Baron thought that there was such a gap between their abilities that they had no choice but to give up. He activated his mana. Seeing this, Raon only thought that Baron had a good tongue, but otherwise he was still a child. In Raon's opinion, Runant was mentally more mature. As he continued to run, Raon thought that in any case this exam was not a competition, but a struggle with himself so that such antics could easily derail him. Many of them had already given up. The students sitting on the ground didn't understand what was going on, and why this little guy was still running because they said he was weak due to his illness. They thought that Rayon was not even tired, but he was drenched in sweat and thought he was about to die because of the cold in his body. He felt as if his heart and lungs were going to be crushed. Only by activating the Ring of Fire could Rayon still squeeze out his strength. Fortunately, the Ring of Fire was progressing rapidly, and seemed to be at its fullest when Rayon was at his best. The spirit yawned and called Rayon cheesy. He said that not only was he lagging behind, but he looked lousy too. Once again, the spirit hovered over Rayon and kept telling him to give him his body so he could beat the blue-haired man. Looking at it, Rayon swore he didn't understand why the spirit had appeared at such a time. The spirit shouted that it would freeze Baron if Rayon gave it his body. The coldness gripped Rayon again, but he clenched his teeth and decided to bear it. As he continued to run, Rayon thought it was best to keep it looking as if nothing was happening. When the spirit was near him, Rayon told it not to do anything stupid, and to sit still because it wouldn't work on him anyway. However, the spirit said that there was no one in the world who could withstand the Demon King's anger. Rayon grabbed his shirt in the area of his heart. He thought he had to fight back because if he showed any weakness now, the spirit would devour him. The spirit tried to attack Rayon again, but it failed, and started screaming why Rayon was not affected by the Demon King's wrath. Rayon continued to run, but it was hard. He felt like he was going to fall because his body was not obeying him. His eyes were blurring. Runan looked back. Rayon couldn't even breathe properly. Limerus came out to the students and said that was enough. All the boys sat on the ground and breathed heavily. Turning to Rayon, who had just stopped, Baron called him stubborn. Trying to sell himself, Rayon thought he'd almost died. This life wasn't easy for him either. Hovering over him, the spirit said that Rayon was a monster and asked how that was possible. Rayon replied that the spirit's powers had no effect on him. Still, it definitely helped the ring to grow, and the body's development was successful thanks to the status window. Suddenly, a system window appeared in front of Round to notify him that the condition had been met. Seeing this, the spirit shouted that Rayon was being upgraded for his restraint. He was very unhappy about it. Limerus came up to the stage and announced that everyone had had a hard time today and the test was over for the day. Many of the students looked down sadly, Limer said that regarding the words he said before he started. That only 1/4 would be left in the end? Limer waved his hand and said that it was a complete lie. Because of this, the students began to shout that they had driven themselves so close to death. However, Limer said that he couldn't weed out that many people on the first day, but if they practiced like today, most would fail. Then Limer announced that from now on they would become temporary students, and if they passed the exam in half a year, Limer would remove the word temporary. He smiled and raised his finger and said that he planned to choose the best student among all of them, though he would not rank them separately. That was the end of it, and Limer told the boys that they could go to the highest level dormitory provided by the Zighart house. Following the path behind the head, Limer told them that he had a guest on his rock for a day's sleep. When the head stopped, he turned around and asked glumly how it went. Smiling, Limer asked why he was asking him, because if he had come here himself, he had seen everything. Then Limer asked if his ability to see talents wasn't amazing. He added that Baron and Runen had talents as expected. Limer also said that the rest of the children would also be a strong support for the family in the future. Folding his hands, Limer added that he wanted to say that he saw nothing in Raon. He said that Raon's strength was clearly at its limit, and once he got to the end at all, Limer added that this was the first time since the chapter that he hadn't seen anything. Ever since Dantian had been turned into a ragtag, all of Limer's life had been painfully boring. And now, for the first time in a long time, he smelled something interesting. Jumping down to him, the head reminded him that Limer wanted to become a teacher himself. He left and added that Limer didn't want to waste his time on weird things, but rather focus on his duties. Limer agreed with him. He said aloud that he also felt that this course would bring someone he could trust with his future. However, the outgoing head replied that it was a coincidence because it would be hard for that child to become a warrior. Limerus smiled without answering. He knew that the head also knew that this was not the case. Leaving the training ground, Round said that since they were out of basic training, he could go to the training ground. The spirit said that Round was ruthless. When they got to the dormitory, the students began to speculate that Rayon had held out with some sort of ruse. Crane turned to them and said it was definitely because of the medicine. She said she'd heard rumors that Round had gotten the cure from a saint in rags. Waving their fists, the boys began to say that he had only run because of the cure and was showing off that he had made it to the end. Smiling, Crane said that was why they needed to teach the know-it-all a lesson. When they got to Rayon, Crane pushed him into a tree with all her might. He fell to the ground and asked why he thought he was doing this. Pointing a finger at him, her ally shouted that he, who had lost his direct kinship, dared to behave arrogantly only because of the medicine he had successfully drunk. The young man shouted that Rayon was a sideline scion who had no powers and dared to use such cowardly tricks. Swinging his fist, the boy said that Rayon should not be too frightened because they had brought him here to talk quietly so that no trace would be left. Kryn kneaded his hands and told Rayon to be calm because this kind of thing happens quite often. Making a fist, Crane asked if Rayon had heard what the teacher had said. Now they could talk since they were all students. Watching Rayon's spirit rise, he asked if he tolerated being treated like that and added that it was not something to be regretted. But suddenly Rayon clenched his fist and punched Crane in the face with all his might. She fell. One of her companions sat down next to her and the other turned around. Rayon said that talking between students was the right thing to do. Rubbing his wrist, Rayon added that it would only hurt them exclusively. Rayon tried to hit the one standing there, but Rayon elbowed him, blocking the attack. Rayon then struck a third opponent, also in the face. The spirit watched with admiration, saying that Rayon's punching was so hard it was amazing. When all the offenders were on the ground, they asked Rayon to stop Crane kneeling on her knees, rubbed her throat, and said they were wrong. Stepping on her hand, Rayon squatted down and said he would ask her something before he finished. Crane clenched her teeth in pain, and Rayon asked who had pushed them to deal with him. He assumed it was Baron. Hearing that, Crane was even more frightened. She lowered her head and began to say that Mr. Baron didn't know anything about it, and that they had decided it themselves, and that Baron had nothing to do with it. For Rayon, it was a surprise because it looked like Rayon disliked Baron, but maybe he wasn't completely spoiled. Rayon then asked if they would tell anyone about this conversation between the students. Shivering, Crane replied that of course not. Grabbing her by the hair, Rayon said that in that case, if they didn't want to talk to him tomorrow, they should avoid him. In response, a frightened Crane said that they would not even step on Rayon's shadow because they had done wrong. And Rayon stood up and said that if they understood, they could disappear. He didn't notice that Lemaris was standing behind him. Standing behind the tree, Limer thought it was a pleasure to watch because it was like seeing the head in his youth. Smiling, Limer thought that Round clearly had a talent for martial arts, albeit unrecognized and hidden among the other top talents. Limer's expectations for Round Seacart continued to grow. Meanwhile, Round was sitting in his room looking at the system window. It said that the condition had been met and he had added 1 point to his dexterity. When the spirit saw this, he shouted that if he was pleased, Rayon's points would increase immediately. He thought it was an absurd system, and Rayon said that the spirit had created it and how could he not know it? The spirit came closer and shouted that he didn't know, because no one had ever taken it away before. He shouted that Rayon was just stealing the power left in the king's body by the demon. Rayon stood up and asked if it was true that the spirit had called him an ungrateful bastard. The spirit behind him coughed and said that he had a proposition for Rayon. Ron turned around and Wrath offered him a bet. If Rayon wins, he will give him character points, and if he loses, he will take Wrath. Looking at the system window, Rayon asked if getting the highest score was what Lemur was talking about. Rayon then asked what the random ability selection was. The spirit said that one of his abilities would go to Rayon, but that it would be lowered in his body. Looking at him, Rayon asked another question what kind of anger he would feel if he lost. The spirit replied that it was the same feeling he had as a king. Smiling, the spirit added that the amount of anger he would transfer to Rayon would be negligible. According to him, water sharpens stone, and if Rayon continued to receive anger, sooner or later he would not be able to cope with the feeling. As Rayon sipped from the mug, he realized what the spirit was trying to accomplish, and judging by the way he spoke now, he wasn't lying. Besides, the higher the risk of losing, the better the reward. Should Rayon refuse the poison apple? It would be incredibly difficult for a normal sick person to win the first place in this case, but Rayon was reborn. He replied to the spirit that it was not a bad deal. Ron held out his hand and said he accepted them, and the spirit smiled and said it was a good choice. A notification came that Ryan had accepted the bet with the spirit. He thought that if he used the experience of his past life, he would never lose. In the evening, the boys were on the ground again. They said that their legs felt like they were going to explode, and they had no strength to stand up. Limerus explained that what they were doing was called the rider's pose. It literally means sitting on a horse, but don't underestimate it. This pose is the basis of all martial arts, and therefore it is an exercise that everyone should do without exception. Limer also added that he doesn't force them to do it because the exam is theirs, not his. One of the students shouted that he couldn't take it anymore and asked when they would be taught swordsmanship. The girl next to him answered that they had been doing nothing but circling and sitting in a horseman's pose for the last couple of days, so there was no fencing. As they passed by, Baron told them to stop resenting him because the training was over, so they could practice fencing themselves. He said that if they only practiced basic swordsmanship, Rayon and Spirit would dull their swordsmanship skills. When Rayon turned away, Spirit said that those guys said they were going to practice fencing, so why wasn't Rayon with them? And Rayon replied that he didn't need it now because with such low skills, it was a waste of time to practice fencing. Rayon knew he didn't need a sword right now. What he really needed was basic stamina and physical strength. Right now, his body had far less stamina than anyone else due to the cold. And for growth and further training, the base is the most necessary component. So Rayon shouldn't be in a hurry to look up to others. Right now, he should only focus on hardening his body. Rune and Cillian watched him from the corner. She could see that Rayon was making rapid progress and was already lifting more weight than yesterday. Though she had heard that he was quite weak, the weight he was lifting was increasing every day. Even though it was natural to exercise, Runan knew it couldn't be that the weight was increasing every day. In the past week alone, Rayon had added 10 kilograms to the barbell. Runan assumed it was because his posture was slightly different. When Rayon put the barbell down, Runan walked up to him. Re-bandaging his hands, he looked at her. She was silent, and Rayon asked why she was here. Runan stood there clenching her fists. At that moment, Runan wondered what was making Rayon grow so fast. Runan sat down next to her and put her palms between her knees. Rayon continued to watch her. She lay down under the barbell and began to lift it. Not realizing what was happening, Rayon stood up. He took one dumbbell and Runan the other. She knew she was not imagining it. It was after she smelled the aroma. That nice fresh scent coming from Rayon. As soon as Runan felt it, her body felt lighter. Looking at her arm, Runan realized that she was even able to lift more weight than usual. Rayon came up to her and asked if she had anything to say to him. Runan said no. Scratching the back of his head, Rayon turned and walked away. But Runan thought she should follow him some more. Suddenly, Baron and his allies entered the hall. Everyone was very surprised. One of his minions asked why Mrs. Runan was with such a guy. Taking up the dumbbell, Baron said that it was all useless. He thought that repeating body hardening training was pointless. He thought that a weakling like Rayon might need basic training, but no matter how much he trained, this sick guy was no match for them from the start. Baron said he didn't know what the exam would be like, but for the sake of this day and to increase his own strength, it was better to keep working on his swordsmanship. Heading for the exit, he told them to ignore some guy on the sideline. He introduced himself as Dorian and asked if he could train with them. He was an invited candidate, but said he wanted to learn Rayon's technique. Rayon looked at him and said he didn't really care. Taking something out of his pocket, Dorian said that even if it wasn't anything special, he asked Rayon to accept it. He gave Rayon a chocolate chip cookie saying it was delicious. Only Rayon said he didn't need it, and Dorian could take it as he noticed the frozen look in Runan's eyes. She looked at the cookie with such delight that Rayon decided to give it to her. Now there was another strange guy joining him. As time went by, Rayon, Runan, and Dorian continued their endurance training together. 6 months had passed since the training had begun, the time when every day Rayon ran ready to die behind him, and the backs of those who had blocked his path on the first day of training were no longer visible to him. Now looking forward and breathing his last breath, Rayon sees only 2 people in front of him. The morning of the exams had finally arrived. The palace was filled with dressed-up ladies and gentlemen. They all gathered in the arena. The host shouted that they had all come a long way to get here. Since the guardians were also present, they were asked to move as instructed. Flying up to Rayon, Spirit asked if he remembered their bet. Spirit reminded him that he had never been able to beat those 2. Smiling, Spirit asked Rayon to prepare to humbly accept the wrath of the Demon King. Rayon replied that an exam was a different matter and there was no telling what might happen, and waved the spirit away. Rayon looked down at Dorian and asked why he was sitting there. Clenching his fists, Dorian replied that as soon as he thought that today was an exam, he would get nervous. Rayon was approached by Runan. She said that she had brought cookies and told him to eat. Rayon raised his palm and replied that he didn't need to because he was fine. While Runan was eating the cookies, Rayon thought about why everyone around him was like that. Sylvia, sitting in the bleachers, shouted to Helen to watch their Rayon stand confidently. Helen, on the other hand, remarked that Rayon had been able to stand for 6 whole months and had also made friends. Sylvia replied that with his temperament, it was natural because Rayon was so understanding and sensible and had never been capricious since he was a child. A loud announcement was made that the head of the house had arrived. Sylvia and the others sitting on the bleachers turned around in fright. What surprised everyone was that the head of house had arrived in person and would be watching everything. When the head sat down on the throne, there was a whisper among the people. Looking at him, Limer asked cheerfully why the head was here. In response, the head said that it was an event to choose the future of the family, and Limer said as if he had come to the wrong place. Rubbing his neck, Limer smiled and said he was glad the head was here. Raising his hand, Limer announced to everyone that since the head of house was here, there was no point in stalling, and they were starting the apprentice selection exam. Limer also said that he would finally reveal the contents of the exam, which was of interest to everyone in the Sieghart family regardless of gender and age. The disciples were enveloped by the wind, and everything lit up with green light. Limer said that they needed to overcome his aura pressure. Opening his arms, Limer said that pressure is an essential element in every warrior's life. He summarized that in this exam, he wanted to assess his students' ability to deal with it. With his hands by his side, one of the teachers said that he objected because the children had only recently mastered the aura, and now they were under pressure. He said that there were some of them who hadn't mastered it yet, and so the aura pressure exam was unfair. People from the stands shouted that the children said that Lemur had been sleeping in class all the time, and they didn't understand how the pressure could be evaluated. Exhaling Lemaire explained that pressure is not just a manifestation of aura. Real pressure from his words is determined by the quality of a warrior's spirit. In other words, it was proof that a true warrior could manifest without an aura. From the podium, the head said that even without the aura, each of them has his own pressure formed on the basis of life experience. He said that depending on the intensity of the training, even a person without aura could acquire a strong pressure. Lemurus opened his arms again and asked that no one had any dissatisfaction left, and that they would begin the exam. Lemur told Runan to approach first and ordered the others to stay behind. She approached and Lemur told her that she would release the pressure she could overcome if she practiced hard enough, and then she would be accepted. Smiling, Lemur said they would begin immediately. Runan was enveloped by a strong flow of energy. Hugging herself, Runan closed her eyes and clenched her teeth. Lemur said that if she used her aura, she would be disqualified. He had told her to awaken the willpower she had been holding onto during training. With her palm outstretched, Runan took slow steps toward Lemur and then grabbed his hand. Supporting her, Lemur said that she had come through easily enough. He said that he could see the result of Runan's hard work all this time. Next, Lemur called Dorian. The student trembled and asked what the order was, but Lemur said that he wanted to do it that way. When Dorian came up to him, Lemur told him to just break through the wall of his pressure with the willpower that Rayon had accumulated by stabbing. Dorian asked if that was possible. Lemur spread his hands and said that if Dorian failed, he would fail. When the aura reached Dorian, he fell to one knee. Rayon stood behind him. He felt the pressure force was now different. Rayon realized that Lemur was adjusting it according to the child's ability and progress. So among these many children, Lemur watches each one. Suddenly, Lemur shouted to Dorian that he had succeeded and was accepted. As Dorian sat down and hugged the teacher's leg shaking, Dorian said that he lacked confidence and needed to believe in his own strength. Dorian then leaned to the side and threw up. Lemur said that Dorian must have understood him. The line slowly moved and it was Baron Sieghart's turn. As soon as he approached, Lemur offered to start right away. When Lemur applied pressure, Baron even covered his face with his hands. Clenching his teeth, Baran understood how to resist it. From the outside, it looked different to him and he didn't understand how Runan was able to do it. As he fell to one knee, Baran trembled. He thought he couldn't even move his leg. When the apprentice fell to all fours, Lemur said that Baron's talent was more special than others. Lemur told him that among the 160 gifted children present, those who could compare to Baron could be counted on their fingers. But Lemur added that Baron and the boys who followed him had wasted their time. For what was the point of fetishizing when you didn't know the true meaning? Lemur went on to say that whenever Baron had a hard time, he used his aura, but if he used it now, he would be disqualified. At that moment, Baron thought that he couldn't fail here. He was flooded with memories of how coldly his father had received his brother. He couldn't forget his father's icy and stern gaze at that moment. Rising up, Baron stretched out his arm and shouted that if he couldn't overcome this now, he would be thrown down too. He ran the distance that was between them and falling at Lemur's feet, grabbed his shin. The teacher replied that he was accepted. Lemur reminded him that Baron was only 12 and he didn't need to act like an adult, but to do age-appropriate training. In Lemur's opinion, if you walk with your eyes on the ground, you might fall off a branch. Lemurus looked at the students and said that Round Sieghart was the last one to go. When Round approached him, Lemur asked if he was ready, and Round said of course. Then they started. The energy was so powerful that everyone noticed it, and Sylvia from the stands even screamed. Even the head moved forward a bit, not realizing what the pressure was. Looking at Lemur, Rayon asked if it was true of his exam. Lemur said that from what he had seen, Round's talent exceeded that of others. Smiling, Lemur told Round to try to stand. In fact, the spirit of a warrior is not contained in the body, but in the vessel of the soul. And now Round has the spirit not only of Round Sieghart, but also of the mercenary Rayon. And now Rayon took his foot off the ground and took a step. Lemur opened his mouth because he was surprised that Rayon could cope with such pressure. As he got closer, Rayon stretched out his arm and Lemur still didn't realize if it was possible in such a situation. In Lemur's opinion, Rayon shouldn't have even stood up. However, after a while, Rayon touched Lemur. Everyone in the stands were shocked and sat with their mouths open. Looking at Lemur, Rayon asked if the exam was over. Lemur remained silent. Frowning, Lemur asked Rayon who he was, and Rayon replied that Lemur had been watching him for 6 months. Holding up his hand, Lemur explained that Rayon had clearly outdone himself, which was why he was asking Lemur to purposely use more pressure than he was capable of. He explained that he just wanted to make a joke, but he didn't think Rayon could overcome such a thing. Lemur scratched the back of his head and said that he had gotten distracted, and said that they would finish today's apprentice selection exam on Rayon. Then Lemur said that it was time to announce the best because everyone was curious. So Lemurus announced that the best student of the 5th training ground was Rayon Sieghart. When Sylvia heard this, she cried and shouted that Rayon was the best, and Helen cried and repeated that Rayon was the best. Among the students, Baron shouted that he couldn't admit it and repeated that it wasn't true and it was a clear deception. Looking at him, Lemurus clarified what Baron was talking about and what other deception he was referring to. Baron shouted that Rayon was weaker than him in physical strength, and therefore he couldn't understand how such a person could become the best. In Baron's opinion, Rayon was definitely using some kind of trick. The people in the stands thought that maybe his words made sense. There were whispers that it wasn't possible with the curse of livid cold, and moreover, Rayon didn't even have an aura. Someone suggested that Rayon was in cahoots with Limerick. Pointing his finger at Rayon, Baron said that since they are warriors of House Sieghart, they should choose the best warrior through battles, and not some kind of exam. Smiling, Lemur asked Baron that he would like to be the best. Baron was afraid and hesitated. Looking at the balcony, Lemur said that the exam was over and asked the head what he thought should be done in such a situation. Turning to Rayon, the head said that the people around him couldn't seem to accept this result, and whether Rayon intended to fight Baron. Hearing this, Baron smiled and looked at Rayon, waiting to see what Rayon would say. However, Rayon said no because the exam was over and the result was announced. The students opened their mouths in surprise. Rayon also said that he had no reason to fight for no reason. Turning to Baron, Rayon said that he had lived his life always talking about the straight branch and honor, and Rayon didn't think that he wouldn't even be able to accept the result. The head intervened and said they would do this. They would fight for the top spot, and if Rayon won, he would give him a brass token. Members of the Sieghart family can be awarded gold, silver, or copper tokens for their accomplishments, and the rewards they can receive vary. Right now, it was only a copper token, but the head would give it out personally, so it would be a good reward. Rayon assumed that the head was not very happy that he was the best, and Rayon agreed agreed that the head said that they could start, and this time they would be sure to get the top spot. They have 1 round. Use of aura or weapons is disqualified. You must use only your body. They started and Baron attacked Ryan lightning fast, aiming for his face. Then he kicked, but Round blocked and deflected the attack. Baron swung his fist and shouted that it was the Void Tiger's fist that his father had taught him. He shouted that no one ever said you couldn't use fist fighting techniques, so it wasn't a violation. He punched Round in the chest. The people in the stands cheered. They shouted that, as expected from Baron, Rayon can't even do anything. As Baron continued to strike, Baron thought that Raon was some weakling from the sideline. Clenching his teeth, Baron knew that he would not give way to the best of someone like Raon. He remembered how he and his father had left his brother's room, and how his father had told Baron that there was no place in their house for such a weakling. Putting his hand on his son's shoulder, his father had told Baron not to dare disappoint him in the same way. As Baron threw his punches, Baron thought about the fact that his father was now looking at him, and he had to prove his strength. Rayon fought back skillfully, but Baron decided there was no way he was going to let him get in the way in a place like this. As Baron threw his punches, Raon could see his fist and his movements. All his technique was clearly visible. Swinging his fist again, Baron asked Rayon if he had already given up. However, Rayon, also preparing to strike, asked if that was possible. With all his might, Rayon hit Baron in the chest and he flew backwards. The head realized that it was the Void Tiger's fist, but how Round had managed to use it. Getting up from the ground, Baron asked where Round got the technique from. Looking at him, Round replied that Baron had shown him the technique himself. As Rand said, he had only repeated it. Those watching did not understand how Round could use the technique. Someone so discouraged suggested that Round had been given the technique in secret. Covering his hand with a writ, Limer thought that just now this guy had neutralized the blow aimed at him by countering it with the same Void Tiger fist. Usually geniuses are called geniuses who can recognize the flow of an opponent's technique, but Round was able to make that flow his own and use it. Limer knew that this was what Head Talon wanted, a Talon who could take the lead on the continent, and so Limer summarized that the winner had been decided and everyone could see it. Limerus came up to Rayon and put his arm around him and raised his other hand to say that the exam was over. Sylvia rushed from the stands and hugged Rayon tightly. Runan's parents were also happy with their daughter's success and came up to her, but it was not his father who came to Baron, but his butler. He helped the boy up. When Baron saw his father in the crowd, he looked at him sternly and turned away. At night, Baron came to his father's estate and stood in front of him with his head down. Without turning to his son, his father addressed him by name and asked if Baron remembered what he had told him. Baron replied that he was supposed to be the first. Turning around, Karun replied that he didn't want much from his son. He said that Baron was to break the wench and crush Rayon. He shouted that Baron had lost not even to that wench, but to some insect kicked out of a direct branch. He asked Baron if he wanted to embarrass him. He asked if Baron might aspire to be like his third and fourth brothers. Frightened, Baron said no. Karun informed him that Baron had already missed his first chance, and that the next best choice would take place by the end of his apprenticeship. Ordering his son to take the seat, Karun turned his back and told him to leave. On the way to the dormitory, Baron thought that he should not miss the chance he was given if he wanted to live like a member of the straight branch. He shook and thought that it was all that damn bastard Round's fault, and that he was the reason for all this. As he continued walking, Baron thought about how it had happened. He thought about how he had worked hard not to lose to anyone. Looking up, Baron saw a building in front of him and thought about how he got here. It was a gymnasium. When he entered it, Baron looked around and noticed that it was empty. He thought it must be because he had just passed his exam. Taking a dumbbell, Baron looked at the drawers where the students' personal belongings were kept. Opening Rawan's drawer, Baron thought it would be okay if he just took a look since he wasn't going to steal anything. In the drawer, Baron saw a huge amount of shoes, which surprised him. Taking one of the shoes, Baron thought that at first glance there were more than 10 pairs in the drawer. He couldn't believe that Rayon had used them all in 6 months. Baron remembered that he had only changed his boots twice, but come to think of it, Baron knew that Rayon was always practicing. And while Baron had forgotten the basics of swinging a sword, and while he was resting in the dormitory, Rayon was displaying an image befitting the Sieghart family. Thinking of all this, Baron put Rayon's shoes back on and left the hall. As Rayon sat in the room looking out the window of the system, the spirit next to him resented that he had nothing to say, because he had never seen anyone like Rayon. Looking at him, the spirit asked who Rayon was, and Rayon said who knows, because fantasy is not forbidden and the spirit can think for himself. When Rayon noticed the new ability, he asked what it was, and the spirit said that it was the perception of the snowflower, and then said that Rayon was not worthy of it. He said that this ability allowed him to increase the area of perception, but now it was at the first level, so the increase would be small. Smiling, the spirit added that he, the king, could sense 10 times what he was originally capable of. Rayon asked what the name of this ability was and why it was called snowflower perception. The spirit replied that it was just the way he liked it and asked if it wasn't beautifully crafted, but Rayon said that the spirit had terrible taste. When Rayon saw Sylvia off the next day, he was told that he had been summoned by the head of Sylvia's office. She asked the butler if Rayon was in trouble for being summoned, but the butler laughed and told her not to worry. He said that the head would just personally hand a brass token to Rayon. Coming to Glent Sieghart, Rayon got down on one knee and said he welcomed him. The head looked at Rayon sternly and said that even though he didn't like it, promises must be kept. The butler came to Rayon with a tray with a copper token on it, and the head said that he was giving him the copper token as promised. When Rayon took the token, the head said that in the future he could return the token by asking for a suitable item or favor in return. Rayon raised his head and asked what he needed to do to return it to his mother. The head clarified that by former position, Rayon meant being a member of the direct branch. At that moment, Rayon felt the pressure of his aura soften, and the head replied that if Rayon accumulated achievements that would be recognized by the whole family, it was possible. However, it was not as simple as words. He added that being recognized by others in this place was like getting a star from the sky, especially for a boy like Rayon. Rayon smiled and replied that it was a small opportunity. Putting the token back in its place, Rayon said that it was enough for him and thanked the head for the answer. As Rayon was leaving, the head stopped him and reminded him that Rayon had not asked for a reward yet, and that he could answer the question without the token. Rayon thought he couldn't assume that the doom-bearing king of the north would say such a thing. Harshly, the head told Rayon to tell him his wish. Clenching his fist, Rayon remembered that he had thought of something beforehand. What he needed most at the moment and Rayon told the head that he needed a cultivation technique. The head replied that his teachers would teach it to him, but Raon replied that he needed cultivation techniques beyond what the teachers would teach him. He wanted a level that matched the token. The shadow cultivation technique he used in his previous life wasn't enough for Rayon. After all, in order to restore Sylvia's position and take Darius's head off, Raon must have a stronger and more outstanding aura. Hearing Rayon's wish, the head snapped his fingers and Rayon was in the library in an instant. Standing outside the door, the head said that this was one of the bookcases of their family, and if Rayon raised his hand in the center, the book he needed would appear. Raon raised his hand and thought that it was enough that this technique was better than the shadow cultivation technique. When a book appeared under the ceiling, Raon looked at it and thought it was very old. Seeing what kind of book Rayon's head and butler had fallen out of, they were greatly astonished. It was the book of the Golden Fire Technique. As soon as Raon touched the book, it began to leaf out. Everything around them lit up with light and suddenly Raon disappeared, while the head continued to stare at the place where he had just been. A memory appeared. A man was sitting in front of the head. The head asked him if he thought Sylvia was being ignored and added that he wasn't interested. He told the young man that the main thing for them now was to develop their family, so the boy should go and do something else. Next scene. Chapter asked Sylvia fell in love with some man and ran away. He said he didn't need to report such trivialities. In the past, when the head considered emotions a luxury and only thought of developing the family, he was given the power to break through an insurmountable wall. The family's growth was staggering, but then what did Glenn Sieghart lose? Then he received news that his son-in-law and granddaughter had been attacked. The head was holding a letter. A servant reported that it was the two-headed ghost of Eden who recognized Sylvia. He reported that she was fine, but as for the others, they died on the spot. The head returned to his emotions, albeit late, but the past could not be undone. The head decided that even if Rayon and Sylvia hated him this time, he would protect his grandson. The book fell apart and Rayon didn't realize what was happening, and something kept flowing into his body and head. Suddenly, the head spoke and asked Rayon what he had just done. With a surprised look in response, Rayon said that he didn't know, but he remembered the contents of that cultivation technique book he had in his hands. The head then asked what it was called. Rayonic raised his hand and said that it was called the Golden Fire Technique. And the head clarified, Rayon remembered the contents of that book. Rayon replied that it was... In response, the head said that Raon had received the reward for the token and could go. When Raon left, the counselor turned to the head and asked if the technique Raon had received was the technique. The head simply said yes. The head confirmed that this technique belonged to the first head of House Sieghart. He said that it was the technique of the first head that no one had ever been able to recognize or read in the history of the family. The counselor said that if it was found out, both Rayon and Lady Sylvia would be in danger. The head said that no one knew about this technique. The counselor also asked what happened to the book that had disappeared. The head said that everything was fine because the information from it had already been passed on to humans. Going to the biobibliothèque, the head said that in any case this technique could not be used. If not for this child, it would have rotted away in the closet. Sitting back on the throne, the head said that it looked like things were going to change from now on. No matter how much Rayon thought it was strange to him why the head had given him such a thing, he sat and looked at his hands. It seemed to him that this technique was not inferior to the legendary Ring of Fire, which meant that it was valuable enough to try to master. Every time Rayon concentrated, a ball of fire appeared in front of him. He went to it and tried to touch it, but it failed again. Rayon kept trying, but it was not easy to accumulate enough mana to form an aura, even if Rayon didn't think he could master it right away. The spirit next to him said that things didn't seem to be going the way Rayon wanted them to. The spirit told Rayon to try harder and reminded him that if someone disturbed him during cultivation, he would be in big trouble. At first, Rayon thought that the spirit was up to something, but then he decided that he was right. The Golden Fire Technique was a method that helped absorb natural mana and create an aura in the Dantian. If someone interfered, the circuit and the Dantian would be damaged. This is especially dangerous for Rayon because his mana circuit is still cold, and he can become crippled. Suddenly, the spirit smiled and said that it would only interfere with Rayon once during his cultivation session. And Rayon said that if he became crippled before the spirit took his body, then the spirit would suffer damage too. The spirit replied that he didn't care. He hovered over Rayon and said that he was human and could not handle such a thing, but he would even if Rayon was left without limbs, or if Rayon's Dantian explodes, the spirit can save him. The spirit whispered that when Rayon is crippled, he will have a great chance. In response, Rayon said that he would agree for once because he was even curious about what would happen. The spirit looked away and said that Rayon was bluffing too. He told Rayon to spend every day in fear because he didn't know when it would happen. Looking at the spirit, Rayon realized that he was indeed an enemy demon of the underworld, who would consume his body at any chance. The very question of anger. Closing his eyes, Rayon remembered that the spirit had been acting calm for a while and he assumed that the spirit had surrendered, but he had to be careful. Standing up, Rayon said that he had to deal with an urgent matter. Spirit asked him what he had finally decided to do. Rayon replied that it always comes. Looking out the window, Rayon added that it was no accident and he should attend to it. There was a girl sitting under the window looking at her. Rayon thought that maybe he should go back to his work for the first time in a long time. The girl was Judiel's maid. She wrote in her letter that before there was nothing to report except that he often talked to himself. She wrote that now she had something to report. When she looked away from the letter, Judiel thought that no one knew that you could get the technique for a token. As she watched Rayon, Judiel could feel the mana flow that she felt when cultivating. It was too unusual. As she continued writing, Judiel decided that such information was worthy of the attention of the Central Military Palace. After folding the letter, Judiel looked at it and thought that even though it was an order, that boy was still a child and how much she should keep an eye on him. She put the letter on the lake and the sheet floated forward. She decided it was time to go back. But at that moment, a knife was held to her throat. Rayon stood behind her and said that if she opened her mouth, she would die. And sitting next to her, Rayon added that if she moved, she'd die too. Sweat was rolling down Judiel's face. Rayon ordered her to lower her eyes and look into the lake. Before she lowered her head, Judiel thought about who might have such bloodlust, and when she did, she saw Rayon. When she saw him, Judiel wondered how that little boy could be behind her back. And then Rayon said he'd been watching her since the first day he'd been back at the outhouse, and asked if she'd dug up any information of her own. Judiel thought it couldn't be that Rayon had realized it from the first day. She had thought she was leaving no trace, but it seemed that Rayon had been pretending not to know all along. She remained silent, and Round pressed down on the knife and ordered her to open her mouth. She shuddered, but Judiel opened her mouth and Round put a balloon in her mouth. When she swallowed it, she vomited and Rayon stood up. He took her letter from the lake. When he opened it, Rayon said that the contents were not visible and asked if it was security paper or text that could only be read with a certain reaction. Without getting an answer, Rayon started to say, water, earth, fire, sunlight. Judiel sat up and held her stomach. When Rayon called Moonlight, Judiel cried out and Rayon started listing the names of Aris, Karun, Denier. When Judiel clenched her teeth, Rayon realized that this was the work of Karin Seacart. Looking at Rayon, Judiel thought it couldn't be because there was definitely nothing strange in her facial expression. Suddenly, Judiel realized that this pain that was burning through her body and the situation in which Rayon was so easily reading her mind. She reached for her mouth. The explanation can only be one: what Rayon had fed her. It was a fury worm. A little earlier, Karun had ordered Judiel to go to the outhouse and keep an eye on Rayon and Sylvia and give him all the information about them. Then Karun had said that if she did well in this task as she wanted, he would do it. Looking at Round, Judiel asked if he had fed her the fury worm. Hearing this, Rayon opened his mouth. He didn't think Judiel knew about it. Again, Judiel vomited. She knew that the worm could be used to track the location and emotions of the person who ate it. And if the host willed it, it could cause the person unbearable pain or even destroy them. It was a terrible curse. And Round said that since she's sending letters to Karun, she's a spy, and it started 7 months ago. He said it started right after the recognition ceremony and added that Judiel had done a detailed investigation. Looking at him, Judiel remembered that she had thought it would be an easy mission before. Just gathering information about a small crippled child, and Sylvia Judiel thought she could easily handle it. But she couldn't imagine such a monster living in the outhouse. Judiel shouted that she would immediately correct the contents of the letter and write untruths in it. But Round replied that there was no need for that because even if she corrected it, the information about him would still reach Karun. Approaching the trembling Judiel, Rayon said that it would only show Karun her incompetence. Leaning over to her face, Rayon smiled and said that from now on she would be a double agent. Information that will become public knowledge she can send without hesitation, but what will not be known she has to hide, and she has to supply Rayon. When Rayon left, he said he would expect useful information from her the next time he returned. On the way home, the spirit asked when Rayon had time to summon the worm. Rayon said he had just fed it poison that temporarily causes terrible pain. The spirit asked Rayon if he could read her mind even without using the worm. Rayon replied that information can be obtained in many ways, and he could. Rayon then plunged into aura training and practiced it until the day he had to return again. However, Rayon, who had been practicing cultivation tirelessly all this time, was still unable to create an aura. After arriving at the training ground and looking around, Rayon realized that only 42 people had enrolled in the end. He remembered how Lamaris had said that he would only keep a fourth of them, but he didn't think that was really true. Someone called out to Rayon and he looked behind him to see Runan. Runan remembered her father's words as he asked Mr. Rayon if he could help their daughter with her training. A few days ago, the Cillian family's main estate, her mother had asked if she had thanked Rayon. As she continued to eat, Runan replied that yes when she received the cookies, but her mother asked if she had thanked him for helping her with her training, and Runan replied that she had not. Mother asked why not. Runan replied that her father had told her not to talk to boys first. That day, Mother explained to Runan that when it comes to nobility, gender doesn't matter. She said that when you receive help from someone, you should always say thank you, because it's a basic courtesy. Runan opened her mouth. When Runan approached Round, she remembered the conversation and said thank you to him. Round didn't understand at first, and then just said, okay. Looking at her, the spirit asked what was wrong with Runan, and Round asked him how he knew. At that moment, Dorian came up to them and asked Mr. Rayon if he was doing well all this time. He began to say that now that he had become an apprentice, he couldn't imagine how hard it would be for him. He said a lot of things that even the spirit noticed. Taking a breath, Dorian added that it was a good thing that Rayon had won first place, because if it had been Mr. Baron, he was standing right behind him. When he saw Baron's angry face, Dorian screamed in fright and then fell down. And Rayon came up to Baron, covering Dorian, who was lying there. They both looked at each other in silence. Then suddenly Baron bowed and apologized. He said he admitted that he had lost last week and that he had shown himself inappropriately. Straightening up, Baron frowned and added that he wasn't giving up and would do his best to get ahead of Rayon again. Turning away, Baron added that from now on he would not back down and would not give up. Looking at him, Round said that he didn't think a 13-year-old would admit his mistake, and apparently the famous family was different. Meanwhile, the spirit started shouting that even if he got it right, this kid didn't know his place and ordered Round to catch up with him and tear his eyes out. They were interrupted. Someone came running in and asked if he was late. Everyone turned to look at him. Limerus came up to them, rubbing his neck and saying that he had had a few drinks last night and had overslept. Standing in front of the crowd, Limer said that first he wanted to congratulate them on officially becoming apprentices. He added that their training would start from today and the basic routine would remain the same. Since it was already basic training, Limer said that they would have more trainings. Suddenly, someone else said that the first one was cultivation. In front of them stood a girl who swore and said that she almost went crazy because the damn door wouldn't open. Seeing her, Limer said that it was about time. He said that he wasn't her teacher, but she was a sophomore from the last enrollment. Limer also said that from now on they would train together, so the guys should say hello to Martha Sieghart. Raising his hand, Limer added that she may not look like it, but she is a kind child. Martha said that before. Martha looked around and asked who was the best student among them. She said she couldn't stand it when someone worse than her stood over her. Rowan listened to Martha say that she should check who took the place of the best. Looking around, she told the best one to come out so they would fight immediately. Looking at her, Rayon asked the spirit if this land was cursed. He didn't understand why people like this kept appearing. Coming forward, Rayon called out his full name and announced that he was the first place winner. The other students looked at him with their mouths hanging open. Leaning slightly, Martha added that his face didn't look like he was the best, and suggested that it was a good thing. Rubbing her fists, Martha suggested that they skip the long introductions and go straight into battle. Suddenly behind her, Baron folded his arms and asked Martha what kind of obscene behavior this was. Martha looked at him and asked, how dare he say such a thing to his sister? Leaning toward him, Martha said that if he continued to open his mouth recklessly, he might get hurt. But Baron replied that Rayon had been recognized as the best before the headmaster and head of house, and Martha was going to deny it. Martha smiled and said that as far as she knew, Baron had also made a fuss then and asked if that was not true. but Baron replied that that was why he didn't want to show such behavior again. Ron, who was standing behind Martha, thought that Baron had really changed. Suddenly, Runan came out and covered Ron and told Martha to move away. Martha looked at Baron and asked what kind of unbelievable display of affection for their comrades, and what kind of scum decided to protect each other. Martha scratched the back of her head and said that if this continued, she alone would look like a fool. Abruptly, she turned around and attacked Ryan, saying that the only people she hated more than insolence were cowards who hid behind other people's backs. But when her fist came close to Rayon's face, he stepped aside and Martha went flying down, and then Round brought his fist to her face. He hit her with such force that they both flew apart. When Martha slowed down, she noticed that the ground beneath her feet was cracked. She said she was speechless. Swinging again, Martha said that Rayon should know that he would not leave on his own today. However, Lemur came up to her and intercepted her hand and said that was enough. Lemur asked if they were ignoring him too much, and added that as much as they weren't serious about him thinking he was an empty meso, it was a shame. Martha shuddered. Releasing her hand, Lemur said that he didn't know about Baron or Runan, but that Rayon didn't even possess the aura yet. She raised her hand and waved Lemaris away, and he said he'd let the two of them fight later, when Rayon had mastered the aura. As Martha headed for the exit, Lemur told Rayon that it was time for him to get in his seat too. The spirit next to Rayon shouted that he would just let go of the girl who was pointing her fist at the king. Heading back to his seat, Rayon replied that he did return one blow to her. The spirit shouted that it was not enough and he had to smash her head in. Smiling, Rayon thought that later when she had something he could get, it would be more profitable to bet with her for the top student. Going up to the building, Rayon asked the spirit to wait a little while because soon he would make the spirit like him. In the evening, the training began, and as the student stood in the riding pose, Lemur announced a break of 10 minutes. Looking at his hand, Baron thought that, as expected, it was not easy because from the third level, disciplines were added that were hard to understand. Looking at Round, Baron was puzzled because he had started from scratch and had mastered this program in less than a month. Even Baron had taken a month to master the 7 techniques of hand-to-hand combat. And if this continued, Rayon would start the fencing lessons with him. Looking at Martha, Baron said he wasn't the only one feeling uneasy and asked if she was catching up too. Martha stopped and thought that Rayon had definitely started learning hand-to-hand combat here, so why was he progressing so fast? Unlike Baron or Runan, Rayon was not familiar with hand-to-hand combat and his body was filled with cold, which was far from normal. Clenching her teeth, Martha thought that there was no way she should be inferior to Rayon. A fluttering talent. That's what Martha Sieghart used to be called. After being adopted by the Sieghart family, Martha had always been a chaser. She outnumbered the main and side branches who did nothing but puff themselves up, calling themselves geniuses. She laughed at their desperation. Martha thought she was a genius and was always the best she was. When she passed the servant, he bowed and said she had done a good job today. She rushed past without saying anything as the servant said she shouldn't be in such a hurry, and Martha stopped. Turning around, Martha asked what it meant. The servant said that he had really shown himself to be amazing lately. He added that Round Sieghart could never pass Martha. Martha frowned and asked again. She asked why the servant had said that Mr. Round had one insurmountable fatal flaw. While Rayon was practicing, one of his students came up to him and said that he wanted to ask him something about the swordsmanship pose, and if Rayon could look at it. But Round continued practicing and said that he couldn't ask him today, but he was really good at swordsmanship. Martha clapped her hands next to him and said that he was really good at it. She added that she didn't think Round would join her in sword training so quickly. With her arms folded across her chest, Martha mockingly said that with Rayon's sensitivity to mana, it was like pearls around a pig's neck. She said it was a pity that Rayon was only half talented and could not become a swordsmanship teacher. The students listened in silence. Martha looked at them and realized that they all had nothing to say, which was to be expected. After all, no one would have thought that this fool would be able to master the aura even after 4 months. That night, a servant told Martha that Mr. Rayon's aura mastery abilities were at a minimal level. Martha didn't know that. The man said that it was before Martha was adopted, and at the recognition ceremony, Rayon's sensitivity was minimal, as he said. Now, Rayon was the only one on the 5 training grounds who had not yet mastered the aura. When the servant said that even if Rayon had a talent for swordsmanship or hand-to-hand combat, his abilities were negligible, Martha smiled. As soon as the servant said that Rayon would never be a full-fledged warrior, Martha laughed and clutched her stomach. Turning away, Martha thought that even though she was still angry that the halfling had struck her, she thought she should not have paid attention to him in the first place. Suddenly, Runan came up to Martha and looked at Martha and asked her if she had anything to say to her. In response, Runan told Martha to go away. Martha asked that was all. Leaning closer, Runan repeated that she should go. Martha laughed and said she would go even if Runan didn't stand there and push her. Turning away, Martha waved her hand and said it was time for a training session that only direct line members could participate in. Wiping the sweat from his face, Round wondered if he should call it a night. During the battles in the past, Round had not been trained in martial arts. He only needed ways to survive. To progress, there was only the way to destroy people. Looking at his palm, Rayon thought that learning martial arts with which he could progress further, he had not thought it was interesting before. The spirit appeared and shouted that Rayon had finally come to his senses. He shouted that Rayon was pathetic because he was standing still after such a provocation. And Rayon asked what the provocation was, and the spirit shouted that the dark-haired girl was muttering something to him. Rayon said he wasn't paying attention. The furious spirit asked why Rayon was so indifferent. He shouted that those who said such things to him should be frozen immediately. Rayon replied that it was not profitable for him to fight now, and he could defeat someone like Martha even without the golden fire technique. When he left the hall, he saw Runan holding a box in front of him. Rayon asked her where it had come from, and Runan simply opened the box. Handing Rawan a small orb, Runan told him to eat it. Rawan felt the orb was refreshing, but he didn't know what it was. Based on what Rawan had learned from his life as a mercenary, it was better not to eat it. But Rawan took the ball to his mouth. He thought Runan wouldn't give him something strange, but when he swallowed it, his eyes opened wide. A spirit nearby asked what it was. He said he had never tasted anything so sweet, not even in the demon world. Runan asked Rawan how it was, and he said it was delicious, and Runan told him it was a bead of ice cream. Runan turned around and headed for the exit. Rawan raised his hand and shouted for her to stop. The spirit shouted at her to give her another one and then leave, but Runan walked away silently, and the spirit said she was a strange girl indeed. As a child, Runan was very fond of sweets, and judging by the size of the box, there were only 4 beads of ice cream. But Runan gave Rayon the last of the beads. This girl is a child, and she must have thought about it for a long time. Smiling because Runan was worried about him, Rayon exhaled and thought he was really okay. He decided he should pay her back later. The spirit told Rayon to ask her for more ice cream. After a while, Rayon returned to the outhouse and was greeted by Judiel, who said she would make him something. She handed him a letter and told him that it was a report sent to the Central Military Palace. Looking at Judiel, Rayon asked her if the palace had sent something back. Judiel replied that earlier when his learning speed was unimaginable, there was an order to investigate it more thoroughly. She added that because Rayon can't master mana, interest has waned. Rayon asked what about his mother. Judiel said that everything was quiet as well. Judiel also said that if this continued, she might be recalled. He thought that was bad because she could still be used. Judiel stammered and asked her to listen. She asked if it was possible that Rayon had not mastered the aura on purpose. Smiling at her, Rayon made a mad face and answered how to tell. He asked Judiel if she thought so. Judiel immediately apologized for the inappropriate question. Rayon then said she did a good job and could go. Judiel agreed. Watching her walk away, the spirit said that if anyone heard, they would think Rayon was hiding his abilities on purpose. Leaning back, Rayon said that being able to use the situation and atmosphere is also an ability. Spirit commented saying, "Pathetic guy." Standing up, Rayon said that he was indeed pathetic, so they should go to morning training. The spirit shouted that this was cruel and suggested that they get some sleep. However, Rayon replied that with training it would be easier for him to create an aura. When he opened the door of the house, he saw Lemaire sitting on a bench with sparrows sitting around him. When Rayon came closer, he called his name and Lemaire asked him if he was awake. And Rayon asked why Limer was in the backyard of their house. Limer said he came to give a lesson, especially for Rayon. Putting his hand on Rayon's shoulder, Limer informed him that he would tell him what his attribute was. It was dawning and Rayon and Limer were walking up the mountain. Rayon asked why they were doing this if Limer said he would tell him what his attribute was. Limer replied that he didn't need to be pushed and Rayon should just wait. He said he might be a little lazy, but he was an elf and a good teacher. Rayon turned around and asked what kind of attribute training he could talk about in a place like this. And Limer told him that he couldn't forget the day he expanded his perception zone and tested his cultivation technique. Compared to ordinary techniques, it was on a completely different level. Rayon's aura at that moment resembled a strong flame or even burning magma. Even more surprisingly, Rayon didn't use it to remove the cold from the mana circuit, but rather tried to take it in along with the fire. If Rayon could fully master this cultivation technique, stopping among the trees, Limer said that it was enough. Rayon looked around and asked why they were in the center of the forest, but Limer didn't let him speak and raised his hand to apply aura pressure. He said that he wanted to use the wind to create a sword that would protect his master. Limer said that what Rayon was feeling now was the wind he had chosen. Limer said that even though he had shown it to Rayon to familiarize him with it, as a trans 30-year-old, he might not be the least bit afraid of it. Limer turned around and added that as an elf he had felt the wind since birth, but Rayon was human and it was different, and the situation was more complicated. Limers also said that the wind has several varieties, warm, cold, or even piercing. Lifting his palm and looking up at the sky, Limer told him that he wanted a wind sword that could cut through anything, and he had achieved it. While Rayon was looking at his hands, Limer said that he too needed to find something like that, and suggested that he think about the image of fire he wanted to possess. Looking at his teacher, Rayon reminded him that they were in the north, and it was hard to see a normal flame unless you set the whole mountain on fire. Limerus smiled and said that in that case they would both be in trouble. He said that there was a place nearby that would be perfect for Rayon. Limerus waved and shouted to the man that he had come. The blacksmith replied that the fire had become strange. He asked if it was because of Limer's reduced heat, but Limer replied that it was clear that this was his next failure. Rayon asked what kind of place it was. And Limer replied that this was the place where you could feel the hottest and most violent fire in the whole north. In front of Rayon was the master's charcoal kiln. The master turned around and asked who Limer had brought this time. And Limer folded his arms and asked if he could be so rude to the grandson of the head of the house. But the master asked him that he was an old man on a pencil and unless the head of the house came to him himself. Looking at the fire in front of him, Rayon wondered if it was the flame he knew. A fire built by his own hand, fire magic of the highest level used by mages. In his past life, Rayon had seen a lot of fire. But the flames in this furnace are the heat of the flames, the image of the flames Rayon wants to master. Suddenly, Rayon looked around and saw the shovel behind him, and realized that the fire had been turned down. The master spoke and said that his name was Balkan, and if Rayon wanted to be treated with courtesy, he would have to go elsewhere. When Rayon heard his name, he realized that this was the man who held the title of world-renowned master of the continent. The master who was rumored to have created Glenn Sieghart's Thunder Sword. There had been no news of this master for 30 years, and Rayon would never have thought such a man would be here. Bowing, Rayon asked permission to introduce himself and gave his full name. Turning to Lemur, Balkan asked if he had told Rayon about him. Shaking his head, the lemur said no. Turning to Rayon, Limer smiled and told him that the old man was Master Sieghart Balkan, added that he was retired. Limer corrected himself and agreed that he was a retired master, but added that Balkan had been building fires here for over a decade. Turning to Balkan, Limer asked if he did this all year round. He added that this was the best place for Rayon to feel the fire. He asked Balkan if it would be possible. The master reminded him that there was also a blacksmith shop, but Limer said that place was too conspicuous and that Rayon should not be seen in public until he had learned his cultivation technique. Balkan didn't understand what not showing his face meant, and Lemaire replied that Rayon was Sylvia's son. Hearing this, Balkan turned to Rayon and he put his hand on his chest and said that he would not interfere with him, and asked only to be able to feel the fire. Then Balkan said that he was making charcoal, which, unlike white or black charcoal, could produce a much higher heat. Turning away again, Balkan added that if Rayon didn't interfere with the process, he could do anything. When they were done, Limer told Balkan that he was still being kind, though he had no idea Balkan would agree so quickly. Putting a hand on his shoulder, Lemaire smiled and said that if Balkan took good care of Rayon later, he would bring him a good drink. But Balkan replied that he had not agreed because of Lemur. He said that the fire in the furnace had gotten much stronger when Rayon had come. According to Balkan, the boy's breath showed incredible power to move the flames, and Balkan said that perhaps this child was his greatest wish. It's been 7 months since Rayon began walking to Balkan's charcoal furnace. It also awakens the energy of the golden fire, which Rayon has not yet mastered. Even though people fear fire as their most powerful attribute, learning to handle it properly changes everything. The masterful energy of fire makes it much more stable than other attributes, and it also awakens the energy of the golden fire. Standing at the stove, Ryan kept thinking of Lemera's words when he said to think about the image of fire that Ryan wanted to master. And so Ryan kept thinking about the image of fire he needed to master, about blowing Darius's head off, about bringing Sylvia's back in a straight line. Ryan's goals are no different than walking in total darkness with nothing to see. Rayon needs a torch to light the way or a flame to become a sword to slash a threatening predator. Whether it snows or rains, it must not be extinguished. This is the flame Rayon has chosen. A much stronger energy than usual is now flowing into Rayon's body. The heat of the furnace and all the space around Rayon is entering his body. Rayon must concentrate and catch this fire and feel it. Was it a trance state? The mental image from Rayon's head was in front of his eyes right now. He thought if he concentrated a little more, suddenly a blue light appeared. It was the spirit. He appeared and said it was his turn. He reminded him that he said he would take advantage of the moment when Rayon was weakest. He ordered Rayon to freeze right now, watching his hand freeze. Rayon clenched his teeth because he was too relaxed. The spirit had been quiet for some time now, so Rayon had forgotten that the spirit was not on his side. A demon just waiting for the right moment to take his life. And not just anyone, but the king of the demon world. Rayon's body felt like it was being torn into small pieces, and it was getting harder and harder for him to breathe. He knew that if he moved even a little, he would surely die, and if he stopped the golden fire technique, he would also die. Clenching his teeth, Rayon decided that he needed to focus and concentrate his aura. In order to survive, Rayon had to think of all the possible options, but his mind was slowly becoming clouded. The spirit said that the way Rayon was trying to survive was moving him to tears. He asked Rayon if he thought he could make it in front of his power as he had done before. He kept saying that all Rayon's efforts were in vain, and that he was no different from the old man who did nothing but fire up his stove day after day. Already half of Rayon's body was covered with ice, and the spirit told him not to worry because he would realize his places. When he heard the word furnace, Rayon mentally thanked the spirit for giving him a clue at the end of the day. Clenching his teeth, Rayon realized that he had no other choice. Then Rayon decided that he needed to absorb not the natural mana heated in the heat of the furnace, but the mana in the interior of the furnace itself. Imagining the fire, Rayon thought he needed the most ardent fire that could consume everything in the world. Seeing what Rayon was doing, the spirit screamed with rage, and Rayon said it was a death agony. Meanwhile, after putting the wood on the shovel and putting it in the furnace, Balkan dozed off. He woke up and saw that everything was on fire. As he fell to the floor, Balkan wondered what had happened that had caused the heat in the furnace to increase so dramatically. Balkan turned around and said that he had never seen a flame so strong before and wondered what had happened. Walking over to Rayon, who was shivering from the cold, Balkan reached out his hand and asked if he was all right. Balkan asked why Rayon was shivering so suddenly and asked him to answer him. He opened his arms and told Balkan not to touch Rayon. He said he should be left alone. Balkan clenched his fists and shouted what Lemaris was talking about. He shouted that Rayon was about to die. And Limer replied that Rayon was in a trance and there was nothing they could do. Then Balkan asked if the boy's body was filled with the cold he was talking about, and they really couldn't help him. Limer answered that it was dangerous. In his head, Rayon fell on all fours. There were flames all around, and the spirit shouted for him to stop immediately. And Rayon asked him not to make him laugh. He asked the spirit to suggest that he should die without doing anything, and added that it was enough in his past life. And Rayon thought that his past life was nothing. He couldn't even close his eyes till the last minute of his life. He decided that it won't happen again. Looking at the gauge, Balkan exclaimed that the heat was too high, and if it continued, he added that the furnace could not cope with the sudden increase in firepower. Looking at Rayon, Limer realized that the mana of the furnace was collecting in one place. Limer realized that Rayon was absorbing the mana. Suddenly, there was a huge explosion in the hut. Closing in on the fire, Limer shouted to Rayon if he was all right. Standing behind him, Balkan also shouted Rayon's name. Then they saw Rayon getting up. Rayon stood up and saw a golden-colored flame in front of him. Raising his hands, Rayon looked at them, and the system notified him that he had mastered the cultivation technique. A blue-colored flame appeared in front of Rayon, and the system informed him that the 2 bundles of the Curse of Lucid Cold were disappearing along with his low stamina. As a result of receiving the powerful cold from the spirit penetrating cold spirit, he had reached the 2nd level. With a hand on his chest, Rayon thought that no one knew that failure would turn out to be such a blessing. Now, Rayon could blossom in no time. He didn't even realize it would be like this when he was going through all this trouble. Then Rayon turned his attention to the system. Looking at it, Rayon even thought it was a dream because it couldn't be such a high reward. It seemed that thanks to the spirit's interference, Rayon had reached a level that would take years of training. Meanwhile, the spirit did not disappear. Behind Rayon's back, he shouted who Rayon was, and that he was sure Rayon's willpower was at its limit. He asked how Rayon was able to win in such a situation. Rayon turned to him, and he replied that he had already said that such tricks would not work on him. No matter what the spirit did, it was useless. Even though Rayon had said so, he had almost died this time. Today, Rayon was convinced that he had to be careful with the spirit. Even if they had become friends for a while, the spirit was definitely still his enemy. He could never be allowed to know his secrets and weaknesses. Balkan came up to Rayon and asked if he was all right. Rayon said yes. Balkan asked if Rayon had finally formed an aura. Rayon said yes, and it was all thanks to Balkan. Looking at the broken stove, Rayon apologized for it. Shaking his head, Balkan said that it was nothing, and that the main thing was that there were no problems, and that was enough. Looking at the furnace, Balkan said that a new one could be made. Suddenly, he noticed something. Watching Balkan walking towards the furnace, Rayon asked what was wrong, and Balkan said it was nothing and took a shovel. After digging into something, Balkan pulled out a shovel with golden charcoal on it. When Balkan retired, people said that he wanted to make his own golden charcoal again. People said that such things only happen in legends. Some even said that Balkan's heart must be empty if he believed in something like that. Remembering all these conversations, Balkan looked at the golden coal and said it was ironic. Laying the coal on the floor, Balkan said that this coal gives more heat than white coal and burns longer than black coal. The golden coal he had been trying to create for decades he had found thanks to Rayon. Rayon raised his hands. Rayon said he had done nothing. And Balkan said that every time Rayon cultivated mana, the flame in the furnace wavered, and Rayon's breath gave the fire life. Balkan also said that even though he was an ignoramus who had only held a hammer his whole life, he still knew what Rayon had done. And so Balkan wanted to ask Rayon something else. What was his purpose? At first, Rayon didn't understand the question and asked what kind of swordsman Rayon wanted to be. Rayon replied that he wanted to be someone who would not bend to anyone under any circumstances. Balkan looked at him and said that those were clearly not the words a boy could say. He added that in the next 5 years, Rayon would be able to get his own personal sword, and then, if his heart was unbending, he could come to it. Pointing to the golden coal, Balkan said he would keep it until then. Just in case Rayon clarified Balkan meant what the sword would do for him, and reminded him that he had sort of retired. But Balkan said that retirement could be cancelled. Balkan asked Rayon not to die until that day and waved him off. As Limer watched them from the hill, he wondered how it would end, but in the end, Rayon formed an aura. In Limer's opinion, this boy really had the ability to scare people. He turned to the head standing behind him and asked if that wasn't true. Folding his hands, Limer reminded him that the head was so worried about his grandson that he came here every day and now he should finally feel better. Limerus also said that the amount and purity of Rayon's mana had become serious, and that he had been using the aura since he had gotten it. As he watched his grandson leave, the head said that there was more to the story, and Limer looked at him questioningly. And the head said that even the shackles that were meant for Rayon, he had turned into his own power. Runan stood on the 5th training board, holding the box in her hands, looking at the gate and wondering when Rayon would come. Looking at the box, Runan remembered the students discussing how Rayon still had no aura and didn't deserve to be the best student. In fact, Runan wanted to help Rayon. Her mother had told her to return kindness to those she was grateful to. So Rayon came through the gate. He asked the spirit why he was going on if Rayon had already said he would never make it. But the spirit told Rayon not to be conceited because one day he would. Not letting him finish, Rayon told him to try harder. Rayon stopped and looked at her questioningly. Opening the box of ice cream, Runan simply said strength to you. Rayon said nothing. Taking the ice cream, he happily said it was the same as last time and thanked her. At that moment, Runan remembered the refreshing smell coming from Rayon, and noticed that it had changed to a richer and more pleasant flavor. As Rayon swallowed the balloon, the spirit nearby exclaimed in delight at the flavor. As the spirit flew up, he said that even though he hadn't tasted the flavor in a long time, it was still as good as ever, and asked to eat the rest. But Rayon told him that Runan liked it very much himself, so he closed the box and thanked her. This surprised Runan, and she asked if Rayon wanted more, but he said that one was enough. Then Runan asked if it gave Rayon strength. Rayon exhaled and said it did. This pleased Raunan, and she turned around and left. Looking at her, Rayon thought she was hard to understand. When the students had gathered, Limerus said that they were probably bored with training and said that he was planning to organize something in a month. He added that for the past 7 months, they had been constantly working on their bases and cultivating, so it was time to start firing up their Dantian. Smiling, Limer summarized that they would have a competition in a month. He also said that winning or losing it would affect the graduation and ranking of the disciple. When Limer said they had better prepare properly, someone raised their hand. It was Martha. She said that there was still one student among them who had not created an aura, so what should this retarded student do? Closing his eyes, Limer said that this guy said that he had finally created an aura too. Hearing this, Martha turned to Rayon and asked when it was. Limer replied that it was yesterday or today. Martha smiled at Rayon and said that she had finally gotten her chance and had to wait so long for it that she was bored. She walked toward him and asked if Rayon remembered how she had said she hated it when someone weaker than her stood over her. Leaning over, Martha added that she'd had enough and suggested that Rayon had been having a hard time taking up space that wasn't right for him all along. She started to say that this time she would definitely, he asked. Suddenly a hand appeared between them. Baron came up to them and told Martha to move away. Baron said that it hadn't even been a day since Rayon had possessed the aura. Looking at the hand, Martha clenched her teeth, and Baron said that Martha already wanted to fight Rayon in a month. But did the swordsman's honor mean anything to her? Putting her hand on Baron's shoulder, Martha called him Lord, and said that he seemed to have grown up as a precious slain of the family, and knew the importance of honor. Martha then said that honor is only shown to those who deserve it. Pointing her finger backwards, Martha added that even those backward people were able to create an aura in a month, while the best student took more than half a year. She went on to say that this would be enough time to create an aura even with top-level cultivation techniques. In her opinion, it showed that Rayon simply didn't have the ability, and Martha said that Baron was the best person to realize that. An incomplete swordsman who can't master the aura will never be able to make his name famous. No matter how skilled he is with the sword, it means nothing. Turning to Lemur, Martha asked if the headmaster had suddenly proposed the competition to change the place of the best student. Lemurus asked who knew, and so Martha turned to Rayon again. She told him that for his abilities, he had been the best for too long, and it seemed time to leave him behind. Putting her hands at her sides, Martha said that therefore, as she had said, the place of the best Uwenchik should go to the one who wins the competition. But Rayon said he didn't want to, and Martha's face stretched. He asked her if she really thought it was possible to participate in gambling without money. Rayon also said that if she asked him to put him in the best place on the line, she should also make an equivalent bet. Martha laughed and said that Rayon apparently still didn't understand how the situation was developing. Smiling, Rayon asked if maybe Martha was scared, and Martha asked if that was what he had just told her. She started laughing so loudly that she clutched her stomach and repeated that it was very funny. Putting her hand in her pocket, Martha said that she would accept the last provocation, and asked Rayon if he wanted to make a bet in words only. From her pocket, she took out a guwadin, a miracle drug her father had given Martha. Holding the box up to Rayon's face, Martha said that if he won the contest, she would give it to him. Turning to the spirit, Rayon asked if he remembered that Rayon had promised to show him something interesting, and now there was something he could take away from Martha. and the spirit asked what that meant. Round said it meant that this was the moment. A month later, Martha went to the calendar and saw that today was the last day of the month. Rubbing her wrist, Martha thought that now she could finally repay Ryan. Before coming here, she had never been overpaid even when she lived on the outskirts of the city. But that was the first time she had ever been paid by someone. 8 months later, Martha had a chance to repay that humiliation. It had only been a month since Ryan had mastered the aura, and the fact that he would be competing against her who had been training for 3 years made no sense. But to continue to wait for someone who has no ability at all is a waste of time in Martha's opinion. For the sake of the man, she must become stronger as soon as possible to save him. Standing on the training ground, Limer told the students that watching the fight was as important as participating in it. He asked the students to watch the other students carefully and think about what they would do in a certain situation. So Limer said that Baron Sieghart and Dorian would go first. Baron walked up to Limer and Dorian raised a trembling hand and turned to the teacher. Baron looked back at him and Limer asked what was wrong. And Dorian said with sad eyes that he was giving up. Baron looked at him in surprise and Limer whispered that they hadn't even started yet. Clutching his stomach, Dorian began to say that he wasn't feeling well and that he hadn't slept at all since yesterday. Looking at Dorian, the spirit said that if he had gotten Dorian instead of Rayon, he would have decapitated him already. Rayon replied that it was expected. Limerus approached Dorian and asked him to at least try. Even if he lost, he would learn something. He agreed, but when the fight started, Dorian almost immediately laid down on the ground and said he was giving up. Limer approached Baron and said that he was still not able to control his emotions, and that if he tried harder, he would defeat him faster. And Baron said that Dorian's reaction made him angry, and he asked why he kept giving up. He said that Dorian could have held out longer. But Dorian apologized, saying he was just scared, and Limer said they could go next. The two opponents were Runan, and Crane attacked first with a punch. However, Runan was able to counter it, and when Crane jumped up, she threw a punch, causing her to release her sword. When Crane got to her feet, Limer stopped the fight and told her that she was too nervous and that her sword-swinging movements should be relaxed. Turning to Runan, Limer said that her counterattacks were not bad, but she was using a weak aura. Limers called Martha and Ryan next, saying that they were probably waiting for their turn. Immediately after the fight started, Martha attacked Ryan, but he fought her off. Standing back, Martha said she didn't expect him to deflect all her attacks and said she had to accept that he had talent. Raising her sword, Martha shouted that his talent was limited to swordsmanship and called him an underdeveloped swordsman. Jumping up, Martha swung her sword, saying that Ryan would never be good. But when she lowered her sword, Rayon drew his weapon and fought off that attack as well. Continuing to hold the sword, Martha sarcastically said that he was able to block her, but how long would he last? She kept shouting that talent was essential in both aura and swordsmanship, and Rayon's talent allowed him to create an aura the size of a pea after half a year. Martha said that if Rayon did nothing, her next attack would shatter his bones, but Rayon struck. When Martha flew back, Rayon said she was all about talent, and he was annoyed at how much talent mattered in this house. Martha responded by saying that it might be annoying to him, but she's having fun, and that's why she wants to show him what real talent can do. Ron replied that in that case, he would show her the opposite. Using his aura, Rayon said that he would show her that talent is not the most important thing. Standing in a stance, Rayon used the first flame of the 10,000 Flames cultivation technique. Lowering her sword, Martha was surprised and asked what kind of fire it was. At that moment, she realized that it was not an ordinary flame and it was dangerous. Looking at the fire, Martha thought that the flame was so beautiful that it gave her goosebumps, but what was its specialty? She said she should stop playing with Rayon and got into the solid stone stance. It's a technique that gathers all the aura in one place. Rayon realized that Martha must be talented to be able to do it at her age. Martha said that she accepted that Rayon was strong, but even with his aura, she thought he couldn't take such a blow. She jumped up and attacked him from above, but Rayon ducked and deflected the blow. The students who were watching the fight shouted as the ground cracked and they wondered who would win. Dust rose around the fighters from the heavy attack and only silhouettes could be seen through it. Martha was lying on the ground with her sword broken, and Ran was standing over her. As they watched Rayon rubbing his wrist, the students shouted that it could not be that even Lady Martha had lost to him. At night, Limerus came to the palace to see the head of the palace. The head summarized that Rayon had defeated Martha. Limerus said that Rayon had completely suppressed her aura. And the head said that Rayon's strength was not developmentally appropriate, and he must have gotten their ancestor's strength. He asked Limer to guide Rayon. Smiling, Limer replied that it would be done. Then the head asked how Martha was feeling. Limer replied that it was a shock for her, but the wounds would heal quickly. The only problem was her mental state. While Rayon was planting the flowers, the spirit was yelling that he was doing it wrong and the flowers would get hurt. He yelled for Rayon to do as he said, or the spirit would freeze him. Turning on him, Rayon asked him to stop being so strong. Spirit yelled that Rayon was so brave because of the damn water resistance. The day Rayon defeated Martha, the disaster orb he received as a reward greatly improved his abilities. A fourth ring of fire had been created and many negative effects had disappeared. Rayon's efforts had paid off handsomely. Of course, there were a lot of upgrades, but special attention should be paid to the water resistance of the stars, which helped him keep his anger in check. Anyway, since it was his last day of rest, Rayon decided to rest a bit and take care of the flowers. But the spirit shouted that Rayon was an idiot because he had to dig deeper and a little farther when transplanting, and Rayon didn't understand why he had to listen to his nagging. Then the spirit told Rayon to mix the nutrients with his hands instead of a spatula. It was unclear why the spirit was so good at it. And the spirit told him that when he was in the demon world, he filled the flower beds with ice flowers and then the demons began to worship them. Rayon turned around and saw Martha standing in the gate. She looked at him silently, and Rayon said that he hoped she had not come to fight him. Martha remained silent. Watching him, Martha thought it was his hobby. She thought he wasn't that kind of kid and decided she was wrong. And then Martha said she wanted to fight him again. Turning away, Rayon said he understood, but he was so stubborn not to admit defeat. He added that it was out of the norm. Martha shouted that she didn't say she wouldn't accept defeat. And Martha said that she didn't understand how it happened, and she came to him to find out. Rayon asked what she was betting. Martha looked at him questioningly, but Rayon said that if she wanted to challenge him, she had to bring something with her. Martha spread her hands and said that he must be laughing because there didn't have to be anything at stake. Then Rayon replied that he didn't need it. Martha thought that he had no desire to fight and what to do. So Martha decided to try and make Rayon angry. She lifted his leg and said he seemed to like flowers, and said they weren't too good for him, but Rayon replied that wasn't quite true, and Martha interjected, As they continued to plant the flower, Rayon told her that he didn't like flowers very much, and didn't even know why he should like them. He said that looking after them was just helping his mother, and Martha clucked when she heard that. Turning away, she said, "Let it be as he wants it to be." At that moment, Sylvia came out. When she saw Marta, she asked if she was a friend of Rauna's and assumed she was a friend from training. Looking at her, Martha realized that it was Sylvia Sieghart who had left her family for a man and returned in desperation to save the child. Sylvia said that if she had black hair and eyes, she was Martha. Raun, who was standing next to her, began to whisper that she was not his friend. But Sylvia didn't listen to him and went over to Marta and told her what she had heard about their sparring and asked if Marta was hurt. She said she was fine. Stroking Marta's cheek, Sylvia said that rumor had it that Brother Denier had raised a talented child, but that Marta was also very beautiful. Clapping her hands, Sylvia asked what Martha was doing here. Martha said that she had come to say something and that she was done with it. Sylvia took her hand and suggested that they go for a snack while Marta was still here. Marta was confused, and Sylvia said that she could not just let her go. So Martha and Rayon sat across from each other in the dining area, and Sylvia served them food. Sylvia asked Marta's age and if she was having a hard time with her training. She answered meekly. While Marta ate, Sylvia told them that they didn't cook very well compared to the main house, and the quality of the meat was a bit lower. Putting her hand on Marta's shoulder, Sylvia told her to chew every bite or her stomach would hurt. At that moment, Martha remembered her mother telling her the same thing. When they had eaten, Martha bowed, and Sylvia told Martha to continue to be friends with Rayon. Rayon looked at the spirit and asked if it was going to end like this, because he thought she had come for a fight and assumed she had eaten something wrong. As Martha walked along, she thought Rayon would probably think she was crazy, but those eyes of Sylvia's Martha thought she looked just like her mother, so she couldn't say anything to her. Even though her face, hair color, and voice are completely different at that moment, Martha clearly felt it. The same feeling she felt from her mom after her mother was kidnapped by criminals and adopted by Denier. Martha resolved never to lose until she found her mother, and so far her winning streak had continued. Until the day after her loss to Rayon, the Siegharts saw Martha's talent and took her in, but after a loss like that, they might kick her out. Although her father appears to be a gentleman, but what if it's just a mask? If it is, Martha's hope of finding her mother is over. When Martha entered her house, the servant said she was quite late. Martha asked Carmel who he was expecting. He said he had a letter for her. Taking the envelope, Martha asked her father who had written the letter. Carmel said he had written it right after the sparring. The letter said that she shouldn't worry too much and that her father wanted to comfort her in person, but that he had urgent business to attend to. He also said that the search for her mother was still going on and that he had not given up, so Martha should not give up either. As Martha passed by, she asked him to tell her father that she would keep this in mind, and asked him to tell her father that she appreciated him very much. As she closed the door to her room, Martha thought that this was the first time she had lost badly. And not because she was too careless, Martha knew she had just lost. Taking the dagger, Martha raised her hair and decided that she needed to accept defeat and go forward after all. As his daughter, she couldn't disgrace herself forever. She thought that if she let everything flow in the same direction, she would stop, and then she would no longer have the right to look at her father's face. Looking in the mirror, Martha decided that she was starting over and she needed to let go of the stupid and dirty past. Now Martha decided that she would become even stronger after night fell. The next day, the students were shocked to see Martha and assumed that something had happened to the mistress. Walking up to Raun, Martha said she knew that apologizing would not undo what she had done to him in the past, but she would keep her promise. Looking at her in surprise, Raun asked what promise. Turning around, Martha reminded him that the loser would obey the winner, and Martha said that was all she had to say for today. Raun was surprised. He didn't think Martha would act so humble over a simple promise. Martha seems to have changed in this short time too. She's a little too mature for her age. As Martha walked, she kicked Dorian, asking why he was getting in her way, and ordered him to get out of the way. Dorian shouted that he was sorry. A new year has come. There have been a few small changes. Contrary to everyone's expectations, Martha continued to listen only to Raun. Baron became more patient with the other students, and Runan, though still aloof, became more precise with her sword. And Raun gave himself fully to training every day. The apprentices saw that he had perfected his technique. They thought it couldn't be because it hadn't even been half a day since Raun had learned it. Meeting with the head again, Limerick said that it was incredible, and he was sure that Rayon had learned everything through mental imagery. Turning around, the head asked if Lemur was Rayon's butler because he was only talking about him. Limerus looked at the grounds and noticed that the workers near the main building were very busy and asked if they were preparing something. The head replied that someone would be visiting them soon. Limer asked who, of course, and the head said that in a few days they will be visited by a delegation from the kingdom of Orvan. This kingdom is one of the 6 kings located in the center of the continent, one of the few strongest located in the neighborhood of the Siegharts. Hearing this, Limer asked who would be the representative of the delegation. The head replied that it was rumored to be the 3rd prince, but he thought it would be Duke Tartan. Limerus remembered that the 3rd prince was too young and should be the same age as Rayon. The head replied that he did not know that. He asked Lemur to make sure that all the students behaved properly. Lemur specified their training area as well. Looking at him, the head said that the guests wanted to see the swordsman and the apprentices training. They can't embarrass themselves. In response, Limer said that if the 3rd prince is the same age as Rayon, then it sounds like something fun. The head said that Limer must have already planned something. When Limer told the students the news, they were shocked that they were going to have a practice duel with the apprentice knights of the Orvan kingdom. But Limer said that he was sure that they already knew that a delegation was coming, and that the 3rd prince wanted to duel with them. The apprentices stammered that it was too sudden and looked at each other. Limerus reminded them what he always told them, that a swordsman should be ready for battle even while sleeping. Someone said that the delegation wanted to see the 6th training ground. The students were speculating why the delegation was coming to them. Earlier, Lemur had gone to the prince and talked to him. He said that if the prince had time tomorrow, he could go to the 5th training ground. Turning away, Lemur said that this was indeed unexpected news. Telling the guests that they could enter, Lemur told the students that they could just get acquainted first. The knights entered, and Lemur said that the apprentices could meet the apprentice knights of the Orvan Kingdom. Even at first glance, the 3rd prince has the strongest presence out of all of them. Turning to Round, Lemur asked if he too was hesitant to duel with the knights, and Rayon looked at the prince. He thought it would be a good idea to practice the stepping technique he had recently learned along with his sword skills. Then Round answered that he would like to, and Lemur said since everyone agreed then they should choose 20 people from their group. When Lemur said that he had bet his entire monthly salary on them winning, and the students should win no matter what, everyone opened their mouths. After a while, Round selected the right number of people and summarized that everyone was ready. He asked the students to look at the knights they would be fighting before they started. Rayon also said to look closely at the hands of the opponents, and noted that they were trembling. Rayon said that the opponents have beautiful armor and confident postures, but reminded them that they are apprentices just like them. After the opening speech, Rayon shouted for them not to be nervous and to give their best. Everyone shouted yes, and Round said that he would then determine the order in which they would leave. Turning away, Rayon thought that those who would go first would be a decisive factor in motivating the others, so it was worth sending the strongest first. As soon as Round said that Martha would go first, she turned around and waved her hand and said she would sort it out quickly. And Rowan said that if they were ready, they should gather in the center. Martha's friend stood next to them and asked if the knights were exactly their age. The boy was worried about why they were so big and said he felt like he was looking at a knight instead of an apprentice. The young man who stood across from Martha said his name was Tears and he was looking forward to their duel. It was obvious that the difference in their height was too huge. It seemed that even Lady Martha would not be able to avoid defeat. Martha smiled and said that even so she would win. She asked Tars to put aside politeness and attack. The prince watching the fight was shocked that Martha was pushing through Tars. It was obvious that the swordsmen of the 2nd training squad were clearly strong. In the prince's opinion, they lived up to the name of Siegharts, and their skills could be compared to the knights of the kingdom. But the 6th training squad disappointed the prince. The disciples there were well trained, but they were behind the Robert family disciple. To the prince's surprise, there were some really talented cadets. The prince's mentor told Lemur that he had come to them so suddenly and offered to visit the 5th training hall and asked if that was why he had come. In response, Lemur said that it was rare to be given the opportunity to fight against one of the emperor's 6 knights as training, and it was a good lesson. The mentor said that he found it hard to believe that these were the words of someone who used to be called an outstanding swordsman, and Lemur asked how he should behave then. He suggested to the mentor that we make a wager, and the mentor asked what the terms would be. Lemur said they would have 20 duels and reward the winner. Then the mentor asked Lemaris if he thought his students would defeat the knights. Lemaris laughed and said that he had great faith in his cadets. Turning to him, Lemur added that he believed in his own too. Once again, when Martha attacked Tars, his sword split, and Tars thought, why is Martha so strong? Then Martha took the hilt of her sword and stabbed her opponent in the stomach. Then Martha was declared the winner. Seeing this, Round thought he was surprised. He thought Martha would be softer after fighting him, but instead she had increased her speed and power. Looking at Martha, Rayon whispered that she was funny. Spirit asked him if he liked watching the ants fight, and said that it was boring for him. Looking at the spirit, Rayon replied that not all ants are young, the spirit only snorted. He started to say that the demon duels were more interesting to watch. Putting it in his bracelet, Rayon asked the spirit to shut up. Time was running out, and the 18th duel would involve Runan and Adelia. Adelia stood in front of her opponent and said she didn't like the aloof look in Runan's eyes. When Adelia drew her sword, she immediately applied her fire aura, and Runan said she didn't like fire. When she drew her sword, she applied her aura and everyone felt cold. Then the fire and ice came together in a fierce fight, and dust rose around them, and Adelia lost sight of her rival. At that moment, Runan was behind her back and she turned around and waved her sword and shouted. But there was no one there. Adelia assumed it was an illusion. While Adelia was looking at her opponent on one knee, Runan approached her from behind and put her sword to her throat. Runan left immediately afterward, and Adelia said that she had lost, but it had been a good fight. Runan asked Round if he had been watching. Round complimented her on her good footwork. Sitting down next to her, Runan tucked her legs in and hugged them, and then thanked Round. Spreading his arms, Lemur shouted that they had 9 wins and 9 losses, and it got pretty hot. He moved on to the 19th round, where Baron and Saren spoke. The young man in front of Baron announced that he was Saren Cassel, a knight in training. Watching them, Round remarked that Saren was quite strong, and he was the strongest of all except for the 3rd prince. As soon as the start of the fight was announced, Baron raised his sword. Saren jumped up and attacked him. Baroon noticed that Cernois' sword skills were almost as good as his, and if he let his guard down for even a second, it would be over. They both fought hard, and both Baron and Saroon broke their swords during the fight. As Limerus approached them, he called a draw, and the 2 men went their separate ways. As Baron passed by, Rayon told him that it was a good job because it was the strongest opponent. Gritting his teeth, Baron asked what difference it made. He was fighting to put the name of the Siegharts on the line, and therefore he had to win at all costs. Putting his hand on his shoulder, Rayon told him not to worry, saying that he would win the last fight and bring glory to the Sieghart family name. Raon immediately took up the hilt of his sword. Looking at him, the prince was surprised that Raon was his opponent. The fighting prowess he sensed from Raon was too unusual. He asked if Raon was a direct blood descendant of the Siegharts, and Raon said he was not. The prince thought he didn't expect a one-on-one fight. Looking at the direct descendants, the prince thought he would rather fight one of the 3. Turning to Lemur, the prince said he had a proposition to make. Lemur asked what it was. Pointing to Runan and Martha, the prince said that they were not tired of their rivals and asked if he could duel with them if Rana won. In response, Limerus cheerfully said that he was not against it, and if the prince won, he could duel with them. The prince said that he was sure he could do it, and the girls could get ready. Taking out his sword, the prince thought that he would not use his aura against Rayon to save his power. At this time, his mentor asked Limer what kind of monster Rayon added that he didn't even notice it because of its stealth. Limer said that the mentor must have been blind and asked why he hadn't warned the 3rd prince when he found out. The mentor replied that the prince thought Ron was inept. Someday she would be the future of the kingdom of Orvan, but he didn't know defeat, and he just wanted the prince to learn how to lose in a safe environment like this. And he implied that the prince is still strong, and things won't be easy. In response, Limer asked if they could make another wager and put drinks on the line. The man noted that Limer was very fond of such games. He asked what the terms were, and Limer showed him his palm and said that Rayon could handle the their prince in 5 attacks. After applying the aura, Round started to attack. Seeing this, the prince clenched his teeth. With great speed, Round swept past and struck the prince in the side. The prince coughed up blood and Limer said that it was probably over. Looking down at the floor, the prince realized that he was wrong, and probably not for nothing, Ryan was the last one. The mentor became indignant and asked if Round was really an apprentice because his footwork and swordsmanship were already perfect. Limerus replied that that was why he was sure of his victory, and added that he would book a table at a fancy place. Suddenly the prince rose and told Round to stop, because he wasn't finished yet. Limerus intervened and said that the fight was over, but the prince shouted that he had yet to show his true abilities. Martha laughed and said that either a dog was barking or she heard it. Ryun and the prince looked at her, and Martha asked why the one who should be the prince could not recognize his position and called him a shameful whiner. The prince was surprised at her manners, and Martha said she was trying to hold back. With a grimace, Martha told the prince to get out of here because he was shitting himself. Adelia intervened and shouted for Martha to watch the Yazok because she was talking to the prince. Martha replied that she was from the straight branch too. With a clap of his hands, Limer said that was enough and they needed to hear Rayon's opinion, and told him that the decision was his. Rayon recalled that Lemur had said he had bet on it, and since the duels were over, there was no reason to fight anymore. In response, the prince yelled that he recognized that he had lost. He said that he had misjudged Rayon's strength and was so ashamed and embarrassed that he couldn't raise his head. Getting down on one knee, the prince asked Rayon to fight him again because if he left like that, he would regret it for the rest of his life. Rising up, he bowed to Rayon and called him by his full name and asked again. Rayon didn't expect the prince to apologize or even lower his sword, and he thought he was just an arrogant prince. And so Rayon said he agreed, but this would be the last time the prince even exclaimed. Taking his pendant, the prince thought that he was arrogant, and so he didn't realize that Round was experienced, and so he lost. Tearing off the pendant, the prince decided that this time he would give it his best shot. As he grabbed his sword, lightning flashed around him, surprising Martha and Rayon. Behind him, his mentor shouted to the prince that this technique was not a time to hide his abilities, but the prince interrupted him and said that now was not the time to hide his abilities. He said he wanted to fight Round with all his strength. The spirit told Round that the prince is a fool because he doesn't know that Round is hiding his abilities. In response, Round said that he could beat the prince this time too, and the spirit said that the prince has much more aura than Rayon and is stronger than him. So the spirit proposed a wager that if Rayon won, all stats would increase by 4 points, and if he lost, his rage would increase by 10 points. Pushing himself off the ground, the prince said he was starting and flew up. He threw a punch, but Round deflected it. Everything was happening so fast that the students couldn't see anything. Striking again, the prince thought he was going all out, but Round didn't back down. Looking at his opponent, the prince wondered if he could be called a genius. In the prince's opinion, he looked more like a monster. Clutching his sword tighter, the prince decided he would use everything he had. Seeing this, Round thought it must be a technique of the sword of Persia that is only passed down to the heirs of the kingdom of Orvan. Considering the energy the prince was emitting, he must be going all out in his next attack. Ryan raised his sword and called the prince to him. Fire blazed around him, and the prince replied that it was all he had and now he was coming. Clutching his sword, Ryan thought that all the techniques of the third prince were clearly in his memory. Drawing his sword, Ryan decided to use the first movement of 10,000 Fires Return. Pulling his sword aside, Round used the golden flame aura and his sword burst into flames. Screaming, the prince decided he had only one option left. The two blades came together in a powerful attack, and a bright flash was heard. As Rayon attacked, the prince deflected the attack and thought he had the advantage. Rayon flew up and struck again, but the prince's blade could not withstand the blow. With his mouth open, the prince looked at his broken sword. Clenching his teeth, the prince was angry because Rayon had just cut his aura. Looking sadly at his blade, the prince fell to one knee and Limmer announced that Rayon was the winner. The prince knew he was faster and stronger, but Rayon used defense to repel his aura. Walking up to Rayon, the prince held out his hand and thanked him, saying that he had learned a lot from this sparring, and acknowledged his defeat. Holding out his hand in return, Rayon smiled and said that he too had learned a lot. As they shook hands, the prince said that he was so blind that he didn't notice the flame, but he was curious about Rayon's age. When he found out Rayon's age, the prince sighed and said that he had lost in both swordsmanship and aura to a guy younger than him. Holding out a clenched fist to Round, the prince asked him to take it. Round looked surprised and asked what it was. In his hand was a token, and he said that he was Greer to Owen, the third prince, giving this token as a fulfillment of a request from Rayon. And Rayon asked why he was giving him something so valuable, and Greer said that even though he had lost his mind had cleared up and he had realized something. Greer added that he was even lucky to lose to a swordsman like Rayon and passed by, and said that they would meet again in the future. Looking after him, Rayon listened as Greer said that he hoped Rayon would remain the same as he was now. Going down the stairs, Greer told Lemur that since he was defeated, Lemur had won the bet. Lemur exclaimed that he knew it. Turning to Duke Tartan, Greer said it was time for them to go back. Passing the Duke, the prince said he had remembered an urgent matter he needed to take care of right now. As they walked down, Round thought about the fact that in his past life it was normal to do missions without reward. But is it right to get something now? Looking at the token, Rayon smiled and thought that he felt great right now. The other students ran to him to congratulate him on his victory, and Rayon realized that this life was not working out the way he thought it would. When Greer went to the head of house and told him what had happened, he replied that Rayon had learned a good lesson from the sparring. The prince agreed with him and said that it made him look at himself from where he thought he was and see the hollowness in it. Greer also said that he had traveled to each of the 6 kings and fought with each of them, but this was the first time he had met a trainee like Rayon. Greer said that even though Rayon was younger than him, he was a swordsman worth learning from. The head replied that this was true, and the prince said that he had a great desire to pay his respects to Glenn and leave him. As for what Greer had seen, he said that he wanted to analyze everything at once and learn. The head replied that he understood and asked the prince to give his letter to their king. Already sitting in the harness, Tartan turned to the prince, and the prince looked at him and asked what the Duke wanted to say. Tartan said that during the sparring with Rayon, he had shown all his strength and even used his secret technique of the Sword of Perez. And the Duke said that it was too much and asked the prince to hide his strength. Smiling, Greer replied that he knew he had really overdone it a bit. However, Tartan said it was okay with sparring, but his personal badge, but here Greer replied that it was a backhanded decision. The prince explained that Ron had done him a favor. Ron could have gotten angry because he wasn't serious about it, but he remained polite until the end. In addition, in the prince's opinion, Rayon had demonstrated his swordsmanship, which could be considered his equal. When Tartan tried to object, Greer added that the badge was a good investment for the future. The Duke asked what he meant, and Greer explained that with strength of character and such a sharp mind at a young age, even if it is only a bet, Rauna's name will definitely go all over the continent. Looking at Tartan, Greer asked if the benefits of friendship with Raun would be much greater in the future. Tartan said that the prince had looked very far. Closing his eyes, the prince reminded that he had grown up in a royal family, and if he could not look even into the near future, he would be crushed by the others. Looking up at the sky, Greer thought about how strong Raun Seacart would be the next time they met. The butler turned to the head and said that he was kind of glad that his grandson was recognized by the prince of a foreign country. The head asked what Lowen meant. Lowen said that he was just stating the fact that the Elor was smiling a warm smile that he hadn't smiled in a long time. Touching his face, the head asked if Lowen was smiling and said that he had been since Greer had mentioned the name of young Master Rayon. The head replied that Lowen must have gotten old and that he thought he was smiling. Lowen also said that he was very curious about what Tartan had said and asked the head to handle it. And the head remembered how Tartan had said that in addition to the prince's letter, he had a message to deliver to the king of the destruction of the north. Tartan said that this message was from Lacrosse Alberton de Owen, the second king of the kingdom of Owen, and one of the 6 kings. And so Tartan told that the 5 demon had begun to move. The head only frowned. Standing in front of the students, Limer said that those before them didn't have it so easy with Owen's knights. Then Lemera said that it seemed that they were ready enough, and so there would be a special training next week. There was a whisper among the students, and they began to look at each other, and Dorian asked what they would be waiting for. But Limer answered that it is hard to call it a training, because it is actually a reality. He asked to get ready to see blood. Limer told them that there was a group of bandits called Snow Lake outside the southern territory of the Sea Cards. Some of them from the North-South Alliance used to make money by letting people onto the mountain road and charging them a fee. Now they say they are robbing all the trade caravans, and the death toll of the innocents is getting higher and higher. The students asked their mission to eliminate the bandits, and Limer answered that they had already been cleansed. The students asked why he spoke in the past tense. The students started to speculate and asked if they had a different task or if they should just attack them. Limer said that, in general, it was not that wrong, and he said that the bandits had attacked a village to the south and massacred it. Leaving everything in flames, the whole group fled. After these words, the students opened their mouths. To summarize, Limer said that their mission was to track down and destroy the Snow Lake, and although they were ordinary brigands, each of them was a famous swordsman. Holding her sword in her hands, Runan thought she should improve her stance for tomorrow's mission, but she still couldn't. Looking at the building, Runan remembered that Rayon's strokes definitely seemed soft and slow, so what was her problem? She was sure that Ron was still practicing there in the building, and Runan thought she should ask him. Looking at the sword in her hand, Runan decided she didn't want to bother Rayon. Swinging the sword again, Runan decided that she would continue on her own. After practicing, she lay down on a rock and began to reflect that her attacks were less powerful now, but her movements were clearly smoother. When she got up, she looked at the building again and thought that Rayon had not finished his training. She decided that she should say hello first. Suddenly, she remembered her mother telling her that she had bought Runan her favorite ice cream, so she could come early this weekend. Leaving practice, Runan thought she should give Rayon some ice cream too. Suddenly, someone called Runan's name, and she looked behind her. A man was standing behind her. The man was smiling, and Runan recognized him as her brother Sirius, who was from a side branch. Sirius came up to her and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and asked what was wrong with her. He added that he might get upset if Runan continued to look like that. Runan shuddered, and Sirius said he had already warned her not to show that face. Kneeling down in front of her, Sirius said that the training seemed to be going well because Runan was much stronger than he thought. Getting up to her face, Sirius asked her if it was not a reason for her to go to the battlefield and risk her life. When Runan fell to the ground, she cried out, and Sirius said that she must have gotten better over time. Taking something out of his pocket, Sirius said that he would have to remind her a little. Sirius asked her if the squirrel that Runan was looking after was named Ruby Runan. Looked at him fearfully. Showing a small squirrel in his hand, Sirius smiled and said that now Runan would remember what happened to her again. He said that now Runan would remember how Ruby died and what would happen to Runan if she disobeyed him. Sirius made a fist, and Runan pulled her hand forward and yelled for him to stop. She began to remember how Sirius had bullied squirrels in her childhood. Grabbing her head, Runan screamed. Leaning over to her face, Sirius whispered that Runan belonged to him until the appointed day came. He told her not to do anything dangerous or difficult, and all she had to do was breathe as many times as he wanted. Suddenly, there was an explosion nearby. Sirius stood up and looked around. Runan, who was sitting on the ground, saw the sword in front of her. In front of her stood Rayon, who called out to Sirius and asked who he was. Sirius smiled and said that if Rayon wanted to know someone's name, he had to introduce himself first. But Rayon said that was not what a man who stopped a girl at such a late hour should say, and asked if he was a robber or a bandit. But Sirius replied that he was neither a robber nor a bandit. He said that he was Runan's elder brother. Hearing this, Rayon looked back at Runan, who was still sitting with her head in her hands, and whispered, "No, no." Looking at Sirius again, Rayon said that Runan looked scared and asked if Sirius was her brother. Sirius raised his hands in the air. He said it had been a long time since they had last seen each other, and he was happy to make a little joke. But Rayon asked if it was a joke to make fun of a squirrel. Scratching the back of his head, Sirius showed Rayon his empty palm and said that it was not a real squirrel but a toy. Then Sirius asked Rayon if he thought he would abuse a live squirrel, but Rayon knew that Sirius burned all the flesh and blood with the aura. Placing his palm on the bag lying on the ground, Sirius said that he had a long-term assignment and had come to visit his sister before leaving. Slipping the bag over his shoulder, Sirius turned to Runan and said that she had a very good friend and could continue to be friends with him. As he left, he waved his hand and added that he was sorry for his sister's reaction and wished them well until they met again. Looking after him, Rayon thought he knew this guy, a genius swordsman from the Salian family. One of the 12 monsters that would become the backbone of the next generation of Sword Spear Sirius Salian. Even before his rebirth, Rayon had heard of him, but this was the first time he had met him in person. According to Rayon, Sirius was really a psycho who pretended to be good-natured. He gave off a disgusting stench similar to Darius, which was a nasal stench. Turning to Runan, Rayon held out his hand to help her up, and Runan looked at her. Helping her up, Rayon beckoned her to come with him, saying he would escort her. Reaching the carriage, Runan climbed into the wagon, thanked Rayon, and he reminded her that they were moving out tomorrow, and she needed to get to bed early. When Runan arrived home, she climbed onto the bed and pulled her knees up under her. The ice cream was next to her on the dresser, untouched. Covering her face with her hands, Runan thought the same thing was happening again. She remembered how the squirrel had scratched her, but Runan explained to Sirius that Rudy was very sensitive because she was about to have a baby. However, Sirius said that Rudy belonged to him and therefore no one had the right to touch her. He said that Runan should not dare to injure herself but just live. In addition, he threatened her that if she told her father or mother, he would kill them because they had no use for family. He ordered her to live quietly, but if she opened her mouth, someone would get hurt. Rubbing her wrist, Runan thought that if she kept her mouth shut, no one would get hurt. Looking at the students, Runan thought that she was lonely and thought she was the only one suffering like this. However, she wasn't alone now. Runan met Ryan. She didn't realize what kind of person he was, putting in so much effort and going through hardships. Seeing Ryan change others through his efforts, Runan decided that she could change herself. She tried to change with Ryan, but as she sat in bed with her knees in her lap, Runan realized that she couldn't do it. She thought everything was fine and she just had to be patient. The village of Yarthan is the youngest part of the Sieghart's territory. Limer stopped and said that they would be taking a break here. Turning to the students, Limer said that he understood that it was hard for all of them to get through the interdimensional gate in such a hurry, but they needed to rest. A man came out to them and said they could follow him, and he would guide them to their lodging place. Limer thanked him for his hospitality. Sitting by the fireplace, Rowan said thank you out loud. The spirit looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. Ryan explained that if it hadn't been for the spirit's hint yesterday, he wouldn't have noticed because he didn't know that Sirius was hiding his aura. Ryan's mind was reeling with Sirius's words that he was going on a long-term mission. Ryan knew that as long as he was Runan's brother, she would stay that way. So the spirit again told Ryan to give him his body so he could destroy that guy and give it back to him. In response, Ryan said that Spirit was laughing at him, but Spirit said that he was sincere. But Ryan replied that he would not fall for his sincerity. Looking down at the floor, Ryan said that Sirius had hurt Runan, so he wouldn't just kill him. Runan is the first stranger who has taken care of Ryan with sincerity in his past life and this life. As Ryan stared into the fire, he decided that he would personally deal with Sirius if necessary. It was the second day since leaving the territory of the Siegharts. The disciples had already arrived at the place where the snow lake had awakened. In front of them lay a pile of burnt bodies and a nauseating odor. Passing by a body, Baron said that it was too much. Round also thought it was horrible. Looking at Martha, Rayon saw that she wasn't particularly frightened. He assumed that she had seen this kind of chaos before, or had even killed people herself. Rayon looked around and wondered where Runan was. She was standing near one of the houses looking at the body. She clutched her stomach and covered her mouth with her hand because she felt nauseous. Limer turned to the Wenchicks and said that they could see the full extent of the tragedy with their own eyes, and told them that Snow Lake had done it all. He asked them to remember everything with their own eyes and not to forget it. Whitelaw said not to let their guard down when they met them. Picking up a small object, Limer said that it was a silent whistle that could only be heard by specially trained people. He told the students to use it in case of danger and added that the instructors would keep an eye on them and come immediately. Limers also said that although the criminals were ruthless, the students should try to do their best instead of blowing the whistle. Runan listened with fear as Limers said that the outlaws should be destroyed without mercy. Then the teacher suggested forming groups under the leaders. Martha went to Group A and Baron to Group B. Looking at her weapon, Runan remembered Saya's words that it belonged to him. Sirius had told Runan not to do anything dangerous or hurt herself, but to live and breathe or he would destroy anyone who hurt her. Ryan came up to Runan and asked if she would join him. Runan looked down at the floor sadly. She whispered yes, and Ryan went with her to the mountains. They stopped and looked at the top of Mount Luton. Rayon thought that being on high ground would make it easier for them to look around, and in an emergency they could easily hide from an attack. Then Rayon thought that although it was a standard strategy, it was not this time. Those who know that they are being chased would not hide here. According to Rayon, the criminals already know their routes. In that case, the only place left is that hill. It looks too obvious, but Rayon doesn't know the landscape beyond it. Turning to Runan, Rayon called out to her and suggested that they leave the forest to the other groups and head for the hills. A spirit appeared and told Rayon that he was too obviously worried and asked if Rayon wanted to talk to her. Rayon replied that it was a family matter. At that moment, Rayon thought that he didn't even know how he felt about Sylvia and whether he should give Runan advice. Clenching his fist, Rayon thought it was clear that Sirius had a hand in this, and if he had the chance, he was sure he would take care of the problem. In any case, so far, everything was going according to plan. As they walked down the path, Rayon realized that the forest continued beyond the hill. It was clear that the bandits were good at hiding their tracks, and it would not be easy to find them. Looking at the branches, Rayon thought that this only works on beginners, and it was not a problem for him. He sat down on the snow and looked at the ground. Rayon knew that the best outlaws not only learn how to destroy their targets, gather information, and track the base. Turning to Runan, Rayon said that from the looks of it, Snow Lake's hideout was somewhere around here. Rayon stood up and ordered Runan to follow him without making a sound. Runan followed him with the hilt of his sword. As they walked forward, Rayon looked around and noticed traps set up near them. Then they looked out from behind the bushes. Rayon thought it was as expected, except for the traps set at the beginning. Looking out from behind a tree, Rayon saw two men and a small boy near the cave. He realized that they were holding the child hostage and that the two men on guard were well trained. It was clear that since they didn't emit aura, they were low-level swordsmen, and there was a big guy sleeping next to the hostage. Rayon felt as if his only sword was bread. Looking deep into the cave, Rayon assumed that the others were probably in there and thought that they couldn't have left just one hostage. There could be at least a dozen brigands inside, whether they should use the whistle or not. Rayon thought it would be worth it to retreat and regroup. However, Rayon saw that the condition of the hostage was bad, and if they left him like that, he might freeze, but they wouldn't last if they attacked together. Reaching for his sword, Rayon thought that they had not noticed their presence so far and decided that it would be better to rescue the hostage and deal with them quietly. Turning to Runan, Rayon ordered her to look at him. When she turned, Rayon ordered her not to worry because they could still save him. He said that when he signaled Runan to block the sounds with mana, and he would take care of the rest, and Rayon asked if she could do it. Turning away, Runan said she could. The brigand yawned and said he was sleepy and asked how long they would have to stand, but he didn't get an answer because Runan came straight out to them and spread her arms in different directions. The bandit shouted who she was. With her arms outstretched toward them, Runan used aura deployment and sound blocking. The bandit realized that their voices had been silenced and that Runan had done it with mana. The other asked what the aura user was doing here. Ryan thought he should deal with these two before he went after the big guy. With one blow, Round took off the heads of the two bandits. Runan's eyes opened wide, and she remembered her squirrel, Rudy. Runan fell to her knees, clutching her head and screaming. The big man heard the scream and jumped up. Ryan clenched his teeth as he realized that the mana barrier was broken. Putting his hands over his mouth, Runan screamed at him to stop. Round realized it was that trauma from the past again. Running out of the cave, the big man swung his sword and jumped straight at Runan. At the last moment, Round was able to counter him and put his sword to his throat, knocking him to the ground. He told the man to be quiet or he would take his life. Round ordered him to answer all questions and to break his bones for every refusal. Looking at Runan's trembling, Rayon thought that even after that tantrum, she had deployed the barrier immediately. Only because of that, he is fine. It was a bit of a struggle, but they made it through. When Runan had taken the prisoner, Ron asked the big man how many of them there were and where they were. The man replied that there were 39 men in all and the rest were inside. Ron asked how many hostages. As expected, the bandit replied that there was one more. A boy came into the conversation and told Round that it was his little sister and asked him to rescue her. Leaning toward him, Runan said that they would save his sister so he didn't have to worry. Turning to her, Rayon said that he would not throw words around, and Runan asked if they would help. Rayon said he didn't mind fighting the bandits, but they should call for reinforcements to keep the hostages safe. Taking out a whistle, Runan said she would use it. Then Round agreed, saying it would be better. When she blew the whistle, Round thought he was nearby, but nothing was heard. Suddenly, there was a shout from the cave that a low sound had just been heard, and everyone should get up because there were stalkers nearby. Runan and Round looked around. It was clear that there was a professional among the bandits. Taking the boy, Runan stepped back and Rayon took the big boy, put his sword to his neck, and stood in front of the cave. A crowd of bandits came out and the leader asked Rayon if he had the guts to come to them like that. The old man raised an eyebrow and asked who Round had just called to them. Continuing to hold the trembling man, Rayon replied that it was none of his business and said he wanted to exchange hostages. Behind the old man was a girl, and the old man asked the hostage Rayon said to give him the child, and he would let the boy go. The old man laughed and said he didn't care what happened to that bastard because he wasn't worth a hostage's fingernail. He asked if Round really wanted to see the little dog's head fall, and if not, he should lower his sword. Turning to Runan, Round told her not to turn around until he gave the signal. And after saying that, Round swung his sword across the big man's neck, and blood spurted. The bandits covered themselves with their hands from the splatter and started shouting that Rayon was a bastard. Then Round threw his daggers at them, and the bandit holding the prisoner flew back. Turning to Runan, Round asked her to create a frost mist with her aura. She immediately touched the ground with her palm. As the bandits looked around telling each other they couldn't see anything, Round was already at their backs. He picked up the girl in his arms and ran away. The bandits realized that Rayon had escaped with the hostage. However, the bandits decided that they could not let them go, and one of them ordered the others to kill the boy first if they found the fugitives. Hiding behind the trees, Round said that the children were faint from the cold, and it would be hard for them to escape in that condition. Rayon told Runan to stay here and look after the children. Runan noticed blood on his hand. But Round replied that it was all right, and he would deal with the bandits quickly and come back. With tears in her eyes, Runan asked Round not to leave, saying that it was too dangerous to fight wounded. She said that the instructors would be arriving soon, and they would just have to wait for help. Sitting down with her, Round explained that he would always be afraid on the battlefield, and he would be too. Then he asked if Runan knew what could be more frightening, and he answered that it was the fear of not doing anything when he should have. He began to say that the brigands had done unforgivable things, and among the victims were those who were defending their home, and they cannot turn a blind eye to it. Rayon also reminded that they are the swordsmen of the Sieghearts, and by carrying out their missions to the end, they must continue the path of those who also sacrificed their lives. Rising Round said that he doesn't know exactly what her brother did to Runan, but the more she fears, the greater the shadow of that man. Sitting on her knees, Runan listened to Round say that only she alone could protect herself and her loved ones. Putting something in her hand, Round told her what she should do next. Heading towards the cave, Round said that she didn't need to stay in the shadows anymore. Looking after him, Runan thought that she wanted to change, and she didn't want to stay in the shadows anymore, and she didn't want to be tied to the past anymore. She wants to protect everyone she cares about. Runan realized that she is no longer in the darkness that she was, and the future is full of light. In the cave, Rayon was taking one life after another. The bandits were shouting that they needed to hurry up and take Rayon's life. As they watched their allies drop dead, they shouted that it was just one little kid. Suddenly, one of the bandits attacked Rayon from above, however, and in front of him was the enemy. The gang leader thought now was the time because Rayon was distracted. The old man stopped with his sword because there was no one there, and he didn't understand where the boy had disappeared to. Behind his back, Round asked the old man, waiting for the moment he was distracted. Watching their leader fall, one of the bandits called Rayon a monster and asked how he got such strength at his age. Turning to them, Round told them to just give up because their leader had already fallen. A man named as Mr. Jeju came forward and asked if it made sense to give such a young man a chance. He said that Round's face and outfits were beautiful and therefore concluded that Round was a rich man. Jeju said that he was worried that the gifts might not be enough, but it seems that the heavens have not abandoned this man. Even though Round put his sword up to ward off the attack, the blow was so strong that Round fell on his back, and Jeju said that now there was one more hostage. As Rayon fell down, he thought that he was Seolho Jeju, and that he was not a proficient swordsman and his level of swordsmanship was not bad. The bandits shouted from the street that they had found the girl and the hostages. One of the bandits attacked Round and she put up her sword to ward off the blow, but her body was trembling with fear. Looking outside, Round thought that Runan was not yet able to fight and needed help. Continuing to attack Jeju said Rayon shouldn't forget about him, and asked Round care so much about what's going on out there. Smiling, Jeju told Rayon not to worry because they will have fun. Stepping back a bit, the brigand yelled for Runan to be damned with her fucking techniques, and that it was obvious from her that she had never taken a human life. Runan stood with her sword drawn forward while the bandit yelled for her to stop resisting and give them the hostages. Turning to look at the children, Runan thought she should protect them while she was distracted. The bandit attacked her. Clutching her sword, Runan thought that to do so she would have to destroy the enemy in front of her. Luckily for her, it wasn't that hard to deal with him. As she watched him run at her, Runan told herself that it was easy to attack and she could do it. Suddenly, Sirius appeared in front of her and told Runan not to forget what Rayon had said. Looking at her brother, Runan thought that she needed to get rid of those memories, but she couldn't forget that day. Can she protect someone like Rayon even at a time like this? Runan can't swing a sword, she's scared. Behind her, a voice shouted her name. Runan looked back and saw Rayon fighting the criminal. Smiling, Rayon told her it was alright and he would protect them. He seemed to be saying this to the little girl. Reaching out his hand, Rayon called her to him. Clutching her sword and using her aura, Runan mentally thanked Rayon for his words of support. She swung her sword, thinking she was grateful to Rayon for giving her courage. The silhouette of Sirius in front of her began to blur. After taking the life of her opponent, Runan kept thanking Rayon for helping her through it. After watching another of his allies fall, Jeju said that these guys were so insignificant. However, Raon told him that they weren't the only ones to blame. Looking at him, Jeju opened his mouth. Clutching his sword, Raon used his aura and said that it was the man's fault for overcoming his dark past. He said that Runan was a child with a good and strong heart, and then corrected himself by saying that she was a swordsman who had overcome adversity. Ronan swung his sword and used the Jeju Fire Flower technique and fell. While Runan warmed the children, Raon opened his chest and thought he should check for traps before the instructors arrived. He pulled out a small item. This two-colored flower is a rather precious material. Raon couldn't believe that they had destroyed the village just for this. Suddenly a voice sounded behind them and they were already finished. Raon turned around. In front of them stood a man who noticed the flower in Raon's hand and asked if Jeju had taken it. In front of them stood Lecter, the Lord of Doom from the North-South Alliance. He asked if the guys were alright. Rayon asked what if they did. Smiling, Lecter said he thought it was strange considering Jeju's combat experience and age. He said that Jeju had excellent fighting skills and the confidence to win. Rayon asked if he was from the North-South Alliance. Lecter replied that he was and gave his name. Rayon had heard of him before. It was all in his past life. After joining the Alliance 10 years later, he became famous as a brilliant swordsman. Snow Lake is just an ant because Lecter is a real swordsman with strong skills. Addressing Rayon, Lecter said that he was a descendant of the famous Sieghart family and that his sword had no markings on it, which meant that Rayon was a trainee. Lecter asked what he should do and if he should forfeit his life. Looking at his opponent, Rayon frowned because of the deadly aura emanating from him. Grabbing his sword, Rayon decided that it meant nothing to him as a mercenary who lived his life. Seeing this, Lecter asked Rayon if he would cling to life with all his might. Rayon thought he could finish Lecter off if he attacked from behind, but in a direct confrontation it would be much harder. Still holding the sword by the hilt, Rayon wondered why he couldn't leave. Pulling out his sword, Rayon told Lecter to draw his sword and attack him. Reaching for the hilt, Lecter said that if he drew his sword, Rayon would die. Rayon responded by saying that it was natural for the weak to die. Lecter noted that Rayon had a fiery spirit for such a young man. Lecter raised his hand and said that the sight of Rayon made him lose his will to fight, and added that he would be ashamed to take Rayon's life here and now. But Rayon said that death chooses its victim impartially and indiscriminately. Scratching his chin, Lecter said that Rayon was insane. Flying up the hill, Lecter said that it would be great if Rayon was a member of the North-South Alliance. Looking up at Rayon from above, Lecter asked what his name was. Rayon gave his name. Lecter said he would wait for Rayon's name to spread from the mountains of Taruk to the Raviel River. Turning to Runan, Rayon offered to return to the children. She agreed. Rubbing her hand, Runan asked Rayon if she had done well. It was a question Rayon had not expected to hear and smiled and said that she had done a good job. Runan smiled back. The short but also long first task ended like that. After all this, the boys returned to the head of the bandit leader Baron and Martha, were confused by the gap between them. Limerus reassured those cadets who had not contributed to the task, telling them not to be disappointed and giving them advice for the future. Before Rayon could digest what had happened, it was time to report on the task the spirit was still boasting about himself. Since the rescued children had lost their parents, it was decided to give them to the Salian family to care for. After returning from the mission, Raon and Runan were summoned to the main house. In recognition of their contribution to the mission, they were awarded a bronze medal. Surprisingly, the head of the house praised them that day. As a trophy, Raon was given a two-colored flower that was a rare medicine. Everything had been going smoothly up to that point. When Rayon opened the door of the house, he saw Dorian and asked him what he was doing here. Dorian scratched the back of his head and told him that Madame had asked him to report back to her after the task was finished. Raon's eyes went wide and he asked Dorian had told her everything? Wiping his tears, Dorian said that he had reported all of Mr. Raon's exploits in great detail. Running out into the corridor, Sylvia shouted. Raon had come Helen behind her back, also exclaimed that the young master had returned. Rayon held up his hands and said at once that it was not as they had been told. He knew that Sylvia would be so annoyed with him if she knew he had attacked first. Sylvia came up to him and stroked his cheek and said that Raon was doing a good job. Noticing that Raon was confused, Sylvia asked if he really thought she would scold him. Raon reminded her that she had told him to be careful. But Sylvia said that the reason the first head of the house had taken up the sword was to protect the weak. The head had said he always lent a hand not only to those close to him, but also to those who needed it. And to this day, the Sieghart still protected the weak. And Sylvia said her goal was to become just such a swordsman, pursuing the old ideals, and she would not scold Rayon for saving the children. Placing her hands on his shoulders, Sylvia summed up that his mom was proud of him. Clapping her hands, Helen said they were very proud when they heard such a story. Hugging Sylvia back, Rayon thought he didn't understand anything, and emotions are really complicated things. When Rayon looked back remembering Dorian, the spirit told him that the coward had long ago escaped. Turning to Sylvia, Rayon thought that at least things had not gone so badly. Lying in her bed, Runan placed the squirrel Rayon had given her on the dresser and smiled. She remembered Rayon saying that she didn't need to stay in the shadows anymore. Smiling, Runan thought she should tell him the next time they met, to say how grateful she was to Rayon. Lying on the hammock, Limerus remembered watching Rayon from his hiding place. Looking up at the sky, Limer asked how long he had felt. The same feelings as he did for the Lord the Seed of the new king had begun to germinate in his opinion. The main house of the family, Robert Darris, was sitting at his desk writing something in a book. Looking at his hand that Rayon had wounded, he saw that it was still not healed. Thinking back on that day, Darris realized that 17 years had passed without a trace. Darris continued to take high-quality elixirs. He consulted experienced physicians and famous priests. But nothing and no one could erase the scar. It was an open wound. She looked the same as the first time, as if she wanted Darris to remember. And so Darris wondered if the dead spirit was asking him for memories. With a squeeze of his hand, Darris answered himself that, unfortunately, he does not think about the past. Closing the book, Darris thought that there was not much time left before his wish would come true. Looking at the system window, Rayon smiled because one of the curse circuits had disappeared and all his stats had increased significantly. And Rayon wondered if he had finally reached the expert level. This is the beginning stage, not even a low level. But still, Rayon had worked hard to get this far. Behind him, the spirit said it was very funny and asked Rayon if he was proud to be an expert. Turning to him, Rayon said that becoming an expert at 15 was rare, and even on the entire continent, it was hard to find someone like that. In response, the spirit said that only fools judge age on the battlefield, and weaknesses are indispensable from age. And Rayon answered him that the spirit is right, that there are no fools on the battlefield who take age into account, and he agrees. The spirit began to say that even now, Rayon is no match for the fingertips of this king, and Rayon replied that he was right. The spirit looked at him and asked why Rayon was laughing, and Rayon said that he could only do that in the past he was forbidden to speak even a few words. Rayon turned away and asked if this was not an admission that he had grown up. The spirit looked at him in surprise and said nothing. Then he shouted angrily if the king would ever recognize such a person. Rayon asked why he was so angry. Rayon also noticed that the spirit's voice trembled slightly, and Rayon added that after spending so much time with him, he could understand his thoughts. The spirit said that a man trying to destroy the king was not enough. Walking away from him, Rayon said that the spirit's anger was nothing compared to what it had been before, and if he didn't regain his strength, he would soon be in trouble. Stepping forward, Spirit said that this nonsense reminded him of the old days. Again, the spirit began to talk about his past times, and Rayon interrupted him, saying that he needed to stretch. With a clap of his hands, Limeris told them to put all their business aside, and they were done for the day. The disciples answered him at last. Behind him, Baron reminded them that Limer was 20 minutes late and asked if they should extend the training. As Limeris ran away, he shouted that they would catch up tomorrow, but that was enough for today. Baron thought Limeris was an irresponsible elf. Standing in the center, Rayon told the students to wrap it up because they would start cleaning up the training grounds. Opening his locker, Dorian smiled and reached for something. When he closed the door, Martha stood behind it with her arms folded across her chest. Dorian ran and screamed, but Martha grabbed his shoulder and asked what all the screaming was about while he was cleaning. Turning to her, Dorian said something about honor, and Martha clenched her teeth and said she was busy practicing. Turning to the students, Martha shouted that they must be deaf because she was busy and they needed to get out of here. Seeing this, Rayon thought she was really only nice to him. Limer said he thought Rayon was the only one who hadn't changed. When Rayon heard that, he turned around and asked if Limer hadn't run away because of Baron's nagging. He turned away and asked if he had. And Limer said that he forgot something, so he came back. The students looked at him apprehensively. Standing in front of the students again, Limer said loudly that he had something important to tell them again that he had forgotten. Smiling, Limer said that the students had a second assignment. Scratching the back of his head, Limer laughed and asked how he could forget something so important. Baron and Dorian were shocked. Rayon thought that it had been half a year since the first mission, and it had taken longer than he had thought. Limer said that the orcs were attacking near a small village southeast of Sieghart's territory. The apprentices must go there to defeat the orcs threatening the villagers and protect the village and its inhabitants. Upon hearing this, the students were excited about defeating the orcs. They said they had been waiting for such an assignment for a long time. Some said they could finally put their sword to the test. Suddenly, Lemire said he was surprised that they liked this kind of mission, and the students fell silent. And Limer added that in this mission, the instructors would not be accompanying them, and they would be the only ones to go, and so they would have to work hard. Raising his hand, Baron asked, what if they had a problem they couldn't solve by themselves? Limer replied that understanding risks was their skill. With a shake of his head, Limer said that depending on the situation, they should either break through by force, use strategy, or run. Raising his hand, Dorian asked if it was not a problem if he ran away from the mission. Limer replied that it depended on the situation. Dorian turned away and clenched his fist, happy that he could run away without being punished. Suddenly, Limer said that they would be leaving at dawn after tomorrow. No one expected that. The disciples began to shout that it was too soon and asked why they were in such a hurry. However, Limer said that destroying monsters required more attention than exploring dungeons. Nearby, Baron shouted, asking why he didn't tell them sooner so they could prepare more thoroughly. Rayon interrupted the conversations, reminding them that Limer had said a long time ago that you never know how or when missions will go. He said that now was not the time to panic because they had to prepare, and the more questions they asked, the less time they had to prepare. After listening to him, the students agreed that Rayon was right, but someone said that missions are not always given only when they are ready. Rayon went on to say that orcs are much fiercer and stronger than they think, and if you judge them by their physique alone, they are no match for anyone else. Limer added that besides the fact that there are many of them, this could turn into a battle of overwhelming number. He said that fighting them head-on would not be easy, but that it would be better to focus on offense rather than defense. Limer then said that the students should go light and they would meet the day after tomorrow here at dawn. Leaving the room in the morning, Rayon noticed a light enchanted backpack that showed indifference. Putting it on his shoulder, Rayon thought that the gesture meant that he could do whatever he wanted and he didn't mind. As Rayon opened it, the spirit asked Rayon if he thought he could control everything. He said that anything could happen when Rayon least expected it. Looking at the spirit, Rayon said that he wondered what would happen when he got his powers. Hearing the sounds, Rayon turned around. Going to the door and opening the door, Rayon thought he wasn't expecting anyone and asked that who was there. Sylvia stood in front of him with a straight face and her arms folded across her chest. She told Rayon that at least when he gets an assignment, he should bother to tell her about it. A surprised Rayon asked how she knew and Sylvia put her arms at her sides. Rayon assumed that Dorian had told her about it. However, Sylvia replied that Lemmer Rayon frowned and remembered that elf. Looking at his mother, Rayon apologized. After that, Sylvia's face softened. Taking his hands in hers, Sylvia said that being a leader is not easy and he must lead the newcomers on the best path. She said that Rayon can't solve everything alone and must assign them to related positions and work together to make everything a success. Looking at her in surprise, Rowan thought she would scold him, but she was giving him advice. Sylvia kept saying that defeating monsters was a difficult task that looked simple, and he needed to make sure he destroyed them without hurting them. Placing her palm on Rayon's heart, Sylvia said that on a mission he shouldn't think of himself as a rookie, and he should remember that he was a Sieghart swordsman. She said that his mother wanted him to be the kind of swordsman who would keep others safe. Rowan responded by saying that he thought she would be angry. Frowning, Sylvia informed him that she was and that she was worried and upset. Hugging Rayon, Sylvia said that this was not the time to scold Rayon. She told Rowan to be ready to be lectured when he returned, and added that she was glad that he was feeling better since he had started training. Resting his head on his mother's shoulder, Rowan listened to her say that she couldn't stop worrying. Standing in front of the students, Limer told them that anything could happen outside. Limerus also said that if the students realize it's too hard, they should leave and not look back. Taking a seat on the stage, Limerus said that the students could set out on their journey, since it usually took them a month, but now they would get there in 2 weeks. Turning to the students, Rowan told them to line up in 4 rows and told them that they would move in the formation they had set up this morning. Looking at Rowan, Lemaire thought that the students would do well, for Rowan was not only strong, he was gifted with intelligence and perception. Limerus was sure that Rayon would be able to accomplish this mission without difficulty, and he couldn't even believe that he was only 15 years old. A colleague approached Limer and asked if they would follow the students, adding that if they left now, no one would notice. But Limer said not now because there was someone with ghostly feeling. As he left, Limer stretched and said he was going to take a nap and rest. His co-workers remained silent, and one asked the other if it was normal, and the other asked if it was time to leave. With a wink, Limer said that the orcs were more to worry about than the students. The man under the cloak got down on one knee and told the leader that the information said they were in that village. The leader said that they could set off and could destroy anyone who got in their way. The forest near the village of Cebu Rahon and the other disciples had already arrived at the location. The chief instructor of the 6th Martial Arts Hall, Kane, looked on with his eyes wide open. Turning to him, Rayon asked what the 6th Martial Arts Hall was doing here. Kane also asked Rayon why the 5th Martial Arts Hall was here. Looking at Kane, Rayon remembered hearing that Kane had joined the 6th Hall after a long period of injury treatment. Judging from his condition, Kane had already fully recovered and was as powerful as a seasoned swordmaster. And Kane said that they were on their way to the village of Cebu to fulfill their mission to destroy the orcs. And Rayon said that they had also received a mission to destroy the orcs in Cebu village and were on their way there. Kane asked if they had been given the same assignment, adding that it had not been announced beforehand. Rayon asked again. On the eve of the mission, in a tavern on the outskirts of Lemaire asked if the students had done well. Lifting his mug, Limer said that he had raised them, but even he admired them and asked what about sending them on a mission. Limer started to say that then his head would praise him too, but suddenly another teacher came up to him and said that the 6th Hall would do the task. The teacher said that when hunting monsters, teamwork was more important than personal skills, and that was why the 6th was better suited for this mission. Maytoon went on to say that everyone had recently successfully completed the infernal training, and no one had been eliminated, so the level of competition had increased. In response, Limer said that he seemed concerned about the recent focus on his students, and offered to send 2 halls on the mission. Looking at Meat and Limer said that they needed to finish off the orcs before the village was in danger. Limer thought a competition between the apprentices would speed up the task. Methan agreed, and said he would get permission from the head. And now Baron says that there seems to have been a mix-up in the mission orders, and therefore the 6th Hall can return. Baron said that Hall 5 would handle the assignment on their own. Kane didn't like that and said he couldn't let that statement go unchallenged, and clarified Baron's arrogance at being tied to Hall 5. Kane kept saying that in tasks where teamwork was important, the 6th Hall was superior to the 5th, and that this task would be very difficult for them. As Baron approached him, he said he knew of Kane's abilities, but the power of the 5th Hall was not so weak that he could underestimate it. Watching them bicker, Rayon thought that the instructors, especially Lemur, must have known about the joint assignment. Closing his eyes, Ron wondered why the instructors had sent them off without warning. It was clear that Lemur valued experience, so combat practice in unconventional situations was important to him. From his point of view, a monster-slaying mission was as close to real combat experience as possible. However, in a mission like this, teamwork and tactics are important, and the 5th Hall lacks them. Covering his face with his hand, Rayon assumed that Lemaris wanted the students to compete against the recent rankings, and to realize what they were lacking. And Rayon realized that if that was the case, the others should also get a taste of teamwork, as well as the words his mother had said before the assignment. He remembered that Sylvia had wanted him to set an example and become a true protector. Putting his hand to his side, Rayon told them both to calm down and asked if they were going to waste time arguing. When Kane and Baron looked at him, Rayon said that it would be impossible to come to an agreement by such methods, and asked what about the battle between the halls. And Baron said it would be a battle between the halls before the mission. He started to say that they didn't know what they were going to face, so why waste energy? Rayon looked at him and said that judging by the faces of the 6th Hall, they do not intend to retreat, and asked Baron that they are not going to give up the mission either. Then Rayon went on to say that for this mission, considering the scale of the mission, the group of orcs must be quite large and there must be a leader among them. Rayon raised his finger and announced that the winners would lead the mission, and the losers would be the ones to take over. Kane and Baron listened in silence as Rayon said that they would clarify the leader and the mission was done, which should be fine with everyone. Looking at Kane, Rayon asked if the 6th Hall agreed. Kane said it was a good idea. Pointing to the mountain, Rayon suggested a real fight there, and they set off. After a while, Martha was rushing into battle. The rules of victory are simple. The winner is the one who disarms all the opponents or captures the banner. It's even easier than a practice fight. Taking a knee, Rayon said they'd start planning, and Martha asked why they needed a plan at all since their opponents were just low-level bastards. Then she said she would blow them all away solo and her fellow students would just have to wait. Rushing to attack her opponents, Martha shouted that there was no need for tactics for minnows. Thanks to the sense of legend, Rayon could see the battlefield as if it were a painting in front of his eyes, even without a direct view. Closing his eyes, Rayon watched and realized that the battle was finally heating up. Runan asked if it was possible to send the boys without any tactics, but Rayon said they would not obey. Runan sat down and asked if they could win. Rowan said they would lose. He added that the boys would not just lose, but would be completely defeated. As Martha continued to attack the 6th hall, she wondered why they couldn't be penetrated, knowing that their combined defenses were too strong. While repelling her attacks, the apprentice shouted that Martha was not the only protagonist of this world, and she had greatly underestimated their efforts. As the sun began to set, the battle was over. The 5th hall stood with their lips pressed together. Rowan approached them and asked if it was as simple as they thought it would be. He remarked that from their condition it looked like they had stumbled. Turning to the students, Rowan asked if they thought the world would stop while they were growing up, and if they thought that the kingdom of Orvan could be taken seriously. He kept saying that this was the result of them rushing without strategy and support from their comrades of the opponent. They had wasted their strength and revealed techniques. Rayon reminded him that the 6th squad were swordsmen who exhausted themselves to perfect their blade skills and should not be underestimated if they fell behind. Looking at him, Runan asked if they would just lose now. She added that she would do anything to defeat their opponents. Smiling Round said he could see the fire in his eyes was still alive. And he said he would tell the others how to win. Meanwhile, the 6th hall was saying that the 5th hall was getting the best of them and they were enjoying their efforts. However, the leader of the group was saying that the 5th hall had defeated the organization under the wing of the North-South Alliance and the Snow Lake Bandits. Suddenly, Martha walked up to them and the students immediately jumped up, pointing their swords at her. The leader said it was time to put an end to everything, and Martha called him a moron. She held her sword on her shoulder and said that if the leader opened his mouth to them again, he would be sorry. Martha went for the enemy and used a direct attack with her 4th form. Standing on the defense, the leader shouted for his teammates to concentrate their aura in front. However, while he was holding his sword in front of him, Martha stabbed him in the side. Baron also lunged at his opponents in his stance. The leader of the group he was attacking told the boys to block the blow as they had practiced, but Baron dashed past them with lightning speed, saying they were fools and knocked the opponents down. Looking back at him, the group leader didn't realize how Baron had changed his trajectory in a second. Looking at Baron, the girl realized that the 5th hall had completely changed its fighting style. Attacking her opponents, Martha realized that Rayon was right about that. Standing in front of the students, Rayon asked them why they thought they had lost, even though they were stronger than their opponents. Baron answered, suggesting that they lacked information and tactics. Rayon said that was the case. Rayon said that the children from the 6th hall knew who their opponents were, so they had developed sophisticated tactics, and they were aiming for a sense of superiority and did not prepare for battle. As a result, the squad was defeated by an opponent weaker than them. A frightened Dorian asked if that meant they would lose again. When Martha heard this, she turned to him and grabbed him by the crotch and started shaking him, shouting at him to stop whining. He started crying, and Rayon said that although it wasn't a total rout, they'd lost a fair amount of mana and strength, and were in a bad position. But he reminded that not only the enemy had information and tactics, Baron and Martha looked at him, and Baron asked Raon if Raon had a plan. Raon told them that Kane, the best student of the 6th Martial Arts Hall, had keen eyesight and intuition. Because of this, Kane spotted the enemies from afar and immediately dispatched a squad of them to confront Martha and Baron. Martha's strengths are power and stamina, but her attacks are simple, so Kane has sent a squad of men to counter her attacks. Baron is fast, but his movements are easy to calculate. Against him, Kane has sent fast adapting fighters, and Rayon asked them how to win. Then he said the best option was to change fighters. But he knew that they were unlikely to agree. Martha immediately shouted that she could beat them all, and Baron agreed. Waving his palm, Rayon said that in that case they should change their fighting style. Martha and Baron were surprised and asked how. In response, Rayon told Martha that her opponents are tenacious fighters, but they often open up because they can't adapt their aura quickly. For Baron, Rayon said that his weakness is opponents who rely heavily on their instincts, and he needs to outsmart them. And Martha remarked that the plan wasn't bad and asked how Rayon knew all this. And Baron also remarked that it sounded like he was watching the battle. And Rayon replied that Kane's instincts were high and that he had long surpassed the level of a mere apprentice. And Rayon said that his instincts were sharper. When everyone went into battle, Rayon sat down on a log and watched the fight again. He could see that they were doing well and Runan would soon be victorious as well. At that moment, a man appeared behind him and Rayon looked back. Behind him was Kane, and Rayon told him it was time for them to start too. The situation was very different from before Kane had no choice but to go in search of the flag. Kane said he'd been wondering why they were losing, but it turned out that Rayon had told them to change their fighting style. He added that the rumors about Rayon being disrespected were false, and said that the battle would end here. Clutching his sword, Kane said that he had heard that Rayon had a fire-type aura. Seeing the fire around Kane's sword, Rayon realized that his aura was the same. And Kane said that unfortunately for Rayon, his elemental power is much more powerful, and even his mana count is many times more than that of a simple swordsman. By this point, fire was also blazing around Rayon, and he told Kane that he couldn't defeat him even in theory. Standing up, Rayon said he would show Kane how much stronger his flames were than Kane's. As Rayon attacked, Kane's eyes went wide from the fact that Rayon's fire is very fast. As he dodged the attack, Kane remembered being told that Ron had defeated not only Martha, but Prince Orvan as well. However, Rayon's strength was not inferior. Clenching his teeth and fending off another attack, Kane thought he was stronger. Rayon struck again and the blade swept across Kane's cheek and then blood came out. Kane thought it couldn't be. Before his eyes, Kane saw Rayon attacking him again and thought his fire was weaker. There was a massive explosion from the strength of the opponents, and the surrounding area was bathed in light. Standing in front of Kane lying on the ground, Rayon clarified he was telling him he couldn't win. When Rayon's fellow students returned, Kane was standing by a tree and Dorian asked why he was here. Rayon replied that if you were losing, the easiest way to turn the situation around was to kill the enemy commander. And Baron said that Rayon was right that the enemy had fallen for the deception. Baron added that if they hadn't followed Rayon's orders, they would have lost. Martha said she didn't want to agree, but he was right. They said that they recognized him as the best student of the 5th hall and swore to follow Rayon's orders without objection. Smiling, Rayon thought that it seemed that the new experience had helped the boys to mature a little. Looking at Baron and Martha, Rayon thought that this was the 5th hall he knew. When all the students had gathered, Rayon told them that they had all done a great job, and he hoped that this battle had shown them the dangers of arrogance. And what happens when you rush into battle without a plan or tactics? Rayon added that if this was not an argument, but a real battle, everyone would be dead by now. Clenching his fists, Rayon asked them to never forget that lesson. Standing behind a tree, Kane watched Rayon and thought he had exceeded his expectations. Turning away, Kane remembered how he was sure the 5th hall was full of arrogant upstarts. But it seemed he was the arrogant upstart. Kane reached out his hand to Rayon and said that he had learned a lot today. Rayon looked back at him. Kane said that Rayon had shown him that he should never let his guard down and that he should always have a backup plan in case the main plan failed. He said that he was confident that they would win no matter what, because after all, they had been aware of them from the beginning. Kane also said that not only did they lose, but he himself was defeated in the duel. Kane thought he was stronger, but apparently he was just overconfident, and the experience had taught him a lot. Looking at Kane, Rayon smiled and thought that he was much nicer than the other scions of the main branch. Shaking his hand in return, Rayon said that he too had learned a lot. Kane said that they would be their support on this mission, as agreed. 2 weeks later, Rayon and the rest of the apprentices stood in the middle of a snowy forest on a hill. The very village where the mission had been scheduled lay before them. A small village that was not famous or touristy, Rayon thought that this mission was not too special. Looking over his shoulder, Rayon wondered why it felt like someone was watching him all this time. It wasn't as if the instructor had followed them. This presence was ominous. It was as if the unknown was studying them, looking for weaknesses to attack. In Rayon's opinion, the best thing to do now was to mislead the pursuer and always be on guard. Turning to Baron, Rayon asked him to be a friend, and Baron clarified the question. Rayon said that Baron would be in charge of this mission from now on. Baron opened his mouth and stammered and asked what Rayon was talking about. Rayon told him that during the first mission, he and Runan had fought the Snow Lake Bandits. He thought it would be better if other guys led the mission this time. He recalled that Baron wanted to catch up with him. Rayon then asked if this was just idle chatter. If not, it was time for Baron to show his progress. Baron said he would show the changes. Putting his hand on his chest, Baron said that he would take command of this mission from now on. Turning to Martha, Rayon said he would explain everything later and asked her to play along for now. Turning away, Martha said that there was no need to get personal, and she had already said that she would follow Rayon's orders, and she was true to her word. Turning to the spirit that had appeared, Rayon asked if he could sense that they were being watched. The spirit clarified Rayon had noticed. Flying back, the spirit said that it was not surprising that Rayon had passed on his abilities. Rayon asked him what about their location. Smiling, the spirit said that he didn't need to scorch it, as if Rayon couldn't detect it himself. Rayon realized that it was one person. At first, the spirit didn't understand and asked again, but Rayon reminded him that the spirit had told him instead of them, and thanked him for his cooperation. This made the spirit furious. Rayon thought about the fact that no one can guarantee that the stalker is really alone. Even if there is only one person watching them, there could be a whole group following them. Rayon put his hand to his side and thought that they should never relax. He realized that the mission would not be easy. Putting the mask at his feet, the man looked down and asked where they had come from. The young man in front of him answered that they were Zigguarts. The man said that he would not call them that skilled. Putting his hand on his chest, the young man replied that they were only apprentices and that there was no instructor around, so this must be their second mission. The man asked if they had noticed the spy. The boy replied that, of course not, and he was sure that they didn't even realize that he was there. The man also said that they had taken control of the orcs, and he didn't understand why they were sending these children. The man assumed that the villagers were asking for help. The man said that he was sure that they would find the mana stone quickly, but no. The young man replied that the stone was hidden somewhere in the village. The young man then clarified if they should strike right now. Reaching for the mask, the man replied that they would wait for now. In his partner's opinion, this was the perfect opportunity to deal with the pupils. The leader replied that it was not difficult to destroy them. He said that through their carelessness, the Siegharts might find out about the mana stone, which was more dangerous, so they would let them deal with a couple of monsters. Putting on the mask, the leader said they would make them think they had successfully completed the mission. Turning into an orc, the leader said that they would trash the village as soon as the apprentices left. At night, the apprentices sat in the large guest house and dinner was served. Looking at Baron, Rayon thought that at first he was worried about him. He was doing much better than he expected. Baron did not boast of his title, but first of all reassured the head of the village and the villagers. It was evident that Baron was striving to do better. However, it was not Baron who should be worried. He and the others could handle the monsters as long as Rayon was not around. Rayon looked out the window. The problem is the watcher who followed them on the way here. Rayon wasn't sure, but the stalker headed for the mountains. Is this an additional test of the Sieghart clan or something else entirely? Taking a seat on one knee, Baron examined the tracks and concluded that there were definitely monsters in the vicinity. The head of the village said that at this time the monsters were beginning to appear, but this time they were 3 times larger than usual, and they could not handle them on their own. The old man said that they had counted several hundred footprints, which meant that there were more than 200 monsters. The old man didn't think it was the number of monsters, as the students were not familiar with the area, and said that he would prepare a guide so that they wouldn't get lost. As he bent down, Kanbar thought that although he knew something was wrong before yesterday's meeting, he didn't think he would have to go with the Sieghartson. As he passed by, Rayon told him he didn't have to worry because he'd be back in one piece. Baron stepped forward and told everyone to listen carefully. In battle, orcs are vastly outnumbered by common monsters, and goblins and kobolds do not hesitate to use poison in battle. When Baron said that even the slightest injury could be fatal and everyone should be on their guard, the students responded in unison. Turning to Kane, Baron told the 6th hall to spread out and not let any monsters get away. Kane nodded in response. Walking forward, Baron announced that they would move out and show the brazen monsters the full power of the Sieghart family. Watching the disciples run, the spirit called them fools, saying that they had rushed out of nowhere and it was impossible to catch them off guard before, but now they were yelling. In Spirit's opinion, this was not even a covert operation. Rayon replied that it was the first time they had been on such a mission, and they could be forgiven for one mistake. Looking at Rayon, Spirit thought that he was also on a mission for the first time, but he was not nervous at all, but was watching the battlefield carefully. In Spirit's opinion, Rayon looked like a seasoned warrior. When Martha saw the monsters in front of her, she shouted that she was going to give them a beating. Waving his sword, Baron told them to destroy the goblins and kobolds first and leave the orcs for later. When the orcs were at their backs, one of the students shouted that they had broken formation. As the orcs approached, Rayon Kanbar, who was standing behind them, asked fearfully if they were coming this way. Rayon raised his sword and struck his opponent squarely in the face. Ryan attacked the second one again and then put his sword back in its sheath. Kanbar, who had fallen on the snow, looked at the orcs and asked Ryan when he had time. Ryan only asked if Kanbar was injured, to which he replied that he was fine, and Ryan said he was glad to hear that. When Kanbar stood up, Ryan asked if there were any local legends about this mountain. Kanbar replied that there was one. He said that according to the legend, hundreds of years ago, there was a brutal battle here between a goblin king from the west and the knights. It is said that some of the goblin king's bones are still in this place. Now Rayon understood everything, the sight he felt now and the stalker before. Kul, Eden, one of the 5 great demons known for his madness. Its goal is to revive the old ways of the monsters that ruled the world. The members of the cult hope to bring back that world and worship the demons as their gods. However, if everything were so trivial, they would have been destroyed long ago. The fact is that Eden is able to bend monsters to his will, and the members of his cult can turn them themselves. They are as powerful as the Sieghart family. The secret of their power is so ancient that even the great clans do not know its essence. However, Rayon knows it, all thanks to Robert Darris. During one of his missions, the mercenaries stumbled upon this cult. All the shadow units were destroyed and Rayon was the only survivor. Rayon didn't realize it at the time, but it was a strange situation. Darris knew from the beginning that the cultists were using monastones. But how did he know the secret, and why didn't he reveal it to the world? Looking at Rayon, the spirit clarified what he was thinking about, and Rayon looked back at him. The spirit also said that he could feel a dark rage boiling up in Rayon. Rayon clutched his heart and thought that the thought of Darris was driving him out of his mind. Closing his eyes, Rayon thought that he needed to calm down the whole Eden's main problem right now. Rayon assumed their target was the monostone from the Goblin King's ring. It had been several hundred years since he had fallen here. But Rayon was sure that the ring with the powerful stone was still stored in the mountains here. Looking around, Rayon thought that the enemies wanted to let them think that the mission was accomplished, and then start searching for the stone after their departure. Meanwhile, Baron shouted that he had found the orc leader and said that he would finish him off in one blow. Martha appeared nearby and knelt down and thrust her sword into the leader, saying that the orc was hers. With a wave of his hand, Baron announced that the monster boss was dead and ordered his comrades to deal with the remaining monsters. Turning to Kanbar, Rayon clarified that no one had found the lost ring since then. Kanbar said that when he was a child, the head had gone to the mountains and returned with a red stone that he had found in the foothills. And Rayon asked where the stone was. Now, Kanbar said that not many people knew about it, but it was buried under the house of the head of the village. Clenching his fist, Rayon thought that the situation was much worse. If Eden didn't find the stone in the mountains, they would burn the village to the ground. When the apprentices had dealt with all the monsters, they reported that no orcs had been found in the area. Red was finished. The head shook Baron's hand and thanked him for his help. He said that the Sieghart warriors were truly the strongest Baron had ever seen, and Baron replied that they were only too happy to help. As Rayon watched the farewell, someone nearby asked if everything was going as he wanted. Rayon looked up and saw Martha sitting in a tree eating an apple and said that she didn't really know what his plan was. Ron replied that he wasn't quite sure either, but that he would tell her when the time came, and she jumped down from the tree. Martha passed by and said that she would follow Rayon's orders until the mission was completed. Runan turned to Rayon and asked him what he was doing here. She asked if he was worried about something and emphasized that he was not in a good mood. But Ron replied that he was fine and she needn't worry. He said that the head of the village had promised a festive dinner and they should go. He knew that the cult of Eden would not interfere while they were here. It only mattered what happened tomorrow. The next day, the outskirts of Cebu village Smiling Baron thought everything was just perfect. Kane thought about the fact that they had defeated the monsters without even seriously injuring anyone, and that their first mission had been a great success. Looking at Rayon, Baron thought that was the reason why he didn't ask him to take over. Putting his fist on his heart, Baron thought he was doing a good job as leader, and he didn't know why Rayon had chosen him. But Baron hoped that Rayon had already realized that he was as good a leader as he was. When they were on their way, Rayon ordered everyone to stop. The cadets turned around and asked him what was wrong. And Rayon announced that from now on, they were on a real mission. Kane asked what Rayon meant, and Rayon said that the mission wasn't over yet. Baron didn't know what Rayon was talking about either. He began to explain that they had destroyed all the orcs and even burned the bodies, and asked if there were other objectives. Rayon reminded that the goal was to protect the village. But Baron asked what the problem was. Rayon said that until recently they had been closely watched by someone. He said that they had been following them but had stopped about an hour ago and left. One could have taken them for instructors, but Rayon felt threatened. The cadets had been followed before they arrived in the village, and when they moved away from the village, the pursuers disappeared. And Martha clarified Rayon said that it was before they arrived at the village. Rayon clarified that the surveillance started as soon as they passed the foothills. Martha realized that Rayon had only handed over command to Baron because Rayon said he had, and he had hidden his presence to learn more. During their fight, Kane realized it too. He saw that Rayon's tactical skills were as good as his instinct. Standing with his mouth open, Baron asked Rayon if that was the only reason Rayon had entrusted him with leadership. Rayon replied that it was. He figured that if Baron was the leader, everyone else would be safe under his command. Rayon also pointed out that Baron had done well, and he was sure that because of that, the enemy had decided that Baron was the strongest, and had not noticed Rayon. Putting his hand on Baron's shoulder, Rayon said that he was the true Sieghart, and when they returned, he would recommend him for the role of second leader. Looking down, Baron thought he was on par with Rayon, but he was just using him as bait while he scouted the situation. Then Rayon said that monsters don't tend to group together, but this time the orcs and goblins were working together, so they were in control. And Rayon reminded that their primary goal was to protect the village. It is not complete, for now the village is in far greater danger. He said they would return to Cebu, but they would do it stealthily, so they would not be spotted on the way back. Turning to Dorian, Rayon said it would have been nice if they had equipment for such purposes, but they had not brought any. Dorian spread out a large cloth in front of Rayon and asked if it would fit. Looking at it all, Rayon asked where Dorian had gotten it. He replied that he had taken it with him just in case. Turning to him, Rayon asked if he had taken 40 sets of gear. He gave a thumbs up and said it was better to be prepared. Rayon said that in that case they could hide, just like in training, and turning to Crane said that she would go for help. Turning to his apprentice, Rayon reminded them that from now on they all obeyed his orders and disobedience would not be tolerated. 5 hours later, in the shelter of Eden's cult, the subordinate informed the leader that the cadets had finally left the Derwenya and reported that the surrounding area was in order. They then proceeded with their plan of turning into monsters. They went to the mountain. The leader ordered to destroy everyone, and the orcs rushed to attack. The leader also ordered to take no prisoner. Meanwhile, Baron and Rayon watched the attack from the hill above. Baron exclaimed that there were indeed other orcs here. He said that they would deal with them now, but Rayon stopped him, saying that it wasn't time yet, and reminded him that they were being followed. Rayon also said that the stalker was not a monster, for he sensed the presence of a human, but that they did not know the identity of the enemy. Baron was worried that the villagers would not be able to cope with the horde of orcs, but Rayon said that if they intervened, they would all die. Rayon also reminded them to be doubly careful because Eden was against them. When Martha heard that, she exclaimed that it was the Eden of the 5 great demons. Rayon said it was because they could control the monsters. Looking up, Baron replied that he realized how powerful Eden was, and that Rayon was right. Turning to him, Baron added that if they didn't move now, half of the villagers would die, and would they really just stand by and watch? Gritting his teeth, Baron said that he thought Rayon knew the Sieghart family's principles better than anyone, but he was wrong and said they would attack now. Slapping himself on the chest, Baron shouted that this is what Sieghart warriors should do. Baron ran downstairs, swinging his sword, and shouted that he didn't care if the cadets went with him or not. Rayon looked at him and said, well, Runan said she would go with him. The cadets began to say that Baron was right, and that as Sieghart warriors, they should not sit around shaking with fear just because their opponent was a demon. Then the cadets rushed forward, shouting that they would defend the village and all the locals. Kane then asked if the entire 6th Hall had arrived, and said that they would help the 5th and deal with Eden's cultists. Watching the cadets, Rayon thought that everything was going as he had hoped. Even earlier, Rayon realized that they were too honest to tolerate injustice, so they would rush to the rescue to stop Eden and the monsters. So Rayon sent a message to Runan in advance with his aura, telling him to follow Baron. In a battle against Baron, Runan and Kane, even the fanatics, stood little chance. Rayon looked back and asked Martha why she didn't go first, adding that he thought she would run first. And Martha reminded him again that she had already said she would obey Rayon's orders. And Rayon said that in that case they would follow them to the village, but that they would conceal their presence as much as possible. The intent of the annihilation is all too clear. However, it does not come from the direction of the village, but from the mountains. The 5th and 6th halls will deal with the remaining hordes, but if they face the main enemy head-on, they will be in danger. Baron shouted that the cadets should not attack the orcs directly, but move back a bit and only then strike. He also said that if the cadets could not take down a goblin alone, they could attack as a group. Fighting Baron realized that these orcs are much more vicious than those they fought yesterday, but if the problem was only in them, difficulties would not have arisen. The fact is that Eden is the main opponent, which means he won't stop at that. Drawing their attention again, Baron warned the boys to beware of enemies that might attack them from the forest. Turning to the forest, Baron saw a squad of Eden's green ghosts, goblin masks and those clothes of doubt. Baron suspected they were coming, but he didn't expect so many of them. Even at first glance, Baron could tell that there were over 40 of them. When the enemy is outnumbered, you can't act rashly. So Baron ordered Kane and his squad to hold off the orcs and keep them out of the village, while Runan asked them to cool the air and freeze their feet. When he heard that, Runan went to do what he had ordered, but Baron went first. When Runan swung her sword, a path of ice came from the snow. Crouching down on one knee, Baron used the continuous flow combat technique. With great speed, he rushed past his opponents and struck them. A warrior sitting in a tree shot something at Baron from a tube. Realizing that they were poisoned needles, Baron shouted for the cadets to repel them with their aura or dodge them as soon as possible. Seeing that bags of black smoke had fallen to the ground, the cadets shouted to Baron that the opponents had dropped a bag of poison gas. Closing his hand, Baron thought that it was stronger than what the monsters were using and ordered the others to cover the perfume paths. But the students had already started falling to their knees, gasping for breath, and said that they couldn't even lift their swords. Baron's hand trembled as he realized that the gas had affected not only the reps, but also his body. Turning around, Baron noticed that Runan was getting worse as well, but the green ghosts and orcs were getting worse. Just when Baron thought they would be wiped out if this continued, something exploded near him. When the smoke cleared, Baron saw Martha in front of him. She shouted that they would replace the dumbasses and kick Eden in the head. The gas-stricken students cheerfully began shouting that Lady Martha had brought reinforcements. Baron smiled, thinking that even though he couldn't see Rayon yet, they were much stronger with Martha and fresh forces. The Shadow Squad was running, asking who these students were and how they could be so strong. However, they were met by the leader and asked if they were leaving the battlefield on their own. He walked past his subordinates and walked right up to the apprentices. Looking at the orc, Baron thought that his strength was greater than all the ghosts put together. He has a helmet of victory on his head and he speaks human, the green phantom of battle. Turning to him, Baron asked him what Eden's officer was doing here. The officer replied that he had received a report that they had left the village and had decided to return and disrupt their advance. He said he had been watching their strength and the dark-haired one over there was beginning to realize it. Putting his sword behind his back, the officer said that since they had barely gotten away from here a while ago, they should have just left peacefully, but now they were all going to die. He shouted that it was because they didn't know their place and swung his sword at Baron. Baron immediately fell to the ground, clenching his teeth in pain, and Martha and Runan crouched down from the blow. The students started shouting that the enemy had taken down 3 of them with one blow and asked each other where Mr. Kane was. Leaning on her sword, Martha stood up, listening to the students shouting that Rayon would not come here after this. The officer asked her if she had any strength left. He concluded that Martha was the strongest of the trash and no wonder she could sense their presence. He added that Martha was just one of the bugs he was crushing with his boot, and that weak, pathetic, undisciplined bugs would not have any luck. Swinging his sword again, the officer said that they would all die here today. However, a voice behind him said no. Rayon was already flying at him with a flaming sword. Holding his sword high, Rayon shouted that he was the only one who would die today. Rayon used the Thousand Flames First Form Ring of Fire technique and stripped his opponent of his arm. The officer looked back and laughed and said that Rayon had a good ambush, but it seemed that Rayon didn't expect him to dodge and keep his neck from being hit. Clenching his teeth, Rayon replied that he was a crazy degenerate and sacrificed his arm and that's why he wanted to destroy him with one punch. When Rayon got up, the officer told him that it was not bad, but that was the end of his luck. The officer also added that from the looks of it, Ryan put almost all of his power into one punch. That was it. Raon's hands were shaking because he had relied too much on himself to finish everything with one punch, and now it was hard to move. Ryan asked the officer in charge. The officer laughed and asked if Ryan thought his masters would show up for such weaklings. The officer told Ryan that he was talking too much. The officer swung his sword and shouted that they would see how long Ryan's long tongue would last. Ryan raised his sword thinking that he had not had time to regain his strength, but he was not the only one weaker. When the Protwinik's sword came down, Ryan retaliated. The officer said that Ryan was stronger than he thought. And Rayon said that if such blows were beyond his strength, he would never have become a swordsman. Growling, the officer struck again, but Rayon fought back. The officer said he had a good mind and called him a bastard. Crouching down on one knee, Baron wondered what was going on. When he saw the Raon and the officer fighting, Baron thought that the orc had taken them all down with one blow, and Raon was fighting him on equal footing. Baron thought he had almost caught up with Rayon, but he was outmatched. Martha approached Baron and said that this was Rayon's true power, and that they had only seen the tip of the iceberg before. Martha also pointed out that this was not enough because they might be equal in strength, but Rayon had not recovered in time and had used up almost all of his aura in that attack. As Martha continued to watch, she wondered if Rayon would be able to defeat the officer with what little strength he had. Runan came up to them and said that they needed to help Rayon. Martha asked if Runan could see that she was already struggling. Martha also said that Runan was weaker than they were and that she thought she could be of some use to Raon. Pulling out her sword, Runan said it didn't matter. She was ready to fight. This surprised Martha, who had thought that Runan would be afraid, but now she was as calm as ever. It seemed that Runan had changed from her interactions with Rayon. Baron spoke up and said he was ashamed of his hesitation. He said they would help Rayon as Runan had said. Martha asked Baron if he had forgotten how Rayon had scattered them. Turning to her, Baron said he would not turn his back on his comrade. Martha scratched the back of her head and said she didn't care, and if trouble came, they would be responsible. Drawing her sword, Martha said they would put their lives on the line and fight. Standing in front of Rayon, the officer said that it was amazing how the little brat could hold on so long, and added that he would even take Rayon to Eden. The officer asked for Rayon's name, and he gave his full name. The officer asked him if he was a direct heir of the sea cards. He added that the color of his hair and eyes gave him away. He realized that Rayon had the blood of the Northern King of Destruction in him. Swinging his sword, the officer said he takes back his offer, and he would do anything to end Rayon here and now. As he struck, lightning bolts began to shoot from his eyes. Rayon staggered backwards. Leaning back to avoid the blow, Rayon realized that his opponent was moving faster now. Clenching his teeth, Rayon wondered if the officer was using his life force to get stronger, as Rayon could barely hold the ring of fire, but his strength was not restored. Rayon looked up and saw Martha flying at the enemy with sword in hand. The officer roared and asked how she dared to be a pathetic little bug. The monster's arms and body began to be covered in ice. Rayon's Runan stepped forward. She used her aura of cold and attacked with breath of winter. Turning to Baron, Runan shouted, and Baron ran forward. He used the continuous flow technique and attacked the officer with multiple blows. However, the officer grabbed him and Baron coughed up blood. The officer asked they decided to defeat him with trivial tricks. Clutching Baron, he said that they were underestimating the situation, and if they were not up to the level of the blonde boy. Baron replied that he was right, and their attacks would not defeat him, but they could buy some time. The ground beneath their feet began to crack as Martha thrust her sword into the ground, and used her Titan aura. Raising her sword, Martha shouted that they would see how to deal with this Eden. The officer swung and hit Martha and Baron, causing them to fly backwards. As they fell to the ground, the officer said that such pathetic worms should know their place. Their conversation was interrupted by Round telling the officer not to say that. The fire was burning around Round, and he thanked the guys for restoring his strength thanks to them. He kept saying he would make sure their efforts and lives were not wasted. Turning to look at him, the officer asked how he had so much strength left in him, and asked who Round was. Raising his sword, Round told the officer to rejoice in witnessing Round use the technique on an enemy for the first time. At first, Rayon didn't think he would be able to use it at all, but after gaining some experience in this battle, Rayon stopped doubting. Rayon used the technique of 1,000 flames, scorching wings of power. Looking at him, the officer thought about what kind of flames it was. He realized that the flame was not what it was before, and his instincts were screaming of incredible danger. The officer decided that he had to destroy Rayon right now. So the officer lunged at Rayon, screaming at him to die. Rayon raised his sword higher. When Rayon lowered the sword, everything lit up around him with a bright white light. The smoke cleared, and Rayon saw the officer lying in front of him, his head split in two. Martha stood up and told Rayon that he had done it. Baron also whispered that Rayon had managed to destroy him. Rayon raised his sword and shouted for everyone not to relax because Eden's green Preserk squad was nearby. The cadets shouted as commanded and rushed into battle. Baron came up to Rayon and said that Rayon was right, and if he hadn't brought help, they would have been wiped out on the approach to the forest. He thanked Rayon for disobeying his orders and added that even if time had been reversed, he would still have gone to their aid. Putting his hand on his chest, Baron said that he believed that a true swordsman of the Sieghart family would never back down in the face of injustice. Turning away, Rayon said that they did well. Baron was even surprised. And Rayon explained that because they fought at full strength, he was able to take out the officer and each of them contributed greatly to the victory. Clutching his sword, Rayon said that if any of them had decided not to help him, there was no telling how it would have ended. He added that that's why he was very grateful to everyone and he meant it from the bottom of his heart. Turning away, Baron said that he had no idea what had gotten into Rayon and that he would be stronger to make sure that such an embarrassment never happened again. Turning to Martha, Rayon said that she too had done well and had distracted the officer, allowing him to regain his strength. Rayon approached her and thanked her for following his orders. Martha smiled as she passed by and said that if she couldn't even do that, it would be better to put her head in a noose. When Martha left to help in the village, Rayon leaned on his knees and exhaled, wondering if their mission had finally come to an end. He started to fall, thinking that he was too relaxed and that his legs were no longer holding him up, but Runan picked him up. Runan held him by the shoulders and asked if Rayon was alright. Looking at her, Rayon asked if she had stayed here too and noticed him falling. Runan replied that it was just like when Rayon was training she thought his strength had left him. When Rayon heard that, he thought that he was not the only one who had been watching over them all this time. The guys were also watching over him. A system window appeared in front of Rayon and he stood up. He realized that this was the result of the victory and all his stats had increased. Rayon stood up and told Runan that he was feeling better, and she could go to the village and he would check if there were any enemies around. Runan left and Rayon sat down on a rock and opened the system window. He was given the new title of Unbreakable Spirit, and it was better than Rayon had expected. Now, Rayon would be facing such opponents quite often, so the new title would come in handy. Rayon also had the skill of the Unseen Strike and thought it looked like a special assassin's move. Nearby, a spirit was looking at Rayon's awards and shouted that he had been awarded so many after fighting a weakling. Smiling, Rayon said he was getting stronger every day thanks to the spirit and thanked him. The spirit yelled that he would show him. Waving his hand, Rayon said, "Let him try if he can." Hearing this, the spirit roared. Meanwhile, the village was being rebuilt and the cadets were busy helping the villagers. Rayon opened his eyes and rubbed his forehead, thinking that he wanted to lie down for a while, but it seemed he had accidentally fallen asleep. When he came out of the house, Rayon saw that the wooden fence was almost finished while he was sleeping. Runan came to him with a bucket and asked how he was feeling. Rayon replied that he felt much better after taking a nap. Runan said that he should go with her because everyone was waiting for him. Rayon was surprised and asked who was waiting. Runan said that the villagers of Cebu were waiting for him. When Rayon arrived, they all bowed to him. Standing in the center, the head said that everyone had come to express their gratitude to their saviors, the swordsmen of the Sieghart clan. He thanked the boys for saving the village, saying that they had put their own lives on the line to help them. And if it wasn't for them, Mr. Swordsman, everyone would be in great danger, and their valor and bravery would forever remain in their hearts. Turning around, Rayon felt the respect of his comrades, their striving honesty and sincerity in the heartfelt words of the villagers. Rayon felt it for the first time. In his previous life as a mercenary, he had never felt anything like this. His whole life was dedicated to Robert Darus. No matter how many people Rayon had taken his life for him, no matter how many had gotten their hands dirty, Darus was the only one to receive awards. Now, for the first time, Rayon's services were being recognized. Had this ever happened before, Rayon felt his greed growing in him and wished it would happen more often. He wished he could be looked at more often with such admiration and gratitude. Looking up at the moon, Rayon thought that from now on he would give up the mercenary lifestyle and live as a swordsman, and he would be approved more than once. As the head was leaving, Rayon asked if he had a moment to say a few words. They left and Rayon asked if the head knew who controlled the orcs that attacked the village. The head said yes, because Baron had told him everything. He added that he didn't understand why the Cult of Eden would attack them, since the village was small and unremarkable. Rayon said that Kanbar had told him that the head had once found a red stone in the mountains. The head replied that it was true and that he had been young at the time. Ahead of the question, Rayon said that Eden had come to the village for the stone. The head said that he had almost ruined the village if it was all because of him. Rayon said that they were able to stop them this time, but that if the stone remained here, Eden would come after it again and continue his attack. The head replied that after he had buried the stone, the land had become more fertile and the village warmer, so it seemed to be a blessing. The head looked at Rayon and asked what they should do now, maybe dig up the stone and throw it away. But Rayon said that he would take the stone with him. The head said that their savior would take it with him. Then Rayon said that Eden believed that the stone could revive the dead and that he would take it with him to the Sieghards' house, so that they would not find it. If Rayon did so, Eden would come for the Sieghards, and how could he give such a burden to their savior? Putting his hand on his chest, Rayon assured him that it was all right to do it this way. The head bowed and said that it looked like the Sieghards were doing them a favor they could not repay again. Rayon asked what that meant. Then the head said that decades ago, when the head was a little older than Rayon, there had been a time when Glenn Sieghard, the current head, had also saved the village. Like Rayon, he had saved the village from an influx of monsters and looked at them with a smile on his face, and was very kind to the villagers. Listening to this, Rayon remembered what the head looked like now and thought they were definitely talking about the same person. As the head left, he said that he seemed to have lost his way and called Rayon with him, saying that he would prepare a stone. When the stone was dug up, the head complained that what he had brought to protect the village was causing them great distress, and Rayon asked what it was wrapped in. The head said that the cloth had been passed down in his family for generations, and that he had wrapped it around the stone so that the red glow would not be visible. Looking at the stone, Rayon was convinced that it was the Goblin King's monostone, and if it fell into Eden's hands, there would be new monsters with the Goblin King's abilities. Rayon asked to start by hiding the stone back. Suddenly, a man appeared next to them and said that because of this cloth that hides the energy of the stone, he would never be able to find it. This made Rayon very tense. He could not understand how he had not noticed the presence of the enemy. Even when he came close to him, Rayon grabbed his sword. Holding an orc mask in his hand, the enemy asked what Rayon thought he might be. Seeing his helmet, Rayon asked the ghost of mad blood in front of him. The ghost asked Rayon realize this by the helmet. Ghost then said that Rayon is quite intelligent, even for a Sieghard's apprentice. He said he couldn't fully appreciate Rayon's strength, but realized he was the one who had killed Eden's officer. Rayon replied by asking if the officer was his subordinate, and adding that according to the officer, he was not his superior. Putting on his helmet, the Phantom said that he had previously assigned him to lead this mission, and if Rayon hadn't finished him off, the Phantom wouldn't have come here. He added that it was Rayon's fault that he had to come here in person. Rayon's eyes opened wide and his body shook from the presence of the enemy. He knew that even if they attacked together, they would lose. The spirit appeared next to him and said that he really couldn't defeat him, and there were only two options. The first is to die miserably in a futile attempt to defeat the ghost. The second is to give up control of his body to the spirit. When the ghost turned into a monster, the spirit said that there was no third option. Watching the students rebuilding the fence, Baron saw Martha approaching them and asked her why she had come. She told him that she had come to check the results of his work and asked him if he thought carpentry was better than swordsmanship. When Baron came up to her, he said that if Martha had checked everything, he could shut his mouth and go away. When Martha heard footsteps, she turned around and saw Runan with a basket of fruit. Turning to her, Martha asked what Runan was doing, and she said she had brought fruit. Martha replied that the villagers had already brought them and why. Then Runan interrupted her and said that they were fresh for Rayon. When Runan passed by, Martha asked if she was being too helpful and added that they could be mistaken for newlyweds. Runan left in silence. Suddenly, something exploded at the other end of the village, and Runan stopped. When Runan looked back at the explosion, she realized it was Raon and ran away. Baron realized that it was Raon and ran, shouting to everyone to keep their weapons at the ready and to call for Cain and the 6th Hall. As they approached the house, Martha yelled that the head lived there and asked what was going on. Baron yelled for Raon to tell them if everything was okay. But right in front of their faces, the house shattered and the boys had to cover their faces with their hands. As they lowered their hands, they saw Raon flying past holding the chapter. When Raon fell, they saw that there was a lot of blood on his face and clothes, and the head was unconscious. Throwing the old man to Baron, Raon shouted that he was on top of him. Baron looked at the head in confusion. Crouching down, Raon grabbed his sword and ordered everyone to get out of here quickly. Raon's eyes were wide open. He asked to carry the chapter to safety and run. But the boys all stood and then fell to their knees. Baron said he couldn't breathe. Runan confirmed that it was as if his lungs had stopped working. Ghost came out to them and said that this was a very nice group of people. Looking up at the enemy, Baron noticed both the appearance and the Orcish armor. Watching the children shivering, the ghost asked if they could resist his presence and added that despite the loud name, they were all weaklings. Raon shouted at the top of his voice, asking his friends if they all wanted to die. He shouted that if they stood there like pillars, Ghost would just kill them. Raon then started handing out orders. Baron was told to run into the village and evacuate the villagers. Martha and Runan were ordered to retreat and prepare to take the fight. Raon told them not to even think about attacking him and just stay alert. All three stood in front of the enemy. Raon reminded them that Lemur had often said that one should be able to surpass one's limits. And now was the moment. Raon said it was time to transgress the limits of one's body and mind. With a grin, the ghost said they had a good mindset and asked if they thought that was enough to win. Raon knew that behind him were their recruits, Cebu village and its people. If he retreated, it would be all over. He thought the enemy must be defeated for sure. He stood as if at a precipice, unsure if he could do it at all. Raon would have had a hard time fighting the ghost even in his past life. And now the ghost reminded him that Raon had said he would attack at any moment. Leaning over, Ghost got on all fours and said that now Raon was just standing there watching, and his words were meaningless. Jumping at Raon with his fists, Ghost said that if Raon didn't attack, then he would. Raon's eyes went wide because the Phantom was now even faster than before. Raon swung his sword with the 1,000 Flames technique, the 10th stance, and fire erupted all around him. The ghost said that Raon's strength was not bad, but he kept on walking with his fist raised. Covering his head with his hand, Raon saw that the Phantom had easily broken through the Technicolor and was attacking. He clenched his teeth and thrust his sword forward, thinking he would have to fend off the attack. As the Phantom approached, Raon jumped aside and his fist flew past him. As he watched it fly by, Raon thought that if he hadn't been able to read the direction of the blow with the Ring of Fire, he would have died. At that moment, Raon wanted to retreat, but he knew he couldn't. He thought that he should show those guys who were watching the fight his other attacks. That way, they would have a slightly better chance of surviving, or rather, they would increase by 1%. Watching Raon running towards him with his sword, the ghost laughed and asked what the hell was going on. The Phantom jumped, clenched his fists, and squatted down to extinguish the flames. He shouted that the fire disappearing with half a kick was no good. The ghost pushed himself up from the ground and started flying straight at Raon, shouting that they were going to have fun. When the enemy was close, Raon bounced and the ghost slammed his fist into the ground, shattering it. Sitting down again, Ghost said that Raon's flame was very different from his normal aura, and he wondered how the officer lost to Raon. Looking at Raon, Ghost added that when he saw his strength, he realized the reason, but now the whole situation looked even more pathetic. Ghost said that Raon's flames would not hurt him, and asked if Raon knew why Raon was trembling. Raon said it was because of his helmet, which contained his power. King of the Forest Ogre. Forest fires cannot hurt the ogre. This monster is fiercely protective of its territory. When the ogre comes upon a castle, it is not afraid of defensive fires or fire arrows. The ghost of wild blood is able to transfer power from this monster. The ghost stood up and said that in this case, Raon knows that no matter how strong Raon's aura is, he is not afraid of it. And he even feels sorry for Raon. But Raon replied that if fire didn't work on the ghost, he would just use something else. Raising his sword, Raon used his other skill and snow started flying around. Seeing the cold, the ghost asked Raon if Raon was able to change an element of his power and hit with the same power. The ghost couldn't believe that Raon had such abilities at such a young age and asked who he was. And Raon asked what did Ghost care if he was going to die at his hands soon anyway. The Phantom grinned and said he would see how fast he could knock Raon out of the fight, but Raon was already flying straight at his opponent. As Baron and the other students ran to Raon's aid, there was an explosion. When Baron arrived, he shouted to Raon if he was alright, but Raon was throwing punches. Seeing what Raon was doing, Baron saw that it was not the fire aura Raon normally uses, but the power of cold. The power of Raon's aura sword fighting skills, Baron wondered when Raon had time to become a swordmaster. The warriors of the continent are divided into many classes depending on their strength. Any weapon serves as a confirmation of its wielder's aura level. Those who have just begun to learn the use of aura are called beginner. Those who know how to control the aura and can cover their body with it and direct its flow into the weapon are called aura users. When the aura user further improves his skills, he becomes capable of releasing his aura. An aura expert is someone who can transform his aura into a sword. Therefore, if Raon can use aura muchness, he has reached the level of an expert. Otherwise, there's no other explanation for Raon being able to confront Ghost, who is supposedly at the highest stage of aura expert. But Raon just kept on hitting Ghost, and it didn't do any damage to him. Suddenly, Baron noticed Raon's gaze and realized that he was deliberately attacking so that the opponent would open up. They had spent so much time training together in the 5th hall that Baron could read everything in his eyes. Looking at Martha and Raon, Baron clenched his sword and thought that they were Sieg hearts after all. Baron thought that they had to protect the village, and they could do it all together with Raon, and so Raon swung his sword at the ghost's fist. Looking back at his comrades, Raon shouted for help. He yelled for the guys to release everything. Baron, Martha, and Runan attacked the ghost from above. As Baron flew, he thought about what they would win, or rather, what they could win. Looking up, Ghost called them insects and said he expected that. He balled up his fists and applied aura pressure that sent the guys flying in different directions. Baron realized that Ghost had released astral energy around his body. Looking at the remaining Raon, Ghost said that he had thought to finish them off one by one, but they made it easy for him. He said it was always fun to watch the hope in their eyes as they sank into the depths of despair. Swinging his fist, Ghost asked if they really thought he would be defeated by the likes of them, and added that they would all die today. Drawing his sword forward, Round shouted that he wasn't the only one expecting something. Combining all the malicious intent that Round had accumulated in his previous life, plus adding the coldness of the melodic aura to the Thousand Fires technique, Rayon concentrated everything into a single point 10,000 Fires technique endpoint. Once again, flames erupted all around and Round plunged his sword straight into the ghost's chest. As the ghost fell to his knees, Round looked down at the ground, breathing heavily. Grasping the sword in the ghost's chest, the ghost asked Rayon focused his aura to attack him when the defense weakened, and Ghost said he could have died that way if something had gone wrong. After hitting Round so that he flew away, Ghost began to draw his sword. He said that Round was too weak and they were not even worth comparing. Clenching his teeth, Round thought he could attack the gap when his aura weakened, but he didn't realize that Round couldn't penetrate his muscles. The ghost stopped the blow with his reinforced skin and muscles. He is at the level of an aura master, and Rayon shouted to the cadets that as commander he was ordering all students to retreat. He turned around and shouted that they could not win in their current state. Rayon ordered the villagers to evacuate and retreat. They had little time, and Rayon knew he needed to evacuate the students and villagers with minimal casualties. He asked Baron if dying in vain was the Seaguard's way. If not, then Baron should do what he had to do. Running away, Baron shouted to the others to concentrate on retreating away from the ghost, and they would save as many people as possible. Turning around, Runan tearfully shouted to Rayon that he couldn't just die. Watching Rayon get up, Ghost asked if he really believed these insects could escape. The ghost asked if Rayon believed he could hold him until they ran away. Calling the ghost, Rayon asked, "What about the bet?" The ghost smiled and said that it was finally the Essence King's turn. He said it was a better bet that Rayon was obviously going to fight to the last man, and asked what Rayon was betting on. And Rayon said he was betting that one of the two of them would die. Laughing, the spirit asked Rayon if he thought he could win, and Rayon said that because he was asking for his body and aura to be restored, and the spirit could reduce his resistance to anger. With a chuckle, the spirit said that if Rayon died, then all his stats in his body would be useless garbage, so he would restore it. The spirit then shouted for Rayon to take the rage of the Essence King and feel it in his gut. Looking at his opponent, the ghost asked what this strange ability to regenerate was and added that it didn't look like Rayon was drinking the blood of an ogre or troll. Rayon pointed his sword at the ghost and reminded him that he had already said that he didn't need to know. And Rayon told the ghost to attack because he was willing to entertain him until dawn. Looking around, Baron yelled that he knew it was hard on everyone, but they had to move fast and they didn't have time, so they needed to find a safe place. The cadets were panicking that this was happening just as they came in. Standing behind Martha said that Rayon stood up to that monster alone for them and those people. The cadets turned around. She said that even with a broken arm and ribs, Rayon still made him angry, but what an attitude the cadets had. Martha shouted that they don't do anything and just stand there and maybe they are going to die so stupidly. Baron opened his mouth. Clenching his fist, Baron said that Martha was right and now was not the time to be paralyzed. With a wave of his hand, Baron said that they were speeding up from now on and reminded them that Crane had gone to request help and they should be on their way by now. While Baron was yelling that they needed to move faster, a shadow of a monster appeared behind him. The cadets shouted that it was an ogre and asked why such a creature was here. Turning around, Baron also wondered why the king of the forest ogre had come down so close to the village. On the other side, the cadets shouted that another monster had appeared. Now the students realized that they were surrounded by ogres, but they couldn't believe that it was possible for monsters to work together. Looking at the monsters, Martha remembered that the people of Eden could control the monsters, so maybe that's why the ghost had rushed at Rayon. Sitting down on a log, Cain said it was over and now they were stuck here and doomed to die. Standing with his sword raised in front of the two ogres, Baron told the students not to give up. He added that if they died here, it was pointless. How will they be able to face Rayon, who is single-handedly holding back that? Phantom Martha replied that for Baron, it was such a rare, sensible statement. Runan added that they should evacuate the people and then quickly go and help Rayon. Holding the sword, Baron thought that this was the greatest respect they could give Rayon fighting alone for them. Suddenly, the students were buffeted by the wind and leaves flew around. Baron had seen this somewhere before. Clenching his fist, Ghost said that Rayon was like a leech clinging to his life. Looking at Rayon, who was covered in blood and sitting with his back to the stone, the ghost said to just give up. Looking at his arm, Rayon thought that the broken arm was in his way, and if he separated it, he could fight a little longer. He wondered why he was doing this here. Every muscle and every skin cell was screaming. Why is Rayon enduring pain he never felt even in his previous life just to fight this monster? In a previous life, Rayon would have run away without a second thought. Sylvia's silhouette appeared in front of him. She hugged him and told him she wanted him to become a proud swordsman, worthy of the Knights of Seaguard. Sylvia's words and the memories of his comrades who were with him still bind him to this place. Runan, who seems indifferent but is actually kinder than most. Baron, who started off on the wrong path but is now steadily moving towards his goal. And Martha, who supports everyone with her unwavering faith. It would be a lie to say that Rayon has not grown attached. Rayon thought he wanted to save those who were becoming swordsmen worthy of Seaguard. The spirit asked Rayon if he tolerated his anger just to buy time for his comrades to get out of his reach. Looking away, Rayon replied that the spirit had some wits about him. And Spirit said he admires him, but there is a limit to ignoring him, and asked Rayon thinks he can regain control of his body. He shouted how Rayon, barely standing on his feet, would be able to do that. Rayon felt as if he had been hit in the chest and leaned over and let go of his sword. He fell to all fours, and the spirit shouted that Rayon lost the moment he took his wrath, and if he gave up the body, there would be no return. Watching his opponent suffer, the ghost said that it looked like his limit had finally come, and added that he had come up with a great idea. The ghost said he would leave Rayon for last and finish off his companions first. It would be more fun that way. Rayon looked back and listened to the phantom telling him to imagine the heads of his comrades being ripped off one by one before his eyes. Looking after Ghost, Rayon realized that at the apprentice level, they would not be able to withstand the Ghost Master's attacks, and he would have to hold him back until everyone escaped. Suddenly, Rayon said his name. The ghost turned around when he heard it. Rayon said that he was a descendant of Glenn Sieghard, the Northern King of Fighters, and that one day he would be the strongest swordsman on the continent. Rayon raised his sword and said that as long as his heart was beating, he could not leave this place. Turning to him, Ghost said that at his age, such bravery is not even enough to say it is impressive. Clenching his fist, preparing to strike, Ghost said that a true warrior deserves such respect, and he will remember his name. Watching his fist fly at him, Rayon realized that he no longer had the strength to dodge the attacks. Just as Rayon lowered his head, a warm wind suddenly enveloped him. Rayon looked up and saw the familiar red hair in front of him. Limerus, meanwhile, had struck the phantom and a bright light illuminated everything around him. Smiling Round told Lemur that he was too late. Lemur whispered sorry. Pointing his sword at the ghost, Lemur said he had gotten some sleep and asked to leave the place to him now. Looking at the weapon in Lemur's hands, Ghost recognized it as the diamond sword of the Sieghards. Lemur called him Baldy and said it had been a while. With a grin, Ghost asked how Limerick had gotten here. Limerick said he couldn't just stand by and watch some wretched man, and watch as some wretch trampled on young talent. Taking a swing, Ghost said that no one would have thought that a warrior of Lemur's caliber would be put in charge of babysitting students, shouting that the power of the Sieghards had definitely weakened Ghost struck, but Lemur deflected the blow with his sword. When Limerus pulled his sword aside, Ghost said that Limerus could still deflect such a blow, even if the balance in his body was already completely destroyed. Ghost then asked if the rumors about Limer's energy core being destroyed and the resulting limp were true. Limerus replied that it was nonsense and added that Ghost needed to trust more reliable sources. The Ghost said it was nonsense and said that Limer's swordsmanship exuded a terrifying amount of malicious intent. And now the sword swings are like a breeze attacking Limerus. The Ghost said that there was no way Limerus could finish him. He threw a punch, but Limerus bounced back and his fist hit the ground. Limerus said it was brutal. As he flew up, he swung his sword and the Ghost made a fist round. Who was watching them noticed that Limer was quite agile in the air. Moreover, many of Limer's attacks were so precise and systematic that they gave Rayon goosebumps. If Limer used all his strength, he would win. Rayon also wondered why Limerus had interfered, and then suddenly thought that Limerus had just decided to show him his sword skills again. Attacking his opponent, Limer said that he was so smugly belittling him, while he himself couldn't knock him down when he was so weak. In that case, Limer suggested that Ghost just throw that helmet away. With another fist bump, Ghost told Limer to shut up, but Limer dodged again. Ghost then told Limer to stop messing with him and fight him at full strength. Smirking, Limer thought he had almost reached his limit in dodging Ghost's attacks, and it was time to demonstrate the training program. Standing up, Limer told Round to watch closely as the Sieghards fight and what he would be learning. Raising his sword, Limer activated Megaspace and then used the Eye of the Storm. Watching this, Ghost said that the swordsman summoned the storm, and while it rages, he would be at the center of it, and with the level of aura he could destroy. With a grin, Ghost said that now he could not escape, and the only way out was to smash Lemura's head in. Ghost's eyes lit up, and reaching out his hand towards Lemur, he shouted that he would destroy Sieghards' diamond sword. Then there was a massive explosion so powerful that chunks of earth flew into the sky. Standing behind Lemur's back, the Ghost said that part of the power he used to cover their bodies in auras and channeled all the wind from the center of the Eye of the Storm into his sword. Of course, the Sword of Space should work like that, but Limer wasn't a direct descendant of the Sieghards, so how could he create a Sword of Space? Smiling, Lemur replied that it was not a sword of space, but something close to it created from the mysterious forces of nature. Looking at the moon, the Ghost said that even when a tiger grows old and weak, it is still a tiger. Turning to Round, Ghost said that if he had any regrets, it was that he couldn't destroy that guy. Limer said with a sigh that there was no way they could put in a good word for him with their young king. Ghost said that Rayon had the qualities of a king, but that he should not be arrogant, and said that they had many talents to counter. Ghost then said that today he would admit defeat to the diamond sword of Sieghards Lemur, put the sword away in its scabbard. Walking over to Round, he asked if Round had memorized everything, and added that as a descendant he should learn the Sword of Space. Smiling, Limer said that just as mages create space with their mana, swordsmen create fields and spaces using their level. He kept saying that the Sword of Space was based on all the experience of the aura and even the future, and that as a direct descendant, Rayon would one day be able to use it. Then Limer turned to the students and clarified that they had seen everything from beginning to end. Rayon looked back too. Seeing their frightened faces and a crying Runen, Round asked why they were here. Martha called Rayon a bastard and shouted that he was alive. Runen knelt down next to him and asked how Raon's wounds were, Baron behind him saying it was a relief that he was okay. Watching them, Limer thought that old injuries make themselves known after a fight, no matter how much you lie to your opponent about your health. There were only a few instances where descendants from side branches were able to use the Sword of Space. In this way, they were literally using up their own life. Limer thought he was using it to simply maintain his condition. But Limer didn't regret anything, what Raon had shown him after he had intervened in the battle. It was nothing short of the beginning of his becoming a new king. In that moment, Limer made a final decision. He would serve this child as his new lord. In his mind, he thought that with a shattered core, Limer lived like a dead man. But these children gave meaning to his life. Even so, he was not sorry that his lifespan had become shorter. And of course, before his life came to an end, Limer would be glad to see Rayon as king. When everyone arrived in the city, Limer reported to the head of the house about what had happened. The head clarified Rayon had fought the wild blood ghost from Eden. Smiling, Limer said he knew the head of household would be surprised, and had rushed to him with the report to see the reaction. Limer said that if he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he wouldn't have believed it, and he swore that every word of it was true. Limer also added that he was not the only one who had witnessed it, and that the students and villagers of Cebu had seen Round fighting the wild blood ghost alone. In response, the head said that not every swordmaster could handle such a monster, and asked him to answer what the casualties were. Limer replied that there were a few people with minor wounds, and that Rayon had suffered more serious injuries during the battle. The head said he didn't believe it. Limer said that he knew what he had told him sounded absurd, but that the head would have no doubts when he saw what a master of the place Rayon was now. He fought the ghost valiantly and with the same strength as the phantom, and Limer wasn't even sorry to use the elven elixir on Rayon. The head exclaimed that this elixir is extracted from the Tree of Life and it is a priceless thing. But Limer replied that Rayon fully deserved it, and the head smiled, saying that Limer was too loyal to him. Closing his eyes, Limer exhaled and said he wouldn't say that. He added that he only wanted to give him and the others every opportunity to grow. Turning to Lowen, the head asked to call the division commanders so that when the recruits returned, they could give a large reception. Turning to Lemur, the head said that he had done well. Limerus exclaimed that it had been a long time since he had heard such praise from the head and went forward. The head asked when the recruits would return. Limera said that the apprentices would be back as soon as possible. As he approached the gate, Round thought that the mission to defend the village of Cebu had been a success, even if it had taken a lot more effort. Since the village had been almost completely destroyed in the attack, the apprentices had stayed longer than planned to help with the rebuilding. Rayon was injured quite badly, so he lay in the elder's house trying to recover as soon as possible. As soon as he opened his eyes, he immediately asked Spirit about the reward for the bet he had won. Spirit insisted on canceling the bet because of the interference. The reward for the wager was quite weighty, but the Spirit was angry and asked why Rayon had chosen it. As Rayon looked at the system window, he thought to himself that he had not expected to receive something like this. This pleased Rayon because with this skill, he would be able to fight using the rage trait he had won in the argument. Looking at Rayon, the Spirit grinned, not understanding how he had managed to get an iron will. He decided that he should not have created such an elaborate system. He had designed it so that it would meet the user's needs if it wasn't for the rewards. Spirit thought he would have easily gotten him. Clenching his teeth, Spirit thought that he needed to calm down because he had plenty of time. The time for his recovery and return was approaching. Spirit had managed to plant even the seed of anger in this child. For a human, Rayon is showing incredible growth rates, so his victory is only a matter of time. The Spirit thought it would be a short time before Rayon's torso and soul would belong to him. When he descended to Earth, Rayon and his kind would wriggle under his feet. When the disciples arrived at the palace, they were met by the family's division commander, Sieghard Ilian. The apprentices were literally asleep as they walked. Dorian was thinking about going home to bed. Runan was thinking about ice cream. Baron said they were back after all. Ilian said he knew they were tired from the road, but it wasn't time to rest yet. Hearing this, Rayon just asked what. Ilian replied that the apprentices should go to the Lord's manor. When they arrived in the hall to the head, the apprentices approached the throne and knelt down on one knee to greet my lord. There was a whisper among the people that this was the same Round Sieghard who had defeated the Green Phantom of War and fought the Wildblood Phantom. At first, Round was worried about the sudden challenge, but now he realizes that this is a great opportunity, because all the highest ranks of the Sieghard family are here. From the past mission, Rayon has learned a lesson, but now he must prove himself in future battles. It is here and now in front of all the heads of divisions, of all the heads of families of the direct line on Rayon. All eyes are directed at him, including Glenn Sieghard. Glenn has different techniques and personally, plus he always rewards everyone on their own merits, and so there is only one way. In Round's opinion, they need to prove what they have achieved and find a teacher who will teach him even more. The head turned to Rayon and said that he had heard that he had performed better than the others on this mission, and added that he was waiting for a detailed report. Rayon stood up and began to talk about the time he spotted the scout and the monostone hidden in the village. He told of how the ghost had attacked suddenly and Rayon had taken the role of decoy, worried that the enemy might do irreparable damage. After these words, Karun shouted, calling Rayon a scumbag and asking how dare he lie to their face. Rayon turned around. Karun turned to the head asking if he really trusted the words of this bastard, as the Phantom alone would have killed all of them, not to mention the Phantom. Looking back at Dorian, Rayon asked him to bring those things. Dorian went to get them. When Dorian arrived, he spread out a cloth in front of the head with 2 helmets on it. After everyone was sure that Rayon was telling the truth, Rayon asked the head for permission to bear his sword. The head gave it. When Rayon drew his sword, flames blazed around him. People realized that Rayon was the descendant of the clan whose aura had impressed everyone at the ceremony. They immediately realized that this kind of power could defeat the Green Battle Phantom. Looking at Round, Karun thought that Round was a bloody half-breed and had reached the level of a swordmaster, and if it wasn't for those helmets, he wouldn't have believed it. So the head began to say that Rayon was the first among the recruits to excel at the task. When Rayon heard his praise, it seemed to him that only the 2 of them were left in the hall, and the others were numb with amazement. Some of the recruits couldn't hold back tears when they heard his remark. After finishing his report, Rayon displayed the red monostone and informed the head of Eden's purpose. As a result, all the recruits were awarded bronze medals and Rayon was awarded a silver medal, but Rayon thought he would receive an additional award. Nearby, the hovering spirit said that even giving the head such a meaningful information about Eden to Rayon didn't get Rayon anything and called Rayon an idiot. As Rayon walked along, he thought that after achieving the 1,000 lights technique, he would trust Glenn a little more, but apparently he shouldn't have gotten his hopes up. Rayon was approached by Lowen and asked for permission to visit the annex in the evening. Rayon asked why. Lowen smiled and said that the clan head had ordered Rayon to be brought to him and that he wanted to give him a second reward. When Rayon returned, Sylvia rushed to him and told him that she had heard Rayon fighting against Eden's own servants. Putting her hand on Rayon's face, she asked how his arm was. Helen stood beside him with her hands clasped together. Rayon said he was almost recovered. Sylvia hugged Rayon and apologized for what she had said before she left, and for demanding that he act like Sieghard. She said that she was worried that it had all happened because she had behaved wrongly, because he had fought against the demons all alone. Tears came to Sylvia's eyes, but Rayon said it wasn't like that, and he was grateful for her words. He told her that when he had faced the ghost, he had at first wanted to give up and run away, because he wasn't sure he would win. But then he remembered what his mother had told him and how she wanted him to live a life fit for the swordsman of the Sieghard family. And Rayon said that thanks to Sylvia's words, he was able to fight like a true swordsman. Sylvia fell to her knees and began to sob even louder, and Helen also covered her face with her hands. Rayon raised his hands and asked why they were crying. Back in his bedroom, Rayon asked Judiel if anything had happened while he was away. She said she had received orders to return. Looking at her, Rayon realized that Judiel would be punished for not informing them that he had become a swordmaster, and would take out his anger on her. Then Rayon decided he couldn't let her die now and saved her. Rayon paid a heavy price. He said she should listen to him. He said that instead of going back, she should send a letter saying that she had been appointed Rayon's personal maid. She should write that the decision was Sylvia's because she had become concerned about his condition, and then Judiel would be cleared of suspicion. If Judiel thought they were targeting her again, she should report that Rayon was making a rapid recovery. Rayon said that if she understood, she should hurry up and write the letter. Judiel turned around and headed for the exit. The spirit said that Raon's every word and action was foolish and asked why he kept this useless spy around. But in Rayon's opinion, she is not useless, and he is using Judiel as a trap to strike at Karun Sieghard. Besides, Rayon doesn't want to use her and then throw her to her death just like he did in the past. Rayon looked into it and said he had one last thing to do today. Returning to the castle again, Rayon bowed and said that he came at the summons of the head. The head frowned and said that the formalities were enough and asked what style of movements Rayon had used during the mission. It was unclear why he was suddenly asking about it, but Rayon replied that he had used the river style and the basic steps that all recruits were trained in. After thinking about it, the head replied that it was a pretty good technique and could be used even after Rayon became stronger. The head said that he had decided what Rayon's reward would be for his valor in the battle against Eden's comrade in arms. Descending the stairs, the head said that he would personally teach Rayon the style of steps that would suit him best. Rayon's eyes opened wide because he couldn't believe that Glenn would personally teach him. When Rayon stood up, the head told him to keep his eyes open because he was only giving him one chance. As Rayon watched the head walk and fire began to light up around him, Rayon thought it was the movement style of the mightiest warrior on the continent. Rayon had never before seen the style of movement that Glenn showed him. He moved fast and slow at the same time, his footsteps light but also heavy. His steps were as free as if he could walk to the edge of the earth and back without difficulty. The demonstration was very short but so perfect that it was instantly breathtaking. It was impossible to comprehend even with a ring of fire. Glenn said that this technique was called Heavenly Harmony Steps. When he finished, he asked Rayon if he had been watching closely, and he replied that at his current level, the technique was incomprehensible. Rayon said that he could only remember the first step of what the head had shown him. When the head left, he said that the meeting was over and that Rayon had received his reward, and that the rest was up to him. Rayon bowed and thanked the head and wished him well. Rayon left and Lowen said that he had not expected that the head had decided to show him the steps of Celestial Harmony technique, and added that he was worried. After all, the technique had been created by none other than Glenn, and Lowen wasn't sure that young Rayon would be able to grasp such a complex science. In response, the head said that he had only shown Rayon once and he already understood divine progression, and that the first step is the foundation of all things. In the head's opinion, Rayon instinctively realized that all technique was based on the first step. Rayon had not yet realized how important this was, but he would soon realize what the first step represented. The head knew that Rayon would one day fully master the Heavenly Harmony Steps technique. A few days had passed since Glenn had shown Rayon the steps. Rayon continued practicing using the system, but was still unable to learn the steps completely. It seemed to him that if he practiced a little more, he would figure it out. Suddenly, a furious Sylvia jumped over the fence and asked him what he was doing, because she told him to rest. When Rayon saw this, he thought to himself that it was impossible to tell that she had a broken energy core. She came up to Rayon yelling that he said he would only start training when he was fully recovered from his injuries. Rayon asked not to be angry and went to the swings thinking that Mom was much scarier than the Demon King. As a result, the step training was temporarily suspended. Of course, Rayon continued at training secretly, but Helen and the other servants were watching him closely, so he had to take a break. Remembering the faces of the servants, Rayon wondered why they looked like they were enjoying it. Smiling, Rayon thought that sometimes it was nice to just sit back and relax. Suddenly, Helen ran up to him and told him that they were in big trouble. She told him that Raiden Sieghart had come to see them. Rayon knew that he was the son of Balder, the fourth of Glenn's sons. Looking at Helen, Rayon said that Raiden had no business in the wings, so why was he here? Putting his hand on his chest, Helen said that they didn't know, then shouted that as soon as he arrived, he went after my lady and her servants. Standing in front of Sylvia, Raiden shouted that she hadn't even cleaned up the garden before the guests arrived, and now claimed she hadn't received a letter from him. Raiden continued to shout that apparently Sylvia wanted to say that it was the butler's mistake, or meant that he was lying to her. With her head down and her arms folded, Sylvia asked him to wait for a few minutes, while they made the garden look decent. In Raiden's opinion, the whole family should look at him with admiration, for he had personally destroyed a whole branch of the White Blood cult. But no one even spoke of his heroic deed. All they could hear was talk of a boy named Rayon. Raiden didn't understand how dare that filthy thief from a side branch take away his glory. He shouted at Sylvia asking how long he had to stay here. He spat on Sylvia and hit her right on the arm. Helen screamed that even for a direct descendant, he was going too far. And Raiden asked who she was raising her voice at and kicked Helen in the face so that she flew off to the side. Kicking her on the back with his foot, Raiden said that he was her boss, and even if he let her guts out, he would be forced to stay home for 2 days at the most. Sylvia yelled for him to stop, and suddenly Judiel balled her fists and yelled for Sylvia to be careful. Raiden smiled and asked if he was the same Rayon and added that he was just about to find him, so Rayon was just in time. Seeing Rayon's sword in his hand, Raiden asked if he wanted to draw his weapon on him, and then asked him to remember that he was a direct descendant of the family. With a wave of his hand, Raiden told Rayon to put the weapon down and not to make things worse. When Raiden started to introduce himself, saying whose son he was, Rayon drew his sword and the blade was at Raiden's neck, but Rayon said he didn't care. Raiden's servant came up and deflected Rayon's blow. Raiden called Rayon a crazy bastard, but Rayon did not wait and punched Raiden's servant in the face with his fist. Raiden shouted Rayon knows who he just hit. Rayon replied that he understood perfectly well. Rayon raised his sword again in preparation for the blow, and said that it was a robber who had entered their territory. Raiden was frightened and shouted that he was the lord of the house, and that Rayon was talking nonsense. Rayon flew up to him and hit Raiden in the stomach with his knee, saying that he was the only one talking nonsense. Kneeling down and clutching his stomach, Rayon called Rayon a bastard and said he would get even with him. Rayon said that their outhouse was not his home. Rayon raised his sword above him and added that Raiden was neither lord nor chief, but that this place was his family's home. Raiden raised his head as the sword flew at him and shouted. At the last moment, another man intervened, telling Rayon to move away. Looking at the man in front of him, Rayon realized from his uniform that he was a member of the Heavenly Blade Division, a swordsman working under the personal command of the head. A trembling Raiden pointed his finger at Rayon and told the knight to immediately blow Rayon's head off because the mudblood dared to get at a direct descendant. But the knight replied that they only obeyed the head and Raiden should stop too. The servant helped Raiden up while he yelled. The servant told Raiden that it was time for them to leave because if they interfered with the conflict in the division, they would make it worse. As they left, Raiden said that he would not forget what had happened, and that Rayon would find out what crime he had committed. He shouted that Rayon would suffer such a humiliating and painful punishment that he would beg for death. Nearby, Helen apologized to Sylvia, saying that she had acted rashly. Sylvia thanked her for standing up for her. Sylvia asked Helen not to worry about what had happened because she would sort it out for herself. But she was interrupted by Rayon, who said that he would sort it out for himself. He said that in the end he was the one who had fallen for the provocation, and therefore the consequences should be his alone. Then he and Raiden were summoned to the castle to see the head of the castle. The head of the castle ordered them to stand up. He told them that he had heard about the incident. Raiden shouted that it had happened. He told them that he had sent a letter to the outhouse confirming the visit. Allegedly, he wanted to talk to Rayon, but there he was met with a cold reception and no one prepared for his arrival, and then Rayon attacked him without warning. According to Raiden, if anything had gone wrong, Raon would have stabbed him. Looking at Raiden, Rayon thought that acting was better than swordsmanship, and that he was different from what he had been told. When Raiden had finished, Rayon closed his eyes and told him that everything the head had heard was a lie, especially the part where Raiden had tried to calm him down. At that moment, Raiden grabbed Rayon by the scruff of the neck and called him a pathetic scum, and swung his fist at him. Lowen told him to stop immediately. He asked if they didn't realize who they were in front of. Closing his eyes, the head said they were both saying completely opposite things, and therefore needed an outside witness. Just as he snapped his fingers, Rachel from the Heavenly Blade Division knelt down in front of him. The head asked him to tell what he had seen. Rachel told him that Raiden claimed to have sent a letter, but that it had not been received in the outhouse. Lady Sylvia and her maids were gardening as usual. Without raising his head, Rachel said that it was at this moment that Mr. Raiden had come to visit. Looking at him, Rayon was shocked because he thought he would protect Raiden's direct descendant and would not protect those who lived in the outhouse. The head looked at Raiden and said that Rachel's words were very different from his. The head asked Raiden dare to lie to his face. Spreading his hands, Raiden shouted that it wasn't true and started to say that it was more important that the mudblood attacked. But the head said that the issue Rachel had raised was important, but in this case both sides of the conflict were at fault, and therefore everyone would be punished. Rachel asked if punishment would be enough if they kept him alive, but Rayon asked if he could do something first. Rayon said that Raiden had humiliated his mother in front of everyone and had used physical force on the maids, and he should pay for it. And the head began to say that both sides were guilty, and that they were both too angry to begin with, and might have forgotten where they were. Raiden and Rayon's lungs were flattened by the head's powerful aura. But Rayon recalled through the pain that the head himself had recently said that they were a family of true swordsmen. Rayon added that he believed that swordsmen could only resolve conflicts with the sword, and asked the head to duel. In response, the head said that it would be an entertaining spectacle and authorized the two of them to have a sword duel. The head also said that the duel would be held on the main training ground next week. Back at his house, Raiden announced that a sword duel would take place between the two of them. He said that Raon had brazenly demanded a duel in front of his honorable grandfather, and that if Raiden won, Raon's energy core would be destroyed. According to Baldur Raiden, no matter how talented Rayon was, he was just a boy that Sylvia had carried from who knows where. In response, Raiden told his father not to worry because he had no weapons with him at the time of the attack, and therefore Rayon had taken him by surprise. Just in case, Baldur said not to go on a rampage and take Rayon's life because that would be considered bad form, and said it was okay to take his arm. Smiling, Baldur told Raiden to take Rayon's last hope and crush him. Watching Rayon train, Helen said that soon the Lord would duel Sir Raiden, and asked if they were sure they should stay away. She said that Raiden was a master swordsman and that Rayon was barely at the novice level. Maybe it wasn't too late to stop him. Sylvia was silent, but thought that Helen was right that a sword duel was too dangerous. And if Rayon hadn't reacted so violently, they would have avoided it. Despite his goofy appearance, Rayon uses a flexible sword style that has many variations, and specializes in hitting open areas. But Sylvia told Helen that they were relying on Rayon's strength. Helen couldn't believe she'd really let that dreadful duel happen. In response, Sylvia said that she too was worried, but thought that Rayon had asked them to believe in him for a reason, so they would. Judiel walked up to Raon and said that she had brought Raon lunch. He turned around, Judiel said that there were a few sandwiches in the plate for a snack. She said that Raon was working very hard on his training, but asked him to eat slowly so as not to irritate his hungry stomach. When Raon picked up the plate, he noticed a book under the cloth that was familiar to him. The book contained information about the flexible sword technique that Raiden used. Moreover, the text was very concise and clear, and could be read and memorized at a glance. Looking at Judiel, Raon thought how she had managed to gather so much data in a day, and recently she had even stood up for Sylvia. And now she had brought information about Raiden, even though Raon had not asked for it. Raon thanked Judiel in his mind. Time passed and the opponents spent it at their discretion. And now it was the day of the duel to which the eyes of many family members were fixed. Looking at Raiden, Raon remembered how much he had been waiting for this moment, and the boy had no idea how much he itched to cut him to pieces. As he reached for the hilt, Raon thought he would chop him up so badly that Raiden would never be able to hold the sword again. The instructor came out and asked the competitors to come forward as soon as they were ready to start. Raiden said he couldn't wait to see Raon's face afterward. Raon responded by saying that he wondered if Rauden would be able to see anything. The start was announced and Raiden lunged at Raon, yelling that the tricks weren't working. As Raiden pointed his sword at Raon, fire erupted, and then Raiden realized that Raon had disappeared. Raon stood behind him with his sword raised, touching his opponent's neck. Raon said it was the first time. Raon made a fist and said that today he would force Raiden to the brink of death 8 times. He struck Raiden with such force that he fell backwards, his mouth bleeding. Raiden wondered what had just happened, for he had not seen Raon's movements at all. Clutching his sword, Raon told Raiden to get up and clarify why he was on the ground. Once again, Raon reminded him that he would make Raiden die 8 times today for lying about the letter. Raiden swung his sword and shouted that Raon was an insolent degenerate, and that he would regret not ending the duel with a single blow. Suddenly, Raiden clenched his teeth as Raon vanished again, but Raiden was sure he was going to hit Raon. After hitting Raiden in the face with the hilt, Raon asked where he was looking and told him he was on the left. When Raiden fell to his knee and screamed, Raon said it was for spitting on a flower his mother had grown. Then Raon struck again and Raiden fell to the ground and Raon said it was for stomping on the flower. A new blow for Raiden, hitting Helen Raiden, thought it couldn't be because Raon was using basic sword technique and river style. Moreover, Raiden was sure that Raon's swordsmanship was at a beginner's level because he was an order of magnitude below him. Taking another blow to the face, Raiden wondered why he was losing. Helen, watching the fight, saw that Mr. Raon could have ended the duel with his first lunge, but he continued to fight, giving his opponent a chance to counterattack. Helen realized that Raon was not fighting to win the duel. He was avenging the humiliation they had endured. Tears came to Helen's eyes and she covered her mouth with her hand. For them, the silent maids who, in this estate ruled by the strongest of the strong, are not even human. Their young master is dueling with a descendant of the direct line to defend their honor. Next to her father, who craved only power in an estate that grew more uncomfortable with each passing year, Sylvia had always felt superfluous. When she became so unbearable to be here that she ran away from home, Sylvia turned away from the reality in which she lived. It was her mistake. She had to rely on her own strength to overcome the injustice of this bloody land. That's what Rowan is doing now. No matter how weak they are, they must have courage, and fight to the last against any enemy who dare not even set foot in their territory. Rowan doesn't run away but shows them how tough they must be. When it was over, the referee announced that Raiden Sieghard was completely defeated, and the outcome of the duel was decided. Balder shouted from the stands, asking Raiden what he meant by that. Limerus raised his fist and shouted that he was saying that Rayon would definitely win. Martha and Baron clenched their fists and shouted that they knew Rayon would win. Lowen said that he had been serving the family for a long time, but this was the first time he had ever seen anyone support the scion of a side branch so strongly, regardless of his status. The head is really surprised that Rayon's comrades support him so strongly despite his status. But what surprises him more is what happened at the duel itself. Rayon still lacks experience, but he still managed to use the steps of harmony. It's a walk that Glenn created after reaching enlightenment, after overcoming his dark side. A normal warrior cannot learn this martial art even after devoting a lifetime to it, but Rayon learned it in just 2 weeks. Rayon is extremely popular for his age. After his victory, the stands chanted his name. In the past, Glenn's only desire was for power. That's why the family values strength alone, and Glenn can't change that because he's too old. Since he is aware of the unfair treatment of the siblings of the side branch, perhaps one day Glenn will be able to change this family. The head said that since the duel was over, the conditions must be met. Turning to Lowen, the head asked him to reduce the budget of the True Martial Arts Hall by half for this year under any suitable pretext. After that, at Glenn's behest, the terms of the duel were met. Raiden confessed his sins in front of everyone. He apologized to Rauna's mother and the maids on his knees. Glenn had also instructed the True Martial Arts Hall not to interfere in any way with the affairs of the outhouse. The maids were finally able to breathe a sigh of relief as tears of joy appeared on their faces. This incident had finally come to an end. As they left, Sylvia asked when Raun had become so strong, and added that she was surprised. Ryan replied that he would explain everything, but that he shouldn't be so clingy. The instructors watching from above said that at such times, Rayon looked like a very ordinary boy, and not like a man on the battlefield. A man suggested that maybe he should ask Rayon to join the Black Tiger Division after he graduated. The girl said that he didn't have the slightest chance. The other woman added that the trainees of Hall 5 were really about to graduate and had to decide where to join next. In her opinion, Rayon really stands out among the others, but Rayon is not the only capable student in this training ground. She named Martha Berena Sieghard and Runan Cillian. She thought that those three were also strong and talented. The next selection ceremony promised to be extremely interesting according to the Black Tiger. When Rayon arrived at the house, Judiel asked him if he really expected this outcome. Rayon said he was sure he would win. And Judiel said that Rayon is a fearful man, but at the same time, extremely kind. She said she was really grateful to Rayon for saving her from Mr. Curran. As she left, Judiel said that Rayon needed a good rest. Looking out the window, Rayon thought that the look on Judiel's face this time was sincere. He thought it was possible to tell that the unworm was a lie. At that time, the head arrived at Lemur's place and waved his rings to greet him. Watching Limer take off his rings, the head asked where he got so much jewelry from. Limer told him that he had made a very favorable bet, a deal thanks to Rayon. Limerus also said that he had managed to get elixirs for all the members of the 5th Hall. The head thought that Limerus was bragging about extorting his son. Sipping his tea, the head said he doubted that Limer had come here just to show off his new jewelry. Limerus sat down and folded his hands and said that he had come here to make the head a proposition. Putting down his mug, the head said he was more than sure he had already entrusted Limer with their training. Limer replied that it wasn't about training. He asked the head for permission to change the final exam for the trainees. After scratching his beard, the head asked him to change the exam, and then he asked for more details. And Limer told him that the current final exam was either to receive recognition from the instructors or sparring between trainees. However, these guys had already fought against the apprentice knights of the Orvan Kingdom. And during their second mission, they had overcome a dangerous mountain. Even though they were only trainees, they had already passed many tests. That's why Limer thinks that the 5th Martial Arts Training Hall needs a new challenge. The head immediately understood what he was talking about, but Limer told him that the format of the test was survival. If the students could survive outside without any help from anyone else without using the surname Sieghard, they could become much stronger. Holding out his palm, Limer said that it wasn't a bad suggestion, and asked what the head had to say about it. At first, the head was silent, and then he said that Limer had changed. This answer surprised Limer, and he asked again. And the head said that after the day when Limer's energy core was destroyed, he had always been so sullen. But now it's different. Everything changed after Limer met the trainees of the 5th Martial Arts Hall. Now he has the same passion as his trainees. Waving his hands, Limer said that he was even embarrassed. Lowen came up to them and said that Limer's face had changed a lot. Putting his hand on his head, Limer said that he had just realized that he was not only a talented swordsman, but also a great teacher. Moreover, Limerus believed that he could raise the next king who would surpass even Glenn. In response, the head said that Limerus was talking about Rayon, and Limerus said who knows because that person could be Baron, Martha, or even Runan. The head turned away and said that in a week he would be expecting a report from Lemur regarding the final exam. And if Lemur didn't make it in time, they could pretend this conversation had never happened. But Lemur got the papers. Standing on the platform, the students complained that Limer had gathered everyone but didn't show up again, and assumed that he had spent the whole night in a brothel. Limerus opened the door with his foot and apologized to the students for being late, saying that he had to stop by the orphanage on the way. As he approached the students, Limer said that he had an important announcement to make, and had given it a lot of thought, but had made up his mind as soon as he saw them. And Limer reminded them that their graduation exam was coming up soon, because they couldn't remain victims forever. With a wave of his hand, Lemur said that they had accumulated a lot of experience, and that was why they would go to the outside world alone and see how big it was. Limer said that the topic of their final exam would be survival. After a month, they would discard their status as Sieghardt's trainees, and will begin their survival in the various locations of the continent, with only a sword in their hands. For those who are afraid, there will be an alternative exam. Turning to Raon, Runan asked if he would be willing to take part in this. Raon said yes. Baron said that he was sure the instructor was doing this for a reason, so he agreed. Seeing that Rayon was not the only one who agreed, Limer asked if the students felt that the decision was too easy for them. Rayon replied that he had no doubt that the journey would not be an easy one, but he was sure that Limer would not have taken it lightly. Rayon also added that in the end, Limer never gave them a challenge that was beyond their abilities. Taking out a sheet of paper, Limer said that he praised Rayon for his cleverness, but that he could expect no indulgences. Then Limer said that he would announce the destination for each of them: the Levain Desert for Baron, the Cyan Canyon for Martha, the Katam Jungle for Runan. Rayon's destination is the castle of Haebun in the northeast, a battlefield where the warriors have to fight monsters coming from the North Sea and the mountains. According to Limer, it's such a terrible place that people have nicknamed it the Battlefield of Hell, because the warriors here don't even have time to sheath their swords. Squatting down, Limer told Round that he would have a hard time, but that the others would have a hard time as well. Limerus then shouted to the students to remember to prepare for their departure in a month. Turning to Sylvia, Helen asked if she thought that the master had been training harder lately. Helen added that she wished Rayon would give up the exam as the place was extremely dangerous. Sylvia said that Helen was right, but at the same time it was a great opportunity for him to grow. She knew that all they had to do was to discreetly support Rayon so that he could focus on his training. As Rayon continued to train, he noticed that he was starting to get tired. The reason for this is that for a week after the details were announced, Rayon had been training. The monsters of Castle Haben have tough skin and huge size and are hard to cut even with a blade. Since Sigurd's sword arts involve a balance of attack and defense, Rayon is doomed to be at a disadvantage. Rayon can use the Thousand Fires technique, but it uses up a lot of aura, which can be bad for prolonged battles. With his hand on his chest, Round thought that all this time the Ring of Fire had helped him compensate for the disadvantage, but he couldn't rely on them alone. There were only 3 weeks left before Rayon left. He thought that he should learn as much information as possible regarding the castle and the additional technique. This technique is called Attack Sword Art, and it will complement the Thousand Flames technique. In order to get what he wanted, Round would need to make some investments. When Rayon came to the head, he asked Rayon if he had decided to acquire the new technique with silver medals. Then the head reminded him that Rayon had told him that he was going to spend them on something else, and Rayon replied that he planned to use the medals to restore his mother's status. The head clarified that he had now changed his mind, and Rayon said that after the mission in Cebu village and the last duel, he realized something the head said he was listening. Putting his hand on his chest, Rayon said that he had achieved amazing results considering his current situation, but was only rewarded with a medal. It was then that Rayon remembered Glenn's words that it would not be easy to achieve this. According to Rayon, he couldn't change anything with the medals as he needed the gold ones to restore his status. He was going to use them to become stronger and be able to collect gold medals. After taking out the book, Glenn replied that he was right. The book flew into the air and the head said that since Rayon was going to Habun Castle, this technique would be perfect for him. The book was called Fangs of Madness. Looking at it, Rayon thought about Glenn giving him a proper reward. The head had chosen this technique for him, so there was no doubting its effectiveness. After bowing, Rayon said he would gladly accept the book, and the head told him to keep working hard. Then Rayon said he would go, but the head said he had a question to ask him. The head said that since Rayon had come to him in search of new technology, he knew exactly what Habun Castle was. Glenn wondered if Rayon was not frightened to find out that his exam would take place there. And Rayon said that the unexpected duel in Eden had promised him growth, comparable to a year of training. He realized that in order to grow stronger, he had to be put in situations in which Rayon had to surpass his limit. Besides, there was no way Limerus would give them an impossible task. Rayon felt that the adventure would make him strong enough to be grateful. Lastly, the head said that there were many ways to use the techniques, and asked Round to push his limits of his understanding. When Round left, Limer told the head that this was why he appreciated him so much. In Limer's opinion, Rayon could see right through him, and there was nothing better for an instructor than a student who fully understood his intentions. Limer also added that Rayon was completely different from the grumpy Baron or the sweary Martha. The head asked him not to insult his students behind their backs. Limer said that he didn't expect Glenn to give Rayon the Fangs of Madness because, after all, the value of this technique was a gold medal. Limerus smiled and said that Glenn's love for his grandson was boundless, but the head said that he talked too much. Limerus also added that the Fangs of Madness was a rather brutal technique, and whether Rayon would be able to control it. In response, the head said that his job was only to give him the book, and whether he would study it or not was up to him. Limer said that despite his statements, the head had given Rayon some very important advice. The vein on Glenn's face was already swelling. Glenn raised his index finger and said that there was nothing Limerus could do about it. As he walked down the stairs, Glenn said that since Limerus was talking so much, he must have recovered from the effects of the previous battle. Limerus started to shout that he hadn't recovered yet, but the head raised his hand and lightning bolts began to shoot, and he said it was time to teach Limerus a lesson. Rayon was frightened when he heard the scream and looked back at the castle askance. Opening the book, Rayon wondered if this technique was really worth a silver medal. Fangs of Madness is an intuitive technique of the highest class that lives up to its name. It involves continuously attacking an opponent with the intent to bite into his throat like the fangs of a wild beast. However, intuitive techniques cannot be learned in theory and can only be honed through combat experience. That was why Rayon had spent countless sparring sessions with other trainees in an attempt to learn the technique. Rayon only let go of the sword the day before the final exam. He thought he needed to be more precise and would stop at nothing. At one point, the trainees were no longer able to spar with Rayon. He was finally getting closer to understanding the essence of the technique. When Rayon returned home, Judiel tended to his wounds and substituted that more bruises had appeared. Leaning over, Judiel asked if Rayon thought he was overdoing it a little since the final exam was tomorrow. And Rayon said it was because he was sparring to master the Fangs of Madness technique. Judiel said that was why she was working on his injury. Rayon also said he had something he wanted to tell her before he left, and Judiel said she was listening. Rayon then told her that he had lied when he said he had fed her the unstoppable worm, and Ju straightened up. Her face grew sad, and Rowan said that she already knew that, judging by her silence. When Judiel began to treat the wounds again, she said that she wasn't sure, just guessing. She said that at first she really believed it was the unworm. At that moment, she just didn't think it could be a lie. She was scared, and all she could think about was wanting to survive. Rowan treated her like a human being and didn't ask for anything in return. He even came up with a way for Judiel to escape the suspicions of the martial arts department. And there was something else Judiel had finally realized after a few similar incidents. The look on Rowan's face as he looked at Mrs. Sylvia and the look that Rowan used to warn her was only to protect the outhouse. That was why Judiel had assumed that Rayon wouldn't have resorted to using the unstealing worm, but she wasn't sure. She then asked why Rayon had chosen to reveal the truth to her, and he replied that she had changed. He said that while she had been watching him, he had been watching her too, and now she was starting to show her true feelings. And on the day that Radon showed up at the annex and started to show aggression, Judiel was really ready to rush forward to protect Sylvia. Moreover, on his bed, Rowan had found some information about Castle Haben, and was sure she had done it. And Rowan thanked Judiel for this information because it was very useful. Then Judiel told him that she has a younger brother and she has no idea where he is because they were separated during the sale. But Judiel said that one day she would still be able to see him, and that was the reason she kept following orders. Tears came to Judiel's eyes and she apologized to Rowan. Putting on his shirt, Rowan said that he will save him. If Karun still wants him dead, then their meeting is inevitable, and then he will surely find his brother. Judiel asked again why Rowan had told her the truth. What if she had decided to report him to Sir Karun? Rayon said that he had only thought she would not do that and asked what she would do. Judiel said it was the most ridiculous answer imaginable. She also said that she would continue to follow Rayon, and that if he needed anything, he should just let her know. When Rayon stood up, she said that while he was gone, she should keep an eye on the outhouse, and Judiel knelt before him. The night passed, and it was the morning of the final exam. Lemaris came out to the assembled students. He reminded them that the students would have to survive on their own for a whole year and then go back. Addressing Rayon as his best recruit, Lemur said it was time for his fiery speech. Taking the stage, Rayon said that a proverb says that a warrior who has survived his first battle cannot be destroyed so easily. They had all had a battle and survived to fulfill their mission where they had no choice but to die. Rayon told the students to become stronger and go back to the 5th study hall so as not to dishonor the name of the 5th study hall. Raising their fists in the air, the students began to shout that they would win and survive. Looking at Rayon, Limerick remembered that he knew from the beginning that he was no ordinary person. A calm mind that is not typical for Rayon's age, a kind heart that can influence the people around him, and a willingness to work harder than everyone else instead of relying on his talent alone. Moreover, during their last sparring session, Rayon managed to master the fangs of madness to perfection. Showing Rayon his bruise, Limer said that he wanted to spar with him since he had defeated all the other trainees, and he decided to renounce his instructor. In his mind, Limer asked Round to be brought back alive because if he didn't get to see the birth of the new king, he would be furious. After that, everyone saluted the chief instructor. Bowing the crowd loudly, thanked Limer for everything. And Limer said that he would be waiting for them here so the boys should get their strength and come back. As they left, Baron told Round that he would get stronger this year, so Round should keep up and not even think about disappointing him. Martha spoke next to him saying that she supported Baron completely and that Rayon should not die because she still owed him a debt. Rayon looked at them and wondered if they could not be honest. Runan came up to him holding a box and called out to him. She handed the box to Rayon and asked him to take it with him. Rayon looked back at her questioningly. There was ice cream in the box, and Rayon asked if she was sure she should give it to him. Runan said she had plenty more. He thanked Raunon for the treat. She waved him off and wished him good luck. Looking at his partner, Rayon said it was time for them to go. Blue Dorian leaned over and hissed, asking why he should go with him. Grabbing him by the handle of his backpack, Rayon headed for the exit, saying they had somewhere to go. Dorian asked where to go, and Rayon replied that it was to the trading city of Camelin. When they arrived in Camelin Round and Dorian went to the central marketplace, Rayon said that before the battle they needed to do some shopping. There was a wide range of goods available, but not what Rayon needed. He assumed that only the black market would be worthwhile. Dorian turned to Rayon and said that he had not found what he was looking for because he had not stopped at any of the stalls yet. Then Dorian clarified that Rayon was heading downstairs. And Rayon asked Dorian if he knew about the black market in Cameluna. Dorian exclaimed to himself, and Rayon asked how Dorian might know about it. Punching himself in the chest, Dorian said it might not seem like it, but he grew up in a trade association. Remembering how Dorian had taken 40 spare kits with him, Rayon thought that explained a lot. Rayon's hunch was confirmed. He decided that since Dorian had already brought it up, he could keep it to himself. As they passed by, Rayon said that they would go there right away, but Dorian said that the market could only be accessed through a secret passageway, and Rayon said that he had gotten this information from Limerick. Dorian said that there was an explanation for this because there was a casino in the black market. Wearing black robes to hide in the crowd, Dorian and Rayon went to the black market. Dorian looked around and said that the market was huge and cleaner than the one on the surface. He asked Rayon if he thought there was something he was looking for. Taking out a book, Rayon said that to do that he needed to check the auction catalog. Opening the book, Rayon saw the black butterfly and the spike and said he knew he could find it here. Looking in the book, Dorian said that it was an expensive item. Rayon thought he could spend all the money he had saved, but it was too risky. Rayon got up and decided that he would have to find a pawn shop to get some money. An hour later, Dorian asked why Rayon was considering other items to go to the auction. Rayon decided to look around because there was still time before the auction, and he had some extra money. Usually these places are full of undervalued treasures that are just waiting for the right buyers. Rayon decided it was time for them to move out. Suddenly, Rayon noticed the ring of the first head of the Sieghart family. He had seen it in the memories that popped into his head after he had learned the technique of the lights. Rayon picked up the ring and asked the merchant what its price was. The merchant began to say that the ring could increase strength and purify the mind. When the merchant said the price was 5 gold coins, Dorian screamed who the hell they thought they were, and apparently thought they were fooling them. He shouted that it was obvious to a fool that they had bought the ring for a couple of silver coins. Slamming the table, Dorian told him to listen. Dorian began to tell him, raising his index finger, that if such an effect cost 5 gold pieces, the ring would be in a store instead of here. Dorian finished his lecture and said that the ring was worth 1 gold piece. Rolling his eyes at the haggling, the salesman said they could take it. Dorian looked around and gave a thumbs-up wink to Rayon. The spirit behind him said that the ring was indeed a secret and asked if he felt like Dorian had changed. Suddenly, Rayon was called out. He turned around and saw a girl asking if they had already paid for the ring. The girl with the guards said she would give Rayon 10 times the original price, whatever it was, and asked him to sell the ring to her. She also added that by Rayon's appearance, you could tell that he was an adventurer in dire need of money. The merchant, meanwhile, shouted that he had bought the ring for 50 silver pieces and that it wasn't that valuable. He was telling Rayon that she had to agree, for she was willing to buy this trinket for 10 times its value. Holding the box in his hands, Rayon thought that this girl knew the true value of the ring, and judging from her tone, the ring was worth at least 100 gold coins. Turning away, Rayon said that he didn't like selling his things, and he wouldn't sell the rings no matter how much she offered. The guard girl said she had no idea where Rayon had come from, but they advised him to watch his mouth, and Rayon asked if they thought he should change his mind just because of her origin, and added that he didn't care about such things. In response, the girl told Rayon not to treat her like that and demanded to give her the ring. Rayon asked if she just wanted to brag about her origins before she left, or if she had something else to say. The girl said that Rayon had no idea how ugly the world could be and asked her to think about why people bow down to someone. Rayon turned away and said that if she was done, he should go. Turning to Setoru, the girl said that they were going to the auction immediately because if he came here, he would be participating in the auction. The girl said that she would get what Rayon was going to buy no matter what it cost her. With a wave of his hand, the auctioneer shouted that Datha's necklace had a price of 70 gold coins. Sitting with his arms folded, Rayon thought that there had been nothing interesting so far and decided that maybe they weren't going to exhibit the black butterfly. And so the auctioneer said that the lot was now a majestic black butterfly that feeds on mana stones. Because of their eye-catching and subtle shimmer, these butterflies are often used as a decorative element. These butterflies have a short lifespan and extremely high maintenance costs as they feed exclusively on stones. When it came to the bidding, Rayon raised his hand and called a price of 3,000 gold coins. In Raon's opinion, such a high bid should discourage others from fighting further. Even 13 gold coins for an ornamental butterfly is a lot. Someone behind Raon raised his hand and bid 50 gold coins. The auctioneer shouted that it was the highest bid in their history. The butterfly was sold and the girl turned around and told Sitar that they were leaving if he didn't want to buy anything else. The girl was sure that the guy had come here solely for the butterfly. Behind Rayon's back, Dorian was yelling that it was the same girl and she wasn't even trying to hide her evil intentions. And Rayon told Dorian not to worry, but to go outside and buy some clothes for night traveling. Pulling up his hood, Rayon said he was going to steal a butterfly from this girl. All the best mercenaries on the continent had individual characteristics, whether it was speed, lightness, or accuracy that were their virtue. In his past life, Rayon was the most stealthy of them all. Now he stood and peeked around the corner. The secret lies in a special technique called Bistan steps that Rayon was using at the time. 10 minutes ago, Dorian brought the clothes to Rayon and they both got dressed. Rayon asked if Dorian had managed to find out anything about the masked girl. Dorian scratched his head and Rayon asked why he hesitated. And Dorian told Rayon that he thought they should stop, because the locals said that this girl was Princess Jaina of the Kingdom of Balkar. She has shown an incredible talent for magic since she was a child. Besides, she has the skill of evaluating magical items, which makes her more valuable. Spreading his hands, Dorian said that he was sorry to admit, but this time it was really better for them to retreat. Pulling on his gloves, Rayon said that they just had to do a further evaluation of the items they had purchased. And Rayon said that the easiest way to steal the butterfly was to steal it now. While it was still in the possession of the black market, Dorian shouted for him to stop. Looking around the corner, Rayon thought that they hadn't delivered the goods to her yet, just as he'd hoped. The auctioneer looked at the butterfly and told him that it had been bought for 50 gold pieces, adding that he could never understand the rich no matter how hard he tried. The black butterfly was still here. The auction staff was still here, but at the moment they were busy playing cards. Black butterflies are usually kept in bird cages because they can die in an enclosed space. Due to the fact that these butterflies like to sit on magical combs and absorb pure mana from them, the moment it feels the mana of the Thousand Fires technique, which is much purer than that of the stones, it will want to break out of the cage. When the butterfly landed on Raon's hand, he smiled and thought to himself. Suddenly, the auctioneer noticed that the butterfly was gone. He jumped up and started shouting where it had gone. His partner thought it had disappeared. They rushed to look for it, but Rayon was already rushing back with a bag in his hand. Walking down the corridor, Dorian thought that if Rayon was caught, this could turn into a diplomatic scandal with the Kingdom of Balkar. He felt like his heart was about to stop. Grabbing his head, Dorian screamed why he didn't stop him. Rayon was already behind him. Turning around, Dorian shouted how long Rayon had been standing there. Rayon replied that he had just arrived, and Dorian was acting as if he had seen a ghost. Pointing to the pouch next to his belt, Rayon smiled and said he had it all worked out. Dorian couldn't believe it. Just as Rayon said it was time for them to go back to their room, Jaina appeared in front of them, saying that this was a very unusual meeting. She asked how Rayon was feeling and if he was upset. She added that he had probably realized it during the auction, but he couldn't beat her. Jaina also said she was willing to give him the black butterfly in exchange for the ring. Rayon replied that she was deaf and he wouldn't sell her the ring. Jaina said that Rayon was unable to understand the kindness of others and asked if he wanted to leave the market in pieces. An auctioneer ran into the hallway and called out to my lady. Jaina turned around and asked if he could see that she was talking. The employee started yelling that the black butterfly was gone and someone must have stolen it. Jaina's eyes widened and Rayon smirked. He said it looked like she was in trouble and Jaina immediately knew it was him. A smirk and a sarcastic remark, just as she usually did to others. Turning to him, Jaina said that at first she thought it was all about the high-mindedness, but it turned out that Rayon was just a pathetic thief. Taking off her mask, Jaina told him that she was a princess from the Kingdom of Balkar. She frowned and asked how Rayon dared to treat her like that. Sethar stepped forward and Jaina said that she would make sure that this theft would be Rayon's last. She ordered Sethar to deal with Rayon and he raised his fist. Rayon clenched his fist in response and said that he didn't care if she was Princess Balkar or anyone else. He punched Sethar and he coughed up blood and fell to the floor while Rayon was throwing punches. Jaina was screaming her head off. She asked Sethar if he couldn't even defeat such a pathetic mercenary. Suddenly, a man familiar to Rayon appeared in the hallway who recognized him and Jaina Greer. Jaina looked at him and asked him if he knew this man. Greer reminded her of a brilliant swordsman from the Sigurd family, and he was him. The Sigurds are a faction under the Northern King of Destruction. Come to think of it, Jaina had heard that the Northern King had the same blonde hair and red eyes. As Jaina stood there with her mouth open, Raon asked her what she called him a miserable thief. Without letting her say a word, Raon said he could take that as an accusation from Balkar towards the Seaghards. Walking up to Jaina, Raon said that he was giving her one last chance. She should apologize to him, and then he would consider the incident as just a mistake of the princess. Jaina clenched her teeth as she listened to Raon say that he would create an official protest against the Balkars. Bowing her head, Jaina began to say that she was sorry, and generally asked to be forgiven. Turning away, Raon said that he didn't want to escalate the situation, so he suggested to end it there. Raon also advised Jaina to watch her behavior from now on, for she did not want to disgrace her kingdom. Sitting down at the table with Greer, Raon said that he had avoided false accusations, and Greer was glad to hear that. Greer scratched his head and said not to worry about Jaina, and added that he would try to talk some sense into her. Raon thanked him for his concern. Greer then asked what had brought Raon to Camelin, and added that he had recently arrived here on a mission. Raon said that they were on their way to the graduation exam site, and decided to stop here to buy some gear. When Greer asked what they were looking for, Raon said he was looking for a sword, although his current one wasn't too bad, but he had used it enough. Greer said that there was a workshop at the corner of the Western Craft District, and he would like to introduce Raon to the blacksmith in person, but he couldn't because of the mission. Greer stood up and headed for the exit, saying that he had to go, and that he would wait for Raon's visit to Orvin. Raon replied that he would be sure to stop by after the final exam. Dorian breathed out that they were saved and said that he hadn't thought Raon would be so reckless, but he reminded him that he had a plan. Putting on his backpack, Dorian asked if they were going to go straight to the workshop. He replied that they would go there tomorrow, but for now he had work to do. Sitting down on the bed in his room, Raon took the butterfly and pulled out one stone. He told the black butterfly that it was time for some work. The black butterfly feeds on mana but is unable to absorb it. The Teuton flower cannot collect mana. When the two meet, they are able to rid each other of their curses. The Teuton flower is forced to store the mana collected by the black butterfly to finally become an elixir of the highest grade of energy harnessing. People who know about it are rare, but Raon himself only knows about it from memories obtained through the fire technique. When Raon swallowed the flower, one of the loops of livid cold disappeared. Energy, willpower, and other characteristics of Raon were increased. Looking at the system window where the main characteristics were, Raon smiled and looked at his hand. In the morning, Raon told Dorian that it was time to go to that workshop. As he looked after Raon, Dorian wondered how it was possible that the Lord's spirit and aura had been greatly enhanced in just one night. Dorian wondered how Raon managed to concentrate on his training despite the fact that everyone else looked down on him. But as he got to know Raon better, Dorian realized that he was more worthy of the Seaghards name than anyone else on the 5th training ground. That's why even though they were now separated, all the students of the 5th training ground decided to fight for Raon. Dorian thought that if he could get the young master's help, he could solve his family's problem. Closing his eyes, Dorian began to think that following Raon was not the reason, and asked himself to stop dreaming. Looking at Dorian, Raon said that when they took the sword from the workshop, they should leave immediately. Smiling, Dorian thought he should focus on getting stronger under the young lord's leadership. Running to catch up with Raon, Dorian said he was on his way, and thought he would be fine as long as he was with him. Entering the shop, Raon said he had come here on Sir Greer's recommendation. The sitting blacksmith did not even turn around and simply clarified that he was the 3rd prince of Orvin. Dorian and Raon froze when they saw him. Raon came closer and said that Prince Greer said that his workshop could be trusted. The blacksmith asked if Greer had really recommended his workshop to someone. Looking at Raon, the blacksmith saw that this boy was so young but had already surpassed Greer. He told Raon that his pressure was very different from that of the 3rd prince and asked if Raon was a Seaghard. Raon didn't understand how the blacksmith knew that. The spirit behind Raon said that true blacksmiths can tell a person's origins with just a glance, and some can even determine skills. The blacksmith kept saying that he had seen countless swordsmen in his life, but this was the first time he had seen one like Raon. In response, Raon apologized for not apologizing and introduced himself, and Dorian also gave his name. The blacksmith said his name was Kubrad, and he was just an old man who kept swinging his hammer, because he had nothing else to do. Raon knew that Kubrad was the father of countless masterpieces owned by the Orvins and the Balkars, a man whose name is known throughout the continent. Before them was Kubrad, Jate, and Raon had never thought he would meet him in such a secluded workshop. Kubrad asked what had brought them to him. Raon said he needed a good sword for the journey ahead. Kubrad asked if he wanted him to forge a new sword for him. Raon replied that not really, because he had not yet become a full swordsman. He had already been promised to forge his first sword. Kubrad asked if it was about Balkan. Raon replied that it was. Kubrad laughed and exclaimed that he knew that Balkan was back on the case, and added that it was because he had promised to forge Raon a sword. Kubrad then said that they could have whatever they wanted. Dorian asked if he could choose his own weapon. Looking at the swords, Raon thought that these weapons were truly worthy of the title of one of the best blacksmiths on the continent. Raon also thought that he could choose any of these swords and they would not disappoint him. In the barrel, Raon saw a sword that interested him and approached it. Dorian said that the swords were amazing, and his eyes were running wild, and he didn't even know which one to choose. Kubrad said that he had forged them. Suddenly, Kubrad felt energized and turned around and saw Raon with the sword from the basket in his hand. When he saw this, he shouted for Raon to take any of the swords immediately. Dorian didn't understand what had happened, and Kubrad said it was a possessed sword. He said they should knock the sword out of Raon's hands before it was consumed by the monstrous energy. Dorian said there was no need. Looking at Raon again, Kubrad wondered how it was possible that no matter how much energy came out of that sword, it couldn't get near him. Meanwhile, the spirit was screaming at the sword, how dare it target a body that was already possessed by the king of the underworld. He yelled for the sword to know its place and not to even try to absorb Raon, or it would freeze him and shatter him. Raon picked up the sword and told the spirit to stop because it was not his property, and this blade could not swallow him anyway. Kubrad came up to him and asked if Raon was alright. He said yes and asked if this blade was not an ordinary weapon, but what was it? Kubrad frowned and said that the sword was a mistake, and he didn't know if Raon had heard him or not, but this blade was possessed. He said that once upon a time there was a small village in the south called Lilac. The villagers served Othello's sacred tree. The village was a peaceful corner of fragile and kind people who relied on each other. But one day the village was attacked by members of the White Blood cult. Their fanatics massacred half the villagers, and the other half were supposedly kidnapped. But that's to be expected. In the end, there were no survivors in Lilacs. Kuberad learned of the incident sometime later. He took a branch from Othello's tree and forged a sword. He did this to pray for the repose of the souls of the dead. The moment the dagger was completed, its blade and hilt turned red. It had absorbed all the hatred of the Lilacs, though Kuberad had hoped otherwise. He had kept it because no one could deal with it. Rayon closed his eyes and felt the memories of the Lilacs flow into him through the dagger. Their hatred and resentment, their pain and sorrow, they met such a horrible end because of the slaying of the White Blood cult. Rayon said that time was short, so he could not promise that he would be allowed to help him exact his revenge. He told the sword that if he had to face the White Blood, he would help them. Kuberad then saw that the monstrous energy of the dagger had faded, and perhaps it recognized Rayon as its master. Rayon picked it up and said that it was a dagger forged to comfort the souls of the dead, and called it the Dagger of the Memorial. As they left, Rayon thanked Kuberad for providing them with excellent blades. Kuberad said he was honored when a sword was used by a master. Finally, Rayon said that they would prepare a warm welcome if he decided to visit the Seaguard family. Kuberad said that he would rely on Rayon. As he watched them go, Kuberad pondered what he thought Rayon was just a child with a remarkable talent, but he had managed to master a terrifying blade and become its master. Kuberad knew that Rayon had the potential to achieve something greater, and thought that the name of the Seaguards would once again be heard around the world. The boys moved north for several days, leaving Camelin behind. Their surroundings became a field of snow. By the time they got used to the monotonous scenery, they had finally arrived. The boys had finally reached Castle Haban, the location of their final exam. Covering his face with his hand, Dorian asked what that smell was. The spirit shouted that it was the air of the battlefield that made him feel alive. Looking at him, Rayon asked why Dorian was like this when they finally arrived, reminding him that there had been no hardship on the journey. Sweat rolled down Dorian's face, and he looked at Rayon and shouted, asking if he was serious. He said it was getting colder and colder as they approached Theban Castle, but Rayon said it was important to keep moving when he complained. From Dorian's words, Rayon constantly commented on his sword stand from morning until evening, except when they were on the road. He said he couldn't sleep the whole trip because of it, and Rayon really thinks it's okay to say it wasn't difficult. The spirit said that the fool was right the first time and should be trained wisely. He added that the king of the underworld couldn't rest because of Rayon either. A man came out to them and asked if they were the mercenaries who were supposed to arrive, and added that they had arrived later than planned. The man introduced himself as Tarion, and he is the deputy commander of this castle, and the commander of Rayon and Dorian, who would lead them from now on. Getting closer, Rayon said he was looking forward to working with him. Looking at Dorian, Rayon said not to worry because these things happen. Dragging Dorian by his backpack again, Rayon told him to get up and walk by himself. Dorian asked to go home. As he passed by, Rayon looked around and thought that the situation here was even worse than he had heard. The walls showed signs of much destruction and rebuilding, and the inhabitants looked exhausted. The smell of blood and the stench of burning bodies permeates the castle. It's consistent with the information Judiel had given him beforehand. It was unlikely that she had been here before, but Judiel had really managed to figure it all out in such a short time. She decided she hadn't seen them here, but she was curious about the mercenaries. Her grandfather looked back at her and asked what she was doing, and reminded her that they had to go prepare for the opening of the store. Meanwhile, Tarion warned the commander that he was coming into the office. He said that he had brought the previously mentioned mercenary. To be more precise, the trainees from Sieghard, Rayon, and Dorian entered the room and saw a gray-haired old warrior man behind the desk. It was the commander of the castle, Milland Bryden. He greeted the trainees and introduced himself. Looking at him, Rayon thought he knew they were from Sieghard, and this man is the famous Milland Bryden. He is called the Giant of the North. He is the protector who has been guarding Castle Haban for over 20 years. The spirit said that from the look on Milan's face, he is a true general, and he hasn't seen one in a long time. Rayon clarified, the spirit feels it too. Milland said that only the people in this room know the information about their identities, and their status will be hidden from the others. He added that he was also aware of the reason why Limer sent them here, adding that he probably hoped they would gain a lot of experience. Locking his hands together, Milland leaned forward and said that there would be no training or lessons here. There would be no instructors or warm dinners with beds. All there was here was endless battles and cold wind penetrating the bones. Milland also added that if they were looking for a comfortable life, they could leave now. Dorian was pleased and clarified that they could indeed leave. Rayon raised his hand and interrupted him, saying that they had come here to become stronger and would accept any battle or situation. Milland responded by saying that he liked their attitude and would be watching to see how long Dorian lasted. Milland then said that their rank from now on is soldiers, and they start at the lowest rank. Turning to Charles, Milland asked to add them to the 3rd Scout group, and they should do all kinds of jobs. Passing by, Charles told Rayon and Dorian that they were leaving and therefore they should follow him. When they came out, Tarion said that he didn't like the two of them, and Milland asked what he didn't like. He said that one of them limped out of fear and the other was too relaxed, as if he had come here to have fun. Tarion was sure that instead of being helpful, they would only cause trouble. Tarion also noticed that Rayon wore a flower bracelet on his wrist and he didn't see him as a warrior. But Milland said he understood what Tarion was talking about, but that you shouldn't judge people by their appearance. He said they went through all the training of the Seaghards, who are known for their brutality before coming here, and they are not as naive as they seem. According to Milland, the decision can be made after observing their behavior, but for now, Tarion should just keep an eye on them. Milland also said that he didn't understand why they asked to send information about those two every 2 weeks. Tarion said that Limer had asked for it, but Milland replied that the letter was sent from Lord Sieghardt's estate. This surprised Tarion. Approaching the table, he asked if it was a personal request from the Northern King of Destruction. Milland said it was the first time he had ever received such a request. He said that the king had asked him to describe everything in datelines. Milland summarized that he didn't know what the King of Destruction was thinking. When Rayon entered the chambers, he saw Dorian pointing at the room and asked when he had time to decorate it so well. And he replied that he had done it while Rayon was in the bathroom. It amazed Rayon. He was sure that literally just now this room had been very dark and dirty. As he approached the curtains, Rayon asked where Dorian had gotten all these things from. Dorian replied that he had prepared them in advance. Hearing the sound, Rayon turned around and told Dorian not to say he had brought different colors. Dorian, showing him the fabrics, said it was a necessity. Patting herself on the bag on her stomach, Dorian smiled and asked, maybe Rayon what else Rayon needed. Rayon looked at it with round eyes, not realizing what it was. A young man came into the room and asked if the recruits had already unpacked their belongings. He introduced himself as Raiden, the leader of the third group they were assigned to, and asked them to get ready to leave. Raiden said that they had been ordered to move out and smiled, saying that he understood they were having a hard time since they had just arrived. Looking at Limer standing in front of him, the head asked what brought him here today. Limer said cheerfully that he had learned that the head had hired shadow agents to investigate what Rayon was doing. The head thought that Lowen must have told him about it because he had been whispering behind his back with him a lot lately. Lemur began to tell how Rayon had managed to grow and consume the Teuton flower, and had managed to teach the princess the head didn't approve. In response, Lemur said that stealing might be a problem, but the princess was the provocateur and Rayon was just responding in kind. Suddenly, the head said that the fun was over because he had ordered the shadow agents to retreat. Limer shouted and asked why. The head explained that he had sent the agents as a precaution against interference from other houses and had ordered them to return. And Limer cheerfully said that the head must have requested a report from Castle Haben. The head turned to look sternly at Lowen, and the latter shouted that he hadn't. And Limer said that the head was wrong to accuse Lowen because it was clear that he would contact the castle and asked why the head should not tell Round that he was the best. With a wink, Limer said that if the head did so, the misunderstanding with the annexes would be resolved and it would make him happy. Standing up, the head interrupted Lemur's chatter and said that apparently the last lesson wasn't enough. Lemur said that he would be leaving. Rubbing his fist, the head said that this time he would make sure that Limer's body learned its lesson. Again, the deafening scream of Lemur was heard in the chapter house, which brought the chapter to its feet. Turning back, Round looked around and thought he heard a scream. The third squad arrived at Mount Stalin. Raiden said that since the monsters of the North Sea and the Snow Mountains appear here together, this place is called Hell. Rodin said that the view from here was incredible and that it was a pleasure to watch, and Rayon also said that it was really beautiful. Rodin went on to say that they would check it out before they went out on a reconnaissance mission, because they needed to realize how good Rayon and Dorian were. Rodin stopped near the trail and asked whose trail they thought it was, and Dorian said that it was a big trail and that it might be the trail of an ice troll. Thinking about it, Rayon replied that it didn't look like a troll. Dorian even opened his mouth. Rayon sat down and said that troll footprints are like human footprints, and they are deeper. But these footprints belong to an animal that moves on all fours. This led Rayon to conclude that these tracks belonged to a mountain goat. Kari Radin was even surprised that Rayon had realized it all at once. Turning to Rayon, Radin asked if he could tell how long ago the tracks had been left. Rayon said that it was about 12 hours ago. Radin asked what it was. Rayon replied that the marks had been left by a direwolf. After touching the scratches, Rayon said that direwolves mark their territory with their strong claws, leaving marks on rocks or trees. And Rayon added that this one was already dead. Radin asked how Rayon had realized this. He said that the mark was old and that he was probably already dead. Looking at Rayon, Raiden thought why that little brat was so easy. The new recruits who join their squad are hazed. They're taught a provocative little lesson, which shows how useless their book knowledge is and how dangerous this place is. And now Radin didn't understand how Rayon knew all this, thinking that hazing shouldn't work that way. Turning to Dorian, Raiden shouted for him to answer what those tracks were and showed him the branch. Dorian asked why he was being dragged into this. Grabbing Dorian by the head, Raiden shouted that he was a petty jerk and didn't even know such a thing. Rayon walked away from them in the other direction. He decided to reconnoiter. Looking at his blade, Rayon thought that if he used it, he could see what was around. Rayon pulled out the dagger of the memorialist, which independently explores the area and reports the results through the transmission of ghostly energy. If you think about it, the same thing had happened on the way to the castle. Rayon had used the blade to harvest the extra pure energy from the monsters he had defeated. Behind Rayon's back, the spirit shouted that he was a moron and asked him what he was doing, and then reminded Rayon of the legendary sense technique. Looking at the spirit, Rayon replied that he respected how hard he was working on his behalf, and added that there was no reason to use his ability. But the spirit shouted that this technique was a fraction of the Underworld King's power, and it was many times better than the terrible energy of this blade. Rayon asked how he knew it was better, and the spirit shouted that it was obvious since he was the Underworld King. Rayon turned away and said he understood. Roaring, the spirit asked how dare he ignore it, and what kind of arrogance it was, but Rayon replied that what was more important was that it was the spirit's ability. He was always looking for opportunities to take over his body, and who knows what side effects might be waiting for him. The spirit replied that Rayon needn't worry about that because the technique he would teach him would allow him to use the cold energy inside. The spirit said that the king of the underworld would personally teach Rayon how to use cold energy, which is superior to the trick Rayon uses now. After hearing all this, Rayon thought the matter had taken an unexpected turn. Rayon sat down in the forest and concentrated. The spirit flew nearby and said that this technique was called Glacier, and that ordinary people could not learn it. He said that with Rayon's little talent, it would take a huge amount of effort and time to learn it. According to the spirit, Rayon needs to fuse the cold energy within himself with the coldness that covers the earth. He needs to maintain this state and look at his cold energy. The spirit asked what it looked like. Rayon said that it merged with the snow. And the spirit replied that this is only a superficial view and it is not about snow at all. The two cold energies are merging with each other. The important point is that Rayon needs to harmonize his cold energy with that which covers the surrounding area. You need to visualize them connecting on their own, not Rayon connecting them. Once this is done, he will be able to sense even distant terrain and see it as if it were right in front of him. The weight of the cold of this land would become Rayon's eyes, ears, and skin. The world around him slowed down. And Rayon realized that he was slowing down. His body became heavy, but Rayon's senses were heightened to a frightening level. He saw Dorian being mauled by Raiden. As the direwolf successfully completed the hunt, Rayon saw it clearly. Instead of just sensing their presence, Rayon could even find out what they were doing. He thought it was absurd. But the range is too small and the state Rayon can maintain for a short time. It must be because he is doing it for the first time. Feeling something, Rayon came running to the head of intelligence, Radin. He turned around and asked what was wrong, and Rayon told him that the shark moles underground were headed this way. Radin said that monsters like them wouldn't have caught up with them here because this was the territory of the monsters of Mount Stalin, and there were no tremors. But Rayon continued to say that they were definitely heading this way, and at that moment, there was an explosion behind him. He and Dorian turned around and saw a huge shadow covering them. In front of them stood the giant shark monsters. Now Raiden was convinced that they had really come here.